Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If Guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei Got Harem with Kendo Girls. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Issei Hayato, a middle school student that recently begun his third year, had just gotten his acceptance notice from Kyo Academy in the mail. Rumors of this particular school-going co-ed had spread throughout the region like wildfire. The school director had been interviewed as to what the new direction for the school would be. The director had told the reporter that, "We will make Kyo Academy into a school that people around the world will seek out. We will strive to educate and train our students to become the very best in their respective fields of study. So for the coming school year, we will have a test group of 50 eligible male students attend." Issei and his two best friends, Matsuda and Motohama, immediately applied. Fantasies filled their heads about being surrounded by beautiful girls that would fawn over them and grant their carnal desires. The entry requirements had never been made public. They only said that a physical exam would take place as well as a written exam. That fact had made both of Issei's friends' faces pale. Matsuda was a former athlete in their second year, but joined the photography club and openly announced being a lollican, but his grades were horrible. Motohama was the exact opposite. His grades were well above average, but his physical capabilities were as weak as Matsuda's grades. So if either of them wanted to get into their personal paradise, they would need to make immediate improvements. Issei was almost on par with Matsuda in physical strength, and his grades weren't that far behind Motohama, so his chance to get into the school seemed to be the highest out of the three. The trio had discussed what would happen if any one of them failed to meet the requirements and be denied entry. "If I don't make it, one of you guys has to put a loli in your harem," Matsuda exclaimed to his two friends. "You have to find the girl with the best 3 sizes and conquer her heart." Motohama said he had developed an ability that would allow him to accurately gauge the size of any girl just from looking at them. He was also the biggest eroge fan of the three. Issei, on the other hand, wanted something a bit more wholesome, should his entry be looked over. "If I can't get in, it will be your duty to protect the girls from rapey douchebags." For the better part of a decade, Issei had become quite the pervert, but one thing had always remained a core part of who he was. If someone needed help, Issei would put his all into helping them, and never asking for a reward. And Issei made sure to never lie to anyone. He always wore his heart on his sleeve. Aside from his dreams of having a harem, Issei had always liked the idea of being the knight in shining armor, saving the damsel in distress and winning her over. But Issei's school years thus far have made it abundantly clear that the girls saw him as a pervert, and no matter how nice he was to any of the girls at his school, they never took the time to really get to know him. Issei was jumping for joy. He was one of the lucky 50 guys to be allowed into Kyo Academy. He had to see if his friends had gotten their letters yet. Issei took out his cell phone and sent a group message to his buddies. "Yo, you guys get your acceptance letters from Kyo, cause guess what I got in the message read." Issei was eagerly waiting for a response from either of them, and after an hour or so had gone by while he was watching TV, finally his phone gave him the news. Matsuda's read "No go bro, rejected like a saggy stripper equals." Issei was sad that the trio would be broken up, but there was still hope for Motohama. Right just as Issei was about to put his phone down, Motohama's message came through. Motohama's read "Today is a sad day, for I too was rejected." And just like that, the trio had informed that they would be broken up for the better part of 3 years. The thought of going to a school where he wouldn't have any friends by his side had sunken in over the course of a week, and it was starting to be intimidating. So Issei thought a walk through town to clear his head would calm his nerves a bit. Kyo Town, Shopping District, 8:30 p.m. Issei had been walking around for the greater part of 3 hours now, and the sun had set. Issei was walking through part of town that had small shops and restaurants lining the streets. He had stayed in the park in his neighborhood for over an hour, just sitting on the bench across from a water fountain. He sat there watching the kids play, and the parents sit nearby watching their children with a smile on their faces. Will I ever have that, Issei thought. So far that wasn't looking like a likely outcome. Granted, there was still plenty of time since he hadn't even started high school yet. Issei had long forgotten the reason he was walking around town by the time he left the park to continue his journey through town. Issei was taking notice of how empty the streets had become. It was strange. He could have sworn that people were usually walking around still at this time. Whatever, it was probably just his imagination. Passing by a cafe, Issei stopped at the window of a manga shop. He was just mindlessly looking through the glass, staring at a few of the new editions that had arrived within the past week, but not really taking notice of them at the same time. "I wonder, will we still hang out like we do now, or will we drift apart since we'll be at different schools?" If that happened, Issei would be down to 0 friends, just like he was before he met them when his only other friend at the time had moved out of the country. Well, whatever. I should probably go home now. First day of break before Kyo. The past few months had been stressful for the young boy. Since Matsuda and Motohama had failed to get into Kyo, they had to scramble to get accepted into a different school, and so they spent most of their time at a nearby cram school. Luckily, they had been accepted into the same school not too far away from Kyo. Issei had been looking for something to do to relieve his boredom as well as the growing anxiety from this whole new school and no friends deal. His teacher suggested working out and said that it could be therapeutic on a weary mind. So Issei took the advice to heart and started with running for the first few weeks, before finding that he actually enjoyed it, so he decided that he would add in some weight training as well. Issei had seen some improvements in his strength and endurance, as well as learned a few things about himself. He noticed after his first week that he didn't get as sore as other people would claim he should. His appearance hadn't really changed. The only difference was that the small muscles he did have were slightly more defined on his relatively scrawny 15-year-old body. Issei had decided that his morning run would be to Kyo Academy, so he could get a feel of the campus. A picture popped into his head about girls and changing in the locker room as he accidentally stumbles in, and being piled on by said girls. A grin spread across his face as he jogged towards the school that he would soon study at. Kyo Academy. Issei stopped at the gates of the school to catch his breath and wipe the sweat off of his forehead. Issei took in the sight of the school, a tall 3-story brick building with a classic architecture style. He could see a few girls walking on the campus in uniforms that seemed to be for the Kendo club, judging by the shinai in each of the girls' hands. Walking past the gates and towards the main building, Issei didn't notice the girls in the Kendo uniforms that were trying to interrogate him as to why a boy was on their campus due to the headphones in his ears and music he had playing. Issei walked up to what looked like some sort of training hall and was about to enter to see what was inside when something lightly struck his left shoulder. Issei flinched at the sudden hit and quickly turned while taking a step to his right to get away from whatever struck him, only to see a group of 7 girls in the Kendo uniform glaring at him suspiciously. This doesn't look good, Issei thought. One of the girls pointed to her ear, trying to communicate to Issei for him to take out the headphones. Issei didn't understand the gesture and stood there with his head tilted to the side for a few seconds as he took in the appearances of the girls that had stopped him. It took all of his willpower to not pass out from excitement. All of the girls in front of him were gorgeous. 5 of them seemed older, while the 2 that were directly in front of him looked about his age, so probably incoming students just like him. One of the younger girls had pink shoulder-length hair held back with a white band, brown eyes with a hint of red in them. She had to be a C-cup already with a thin waist. She reminded Issei of Motohama's favorite porn star, Momo Mamazono. The other girl had longer brown hair that reached mid-back in a ponytail with a red ribbon, bangs just above her eyes, the sides of which were longer and reached level. She had light brown eyes, just like Issei. Her chest was a little bit bigger than her pinker companions, but her body was just as stellar. While Issei was mentally undressing each of the girls, the pink-haired one reached and yanked the headphones from his ears with a glare on her face, clearly annoyed that he wasn't responding to them. Issei flinched a little from the force of his earbuds being ripped out, and rubbed his right ear briefly, then looked at the angry group of girls. "You, what are you doing here? This is an all-girls school," the pink-haired girl said while still glaring at Issei. Issei looked at the group. The 5 older girls had taken a step back to see how their new club members would handle the situation and step in if needed. The brown-haired girl was holding her shinai at the ready in case the boy in front of her tried anything on them. Issei was a little confused by the all-girls school comment. Had they not heard about Kyo going co-ed? I was just out for a run and wanted to check the place out since he'll be starting here next semester. Issei stuttered out, hoping not to meet the wrong end of the wooden sword anytime soon. But he just couldn't help himself. His eyes kept wavering from their eyes to their chests, and it didn't go unnoticed by the girls in front of him. The brown-haired girl was the one who spoke up this time, while covering her chest with her hand that didn't have the shinai, and slightly turning the front of her body away from Issei's gaze. "So you're one of the 50 perverts being let into the school?" After saying her piece, she scowled at the boy and awaited his answer. Just great, they haven't even been to the first day of school, and I'm already ousted, Issei thought. And without his friends here, there was no escaping the wrath of these girls. Issei needed to find a way to placate the female sword-wielders in front of him, so they don't try and beat him into submission. But he turned into a stuttering mess, and found himself unable to really say anything before being cut off by the pink-haired girl. She gave him a lecture that silenced him immediately, bringing back a memory of something his mother told him when he got his acceptance letter ... and caused Issei to ponder. "Yomai, really just wanted TTOC. Shut it, perv, we know why you're here. You probably had some stupid fantasy about taking advantage of the girls at this school. You didn't even last 10 seconds before eyeing us up. Guys like you are a plague. If you don't get yourself together, y'all just end up dying alone, and the world would be a better place without perverts like you in it." Issei was speechless. There wasn't anything he could think of to counter her harsh words, and Issei doubted she'd listen anyway. She had already labeled him as a pervert, just like the girls from his old school. And just like them, she wouldn't bother to give him the time of day or even learn his name. His face was downcast at that realization. Issei was starting in a school where he didn't know anyone, labeled as a pervert before the break was even over, and with the student body being overwhelmingly female. There was a good chance that Issei might not make any friends during his years here if he didn't make a change. Issei's mother had pretty said those exact words to him before. "Issei, if you don't learn to control yourself, y'all end up alone. Girls won't want to get to know you if they think you're only after their bodies." Issei's parents had been happy that he got into such an elite school, but they knew why he attempted it in the first place. His first year in middle school, Issei had really devolved into a pervert and pretty much nothing else. His parents had become increasingly disappointed in his behavior and did little to hide it. Sure, they still loved him, but his nature would always get him into trouble and gave him a bad name. And his parents by extension. The Kendo girls had apparently had enough and had turned to walk away before the voice of the boy they were belittling spoke up. His voice was barely loud enough for the two younger girls to hear. "You're right," Issei said quietly. The pink-haired girl and her brunette friend had been the only ones to hear him. The older girls kept walking, having not heard him, nor did they really care in the first place. His admission was surprising to them. The guys they had come across that acted in similar ways never admitted that the way they acted wasn't appropriate. They turned to face the boy, only to see him putting his headphones back in and walking towards the gate of the campus. Hayato home that evening. Issei finished his run after his confrontation with the Kendo girls. For the rest of his run, Issei had been lost in thought about how his new school life will go. "I wonder if they'd help me. It'd be nice to start school with at least one friend." Issei had been thinking about how he could rein in his perverted nature. His dad was pretty much out of the question to seek for advice. He knew his mother would be willing, but would her advice be useful for a high school student? Well, no harm in trying, I guess. After dinner, Issei had asked his mother if she could give him advice on how to control himself. She had been shocked at first, but was quickly replaced by happiness that her son might have a chance at a normal high school experience after all. They sat down with some drinks and talked for 2 hours about how to talk to and behave with a girl. She said that Issei should go back and talk to the Kendo girls again and ask for their help as well, since he'd be tempted around beautiful girls. Their help may be more beneficial and quicker to take hold, especially with those shinai. After the talk with his mom, Issei was laying in bed thinking about what she said and if the girls would even be willing. But it did sound like a good plan, and hopefully by the time school started, he'd befriend at least one of them and be able to get through school without the perv label plastered across his face. Kyo Academy gates the next day. Issei once again took his morning run to Kyo Academy, hoping to ask for the girls' help. Once he passed through the gates, he took out his headphones so they couldn't sneak up on him like the day before. Walking to the direction he saw them yesterday, he heard the sound of wood hitting wood and some grunts of exertion. Issei stood at the entrance of the building the noises were coming from. He was contemplating whether he should wait outside for them to take a break or go inside. Issei was a bit nervous, since they probably would think he was just there to stare at them, and that would probably lead to beatdown. But Issei was brought out of his thoughts by a familiar feeling. Something hard firmly pressed into his shoulder blade, and a familiar stern voice rang out from behind him. "What are you doing back here, perv?" It was the brunette that spoke to Issei. Issei took a deep breath. He was hoping that this would work. Letting the breath out, Issei turned around with his hands up. Just as he thought, it was the same two girls from yesterday. Had addressed them, but he hadn't caught their names yesterday. "Good morning. I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just wanted to talk to you too." The pink-haired girl didn't let him finish. She apparently didn't want to waste any time talking to him. "Talk to us about what," she said. She crossed her arms under her chest. Issei noticed how it pushed her ass up. It took all his willpower not to glance. The brunette lowered her wooden sword, but kept it at the ready in her right hand. Issei gulped. It was now or never. He took another deep breath. Letting it out, he bowed his head to the two girls. To say they were surprised was an understatement, and it showed on their faces. Their expressions turned to confusion once Issei spoke. "Please help me," he said with his head still lowered. He would hold this position as long as he needed to get them to understand he was serious. When the girls didn't answer after a few seconds, Issei continued, elaborating on what he was asking of them. "I don't want people to only see me as a pervert. I want people to feel comfortable and safe around me. I want to control my perverted urges. I'll do anything you ask. Please help me." The girls looked at each other, seemingly having a silent conversation between them. The girl with the shinai placed it under his chin and lifted, causing Issei to stand back up straight to look at them. Issei didn't know how they were going to answer, but he hadn't been hit by the sword yet, so that seemed like a good start. "What's your name?" the pink-haired girl asked. She uncrossed her arms and had them at her hips. Her face was unreadable, which was a little unnerving. "Issei Hayaudu," Issei said, not looking to change their seemingly calm but cautious demeanor. The pink-haired girl nodded and gestured to herself and the brunette next to her. "Imui katase. This is Kaori Murayama." "So, Hayaudu, are you serious about this?" Issei looked at the girls he now knew as Katase and Murayama and nodded. "I'm 100% serious. I know it probably won't be easy, but if you're willing to help me, I promise to give it everything I have," Issei said seriously. Katase and Murayama looked at each other, having another silent conversation. The way he left yesterday, saying that they were right about him, had confused them. They were expecting to all of the boys that enrolled in Kyo to be unruly perverts with no hope for salvation. But standing in front of them was a boy who wanted to be given a chance to prove he was worth getting to know. The girls nodded to each other with a smile. Then Murayama spoke. "All right, if you're serious, then we're willing to help you. But if you slip up, he'll beat you into the ground." Understood. Murayama's tone started sincere, but turned cold when she mentioned that she'd punish Issei for messing up. Issei's face showed how he felt about their answer. He had a radiant smile, extremely happy that they were willing to help. Issei nodded vigorously, then saluted to Murayama in a joking manner. Yes, Mom, understood. Issei stood at the gates of his school, mentally preparing himself to make a good first impression on his teacher and classmates. He had been throwing himself into his training, both physical and what murayama and katase referred to as his perv reversion training. The physical training had actually been enjoyable for him. It had become a way for Issei to clear his mind after the beatings and berating he got from the two girls when he messed up. Katase and Murayama had at first been pretty distant with Issei when they first started guiding him from his perverted ways. But after a month, they started to feel like real friends. They don't refer to him by his last name anymore, instead using I as his nickname from middle school. Issei himself didn't feel they'd like to be called by their first names, so he stuck to the last name, and they hadn't brought it up. As the new semester grew closer, the true natures of his two new friends came out to reveal themselves. Katase was usually a composed and polite girl, unless dealing with someone hostile or otherwise inappropriate, like a guy trying to peep into their locker room. Then she was assertive and aggressive. Murayama's was the real surprise though. Once she felt comfortable around Issei, she teased him whenever she thought he was glancing at her body, and would then smack him on the head with her shinai. Outside of her tendency to tease him, Murayama was a very easygoing girl. Issei looked around the school grounds taking notice of the students. The girls mostly wore the standard uniform, which consisted of a white button-down shirt with black vertical stripes, a black shoulder cape with white accents, a magenta skirt with white accents, a black corset and brown dress shoes. Issei enjoyed the look of the girls in their uniform, as well as how short the skirt was. With a gust of wind the skirt would shift just enough to catch a glimpse underneath. The male uniform was rather plain compared to the girls. They wore black dress pants, a white button-down shirt with the same black stripes, a black jacket with white accents and brown dress shoes. Issei wasn't a big fan of the standard way to wear the uniform. He instead chose to leave the jacket and button-down shirt open, with a red t-shirt underneath. Issei walked through the halls towards his classroom, class 1 degrees Celsius, on the first floor of the main building. He hadn't spotted anyone he knew yet, not even Katase and Murayama. He had noticed that some of the male students had already been beaten by some of the girls. Apparently the girls were very adamant about not letting any perverts slip through their fingers. Issei was very thankful for his reversion training as he saw the bruises his fellow male students had. Kyo Academy class 1 degrees Celsius. Issei was told by his teacher to stand outside the class until he was called. Being singled out like that made him really nervous. He had only spent a few seconds in the classroom before his teacher asked him to wait in the hall, but he noticed that he was the only male in his class. That fact would have made him giddy beyond belief before his training and witnessing the girls' brutality. But now, it only added to his anxiety. He'd be the center of attention for the girls to try and deduce his true nature. Issei could hear the teacher speaking to her students. Okay girls, I'm sure you're aware of the new initiative Kyo Academy has put in place. We now have a test group of male students to start to transition to a co-ed school. We are lucky enough to have one with us in our class. Come on in and introduce yourself. At the last part, Issei realized he was being called into the room and followed the directions of his teacher. Issei walked into the room and stood at the front, next to the teacher. Looking out to his classmates, Issei had one immediate thought: this is going to be harder than I thought. Issei scanned over the girls in his class, and most of them were beauties in their own right. Issei was going to be put to the test, and if he failed, he'd be shunned as a pervert once again. Issei wrote his name on the chalkboard. He took a long deep breath to calm himself before turning around. Alright, remember good first impression, maintain eye contact, no roaming eyes. Issei thought, taking lessons hard learned from his mother, Katase and Murayama. Issei looked back to his classmates, then introduced himself with a nervous smile. He was hoping that they hadn't caught on to how nervous he was feeling at being the center of attention for so many good-looking girls, even his teacher. Hello, my name is Issei Hayaudu. Issei mentally cursed himself for stuttering. That really didn't start out the way he wanted it to. So he cleared his throat to continue. A few of the girls giggled under their breath, but Issei still heard it. Good going, Issei. They're already laughing at you, idiot. I'm looking forward to get know each of you. Issei said his last part and bowed slightly to the class. His teacher had apparently picked up on his nervous demeanor, as did the class, and addressed the girls before assigning Issei to a seat. Okay girls, I'm sure Mr. Hayaudu here is a bit nervous at being so outnumbered, so be sure to be on your best behavior, the teacher said, much to Issei's dismay at being outed in front of the class. She then scanned the room to find a seat for her only male student. She spoke to Issei once he found one. Why don't you sit in between Ms. Hanakai and Ms. Kusaka? Momo, Reya, raise your hands please. Two girls raised their hands, each having a smile on their face. Once Issei saw the two hands rise, his face turned bright red, which made the girls openly giggle this time. The two girls the teacher referred to were both otherworldly beauties. The first had brown hair tied into two braids that reached her waist, light brown eyes that held a gentle look in them. Her figure, from what Issei could see, was top-notch. Is it a requirement to have supermodel looks to enroll here or something? Issei thought. The other girl was just as much of a looker. She had snow-white hair that reached mid-back, straight bangs at eyebrow level. Her eyes were a glacial blue that were absolutely captivating. It was honestly hard for Issei to look away. How the hell am I supposed to focus on class with those two next to me? Issei bowed to the teacher and walked to his seat, which was 2 rows from the back, in between Momo, who had the window seat on his left, and Reya on his right. Once he sat down, both girls smiled and leaned over to whisper to Issei before class started. Momo was the first to speak. "Hey there, just call me Momo. It's nice to meet you, Issei. Let us know if you need anything." Issei was still nervous from sitting next to these 2 girls, but wanted to make a good impression, so he opted for the friendly greeting. "Thanks, my friends all call me Eyes. It's to meet the both of you." The other girl next to Issei giggled. Apparently he was easy to read, and they could tell how nervous he was. And she spoke in a manner that Issei had been acquainted with from Murayama. "Nice to meet you, Eyes. Call me Reya. You seem a little overwhelmed. Do we make you nervous?" Reya said in a slight teasing whisper. At which Issei nervously rubbed the back of his head. He was surprised she called him by his nickname so quickly, but he actually preferred it. "I didn't expect there to be sitting between 2 beauty." Issei realized what he was about to blurt out and quickly clamped his mouth shut. That was close, hoping to correct himself before the girls caught on to what he was going to say. He spoke again. "I didn't expect to be the only guy in the class. I thought there'd be at least one other." Issei's hopes were quickly shot down as both girls openly laughed, not trying to hide it this time. Issei's face was once again as red as his shirt, so he decided to just take out the materials for his class and pay attention to the lecture. As Issei was gathering his materials, he missed the shared look between Momo and Reya as they nodded to each other. They were each sharing similar thoughts. Kaichu needs to meet him. Kyo Academy lunch break. Student council room. A few minutes before the lunch bell rang, Momo and Reya had left, claiming they had student council work to attend to, and they were now in said room with 4 other people. The first-year duo were standing in front of a desk, where Sona Shitori, the vice president of the student council, sat. Just next to Sona was her right hand and second in command, Tsubaki Shinra. On the sofa to the left of the room were the other 2 members, Tamo Meguri and Yura Tsubasa. Momo and Reya had just informed their king about the boy in their class, and the aura the boy emitted, which was that of a sacred gear holder. "And both of you are certain of this?" Sona questioned the 2 standing in front of her. They both nodded in response. Reya continued her explanation to the heiress about their peculiar classmate. "Positive, Kaichu. I could feel it the moment he stepped into the room, but when he sat next to us it was almost dominating. He doesn't seem to be aware of it either." Reya looked over to Momo to see if she agreed with her own assessment, to which Momo nodded and brought up questions for how to proceed next. "Kaichu, should we ask him to come here after class?" Sona had her elbows on the desk, arms propped up and fingers interlaced, resting her chin on them. She thought through the possibilities of approaching the boy so quickly. She wanted to be absolutely certain before bringing him into her headquarters. No mistakes could be made here. She decided on a different approach instead. "No, we don't want to draw attention to him or ourselves so soon into the semester. Do you know where he is now?" At the question, both Momo and Reya tilted their heads in thought, before one of other members in the room spoke up. A girl with blue shoulder-length hair, deep ocean blue eyes, and a tall slender frame that held an aura of calm confidence. "I saw him walk out with 2 of the new girls from the Kendo club towards the tree by the back of the gym." All occupants looked over towards the blue-haired girl, wondering just how she knew where the boy had gone since his actual classmates hadn't seen it themselves. Sona was going through the information provided by her servants, as well as the folder containing information of the boy in question. Then her queen and second-in-command spoke up for the first time since the arrival of their teammates. "Kaichu, is there any possibility of Lady Gremory already having claimed him for her own peerage?" Normally that would be a concern, but Sona was certain that her rival wouldn't have any stake in her prospect. But there was a pact between them that forbade either from stealing potential members from each other. While only a verbal agreement, they respected each other enough to never break it. So if Rias had taken notice of him, Sona would have heard about it. And since Rias wasn't at school today, nor had she been informed of her scouting Issei Hayao, he was fair game. This would be the only situation where Sona would possibly thank Lord and Lady Gremory for that ridiculous arranged marriage agreement. And should the testimony of her bishops be true, then she had a deal to present to Rias, one that would greatly benefit all involved. But it all hinged on how the interaction with Issei Hayao went. "No, Tsubaki, there isn't. Let's go meet this boy, shall we? Kyo Academy grounds. So Eyes, how's your first day going so far? I don't need to beat on you like the other pervs, do I?" Issei was sitting outside eating his boxed lunch with katase and Murayama. Murayama was already done and questioning Issei. Issei had a mouth full of food, so he just shook his head. Once he swallowed his food, he verbally responded. No need for that, thankfully. Things are good so far. It's a little overwhelming though." Issei responded. The 2 girls had noticed that Issei was an open book with how he felt pretty much all of the time. That was something that caused a good portion of the issues he's faced. It's okay not to say everything that's on your mind. That and lying are not the same thing. Both girls laughed at Issei saying he was overwhelmed. They both knew what he meant. Murayama calmed down and retorted in the teasing manner he had gotten accustomed to. "You're overwhelmed by all the beautiful girls around you." Instead of getting embarrassed, Issei just nodded and voiced his thoughts in his usual manner. "Yay, I'm starting to seriously think that only beautiful girls were allowed into this school," Issei said without thinking. Both katase and Murayama had a slight tinge of pink of their cheeks at the implication. They both knew that Issei thought they were good-looking. They had been able to work that out of him within the first week of them helping the boy. Issei brought them both out of their own thoughts, not realizing his words had any effect on them. So, how's your patrol of the male student body going so far? Katase held a mischievous smirk that Issei knew meant trouble as she spoke. We personally caught 8 this morning before school started. It's just like we thought, all these boys enrolled to try and screw around with the girls here. You should count yourself lucky eyes, and hopefully you won't be the one meeting the end of a shinai. Issei wasn't given the chance to respond to Katase. 2 new people made themselves known when the shorter of the 2 spoke. So the rumors of girls banding together are true. The trio sitting underneath the tree turned their heads to see who it was that spoke out of the blue. Katase and Murayama's faces lost almost all color as they saw who it was that made their way into the conversation. 2 of the most well-known girls at Kyo Academy. Issei turned to follow the line of sight of his 2 female friends. When he saw the 2 girls standing a few yards from where Katase and Murayama were, Issei was stunned silent. Issei unknowingly muttered his first thoughts. Beautiful. Issei's quiet words had escaped Katase and Murayama, so the threat of being beaten by their wooden swords was eliminated. However, it didn't escape the supernatural hearing of the 2 new arrivals. Sona and Tsubaki both heard Issei, but kept their stoic expressions. Sona was a strict-looking girl. She had black hair and a chin-length bob cut. Her eyes were violet that hid behind thinly rimmed glasses of the same color. Her skin looked unblemished, smooth. Her bust was modest, but not by any means underwhelming. Her face was perfectly symmetrical and set into an even expression, not giving any emotions away. The taller girl by her side had the same expression on her face. Her hair was black and silky, reached down to the back of her knees, and had split bangs. Her eyes were heterochromic, one being a light brown and the other a deeper violet than Sona's. Murayama and Katase had broken from the shock, greeted and slightly bowed their heads to the 2 that made themselves known. Hello, Vice President Shitori, pleasure to meet you. Hello, Vice President, what can we do for you? Sona briefly glanced to the girls, before setting her gaze back onto Issei. Tsubaki's had never left him. The moment they were within 15 feet of Issei, they could feel for themselves what Momo and Reya had been talking about. It was as if your whole body was being conquered, being told that you were nothing more than dust in the wind compared to the might of whatever Issei possessed. Sona knew more than ever that she needed this boy. Hello, pleasure to meet you as well. I've made it a point to meet with each of our new male students. My name is Sona Shitori, Vice President of the Student Council. This is Tsubaki Shinra, a fellow member of the Student Council. You are Issei Hayado, correct? Issei was surprised and a little concerned that anyone on the Student Council knew his name. Issei glances over to Katase and Murayama to see if they had any idea why these 2 girls would know his name, but they were as surprised as he was. But their expressions quickly turned to suspicion, thinking that Issei had done something wrong while they were apart. Instead of pleading his innocence, Issei made to greet the 2 student council members. Issei went to bow to them as his female companions had done, but was met with an outstretched hand from Sona. Issei took hold of it and shook as he introduced himself. I am Issei Hayado. It's a pleasure to meet you, Vice President Shitori and Ms. Shinra. I haven't caused any problems to have you seek me out directly, have I? Even though they said that they were meeting with all of the male students, the fact that they met with Issei only halfway through the first school day was a little concerning. Once their hands made contact with each other, the previously unblemished and pristine skin of Sona's face started to turn an ash-gray color, along with a cold sweat quickly sprouting. Sona's legs immediately felt weak, unable to hold up the weight of her body from what it was that she sensed within the boy in front of her. Ms. Shitori, Sona Kaichu Issei and Tsubaki both called out from the sudden weakness in her legs and started to fall forward. Losing her balance, Sona fell forward and tried to brace herself for impact onto the ground. Where she was expecting to find herself on the ground, she was instead met with the firm and gentle grip of Issei Hayado. She was surprised when she looked up to Issei's face and saw his expression. When Sona had gone through the info on Issei's past, there were many accounts of how his perverted tendencies had gotten him into trouble with 2 other students that he was friends with. What she saw at the moment was nothing like that. All she saw was a boy that was genuinely and honestly concerned for her well-being. That was not the person she expected to meet today. Momo and Reya had said that Issei had been a nervous wreck during his introduction that morning, seemingly trying to hide his overly honest and perverted nature from the rest of the girls in school. He saw a problem and looked to find a way to resolve it. I want this boy even more now. Those were the last thoughts before Sona was bombarded with the same energy she felt before while shaking Issei's hand, only this time it was 10x stronger from the added level of skin contact. And with that contact came an image that had Sona both awestricken and terrified. A red dragon, with eyes in emerald color so vibrant and powerful that half of the lower-class devil population would probably pass out just from a glance. With the close proximity to this aura, Sona passed out in Issei's arms. Line break. Kyo Academy Infirmary. Sona woke up in the infirmary of her school. Her violet eye fluttered open and took note of her surroundings. Seeing the medical type of environment and the sun still shining through the window, she knew exactly where she was and that it hadn't been too long since her conversation with Issei Hayado, such an intriguing person. Sona was absolutely certain of what she saw, a dragon of legend, one that helped cause devastation so great that the devils alone wouldn't have been able to bring it down by themselves. "Sona Kaichu, how are you feeling?" Tsubaki's concerned yet relieved voice could be heard from next to Sona's bed in the school infirmary. Sona turned to look at her queen, meeting her companion's mixed eyes with her own violet ones. A look that had only come across her face once made its way onto Sona. A smile that was both smug and exuded an amount of happiness that her childlike older sister would be hard-pressed to match it. The look on her master's face did not go unnoticed by Tsubaki, and Sona finally responded to her servant, the smug, happy expression never leaving her face. "Tsubaki, once school hours are over, be sure that everyone gathers in the student council room. We need to set a surefire strategy of how to get Issei Hayao to join us." When Tsubaki saw the worry on the first-year boy's face, she too thought that the protective instincts that seemed to resonate from the boy would be a great benefit for their group. But she did not grasp the full scale of what Issei's capabilities were. "Yes, Kaichu, I will inform all members to gather as soon as they are let out from their classes," Tsubaki said to Sona. She made to get up to inform the Citri peerage about the meeting after school today, before being stopped by Sona herself. "And Tsubaki, thank you for bringing me here, I appreciate it." Tsubaki held a smile, and then shook her head at her master. Sona was passed out, so of course she would assume that Tsubaki had brought her to the infirmary. "Kaichu, I didn't bring you here. Issei Hayao had you in his arms from the moment you collapsed. He was very adamant that he bring you here himself. He was not willing to leave you in my care alone." Sona was pleasantly surprised that the boy she was scouting for her peerage had already proven that he could be relied on in at least one situation. Now she just needed to find out how to bring him to her side. Huo Class 1 degrees Celsius. Issei's current class had been placed as a free period due to the teacher having an emergency, so he was conversing with his two neighbors, Momo and Reya, who had seen Issei carrying their master towards the infirmary with clear worry showing on his face. "That was very sweet of you, Eyes," Reya said with a sweet smile. She was very pleased with how he had acted towards her king without even knowing her for more than a few minutes, and she desperately hoped that they would be able to have him in their ranks soon. "Say, Eyes," Momo said from her spot sitting on the corner of Issei's desk. She gave Issei a sly smile as she spoke. "If I pass out like that in your arms, would you carry me too?" Issei felt his face heat up at his classmate's words, and his mouth was once again working faster than his brain. By the time he came to realize what he said, he just hoped that none of the girls in the vicinity, or katase and murayama, would punish him for the lack of foresight with his words. "Of course, if either of you fainted, I wouldn't leave your side until you got the care you needed." So once Issei caught on to what he had said, he was preparing for the verbal reprimanding with closed eyes. But it never came. Instead, Issei was almost knocked out of his seat by the girl with snow-white hair that had positioned herself almost on top of his desk. Issei was tightly hugged around his neck. The girl seemed to have supernatural strength, as Issei was losing vital oxygen to his brain from the grip she had on him. "Eyes, you're such a sweetheart," Momo practically yelled out to the whole class. Reya was just watching the moment with her usual sweet smile, until she saw Issei start to turn blue from hypoxia. "Momo, I don't think he can breathe," she said to Momo, who was reluctant to let go. But once she finally did, Issei gasped for air while holding a smile. He had clearly enjoyed the feeling of having her pressed tightly against him, which wasn't missed by the two girls as they smirked. "Fufu, he's trying so hard not to look or comment on our bodies. He's adorable," Reya thought as she watched Issei tried to seem like he wasn't thoroughly enjoying Momo's ass pressed against him. The door to the 1 degree Celsius classroom slid open to reveal Tsubaki standing there with her usual stoic expression. She glanced around the room before addressing the people she was sent to speak with. Once her eyes met with Momo and Reya, she also caught the sight of Momo embracing Issei Hayao and rose an eyebrow with a slight smile on her face. "It seems they are taking a liking to him," she thought before speaking to the pair of bishops. "Momo Hanakai, Reya Kusaka, please report to the student council room immediately after school hours." Before either of the girls could respond, Tsubaki departed back to wherever she came from. The free period was the last class of the day, and Issei felt he had gotten to know Reya and Momo pretty well. He would even consider them friends at this point. So when the last bell for the day rang, Issei gave his farewells to both of them and made his way to where Murayama and katase had agreed to meet for his continued physical and perv reversion training. Line break. The next morning, Issei woke up quicker than he usually would on a school day during his middle school days. "I guess being surrounded by girls on par with top-tier supermodels will do that to any guy," Issei thought before getting up to go for his morning run before he had to go to school. On his run to the school and back, Issei noticed red glow coming from the old school building. Issei just figured it was a strange light bulb or experiment going haywire, so he didn't pay attention to it. And so he continued his run and made his way back home to get ready for school. Line break. Huo Academy Orc Room. The red light that Issei noticed on his daily run wasn't from a light bulb, nor an experiment gone wrong. It was emitting from the irate body of the president of the Occult Research Club, Reya's Gremory. She had received a message from her longtime friend and rival Sona Citri. Sona had requested to meet with both of their peerages in the morning before school in her clubroom for an important relay of information. Just recalling the talk between the two of them made her boil in both jealousy and anger. Jealousy from the fact that Sona had claimed that she had found the Red Dragon Emperor and that he was to be a part of the Citri peerage. and anger from the knowledge that if she had just refused or delayed the meeting between herself, her family, and her revolting fiancé, then she could have had a chance to lay claim to the boy herself. Flashback to the Orc and Student Council meeting. Good morning, Sona. What was so urgent that it couldn't wait until after school? Reya asked her rival, who sat across from her on the sofa on the other side of the coffee table in the center of the Orc room. It was rare for Sona to meet with Reya on the school campus at all, given how busy she typically was with being a part of the student council. I wanted to inform you of a new prospect for my peerage. His name is Issei, a first year in class 1 degrees Celsius. Sona's face stayed expressionless as usual, but she still hadn't exactly answered the question Reya asked. Why the sudden meeting for any normal prospect? A message delivered by any means would have sufficed, but Sona was adamant about meeting in person this morning. Alright, but that still doesn't tell me why you wanted to meet in person this morning. As I understand it, the student council has you rather busy, so a meeting in the flesh is something that would mean this Issei boy must be something special. Reya then saw something she hadn't seen in years from her stoic rival, a grin. Not a smile or a smirk of confidence, a full grin that carried an almost childish message of I have something you can't have. Indeed, he is special in more ways than one from what I've seen, Sona stated smugly with a grin that was starting to annoy Reya. Sona pushed her glasses back into place and continued. I came into contact with Issei yesterday, after my bishops informed me that they were absolutely certain that he possessed a sacred gear. So I went to meet the boy during the lunch break. I found him with 2 members of the group that has been educating our more perverse male students. He seemed like any normal and kind boy, that is, until I shook his hand. Okay, so what kind of sacred gear do you suspect the boy to have him still not seeing the point of the meeting, Sona? Reya was getting more and more annoyed with the tone that Sona was using to describe her interaction with this Issei, but had yet to say what exactly was special about him. Issei is the host of the Red Dragon Emperor. Sona spoke matter-of-factly. Reya almost lost all composure at that exact moment. Her eyes were as wide as her sockets would allow, and her jaw dropped. But when the words of the Citriera sank in, Sona has claimed the Red Dragon Emperor, and meanwhile, I was away wasting my time trying to fight my engagement, while the solution was here all along, Reya thought. A crimson glow started to roll off of the president of the Occult Research Club. It held an ancient power that now only resided with one line, and that was the line Reya came from. The power radiating off of her started to affect her surroundings, papers disintegrating, her desk forming cracks in the solid wood, and the air grew thick. The members of the student council all stood in a combat stance. They didn't really expect Reya to attack them, but the power coming off of her was unpredictable, and they made sure to be ready for all situations. While the members of the Orc all stood away from their king, equally surprised by the burst of power from Reya. But they understood where this anger was coming from, especially after the meeting with Riser Phoenix. Reya, that's not the only reason I'm here. I'd like to present a deal to you, the Citriera stated while pressing her glasses up to her face once again, but this time they gained a slightly devious glint to them. Reya quickly calmed herself down to prepare for whatever her friend had to offer. She had known Sona for most of her life, and would trust that she had Reya's best interests at heart, and vice versa. Sona knew how much she despised Riser, and had tried to find a way out of the engagement. But the only way either of them had found in the contract that would lead to Reya's freedom would be a rating game. Sai, alright, what sort of deal? I will personally train Issei, and when the time comes, I will lend him to you for a rating game against Riser should it come down to that. And in exchange I ask for a favor. Reya narrowed her eyes at Sona. A favor that would grant her the support of the Red Dragon Emperor would no doubt be costly, but she was willing to pay almost any price, and there were very few things she wouldn't do to be rid of Riser. He was a scourge to the underworld. And what would that favor entail exactly? This was the big reveal for Sona. She knew that at first her idea would sound insane, but given the chance to explain the details, Reya would see the value and hopefully agree. Sona readied herself by taking a silent breath in, letting it out and opening her mouth to speak to her longtime friend. In return for the support of the Red Dragon Emperor, you will marry him. Sona knew that she needed to pause here to let the information she was relaying to sink in. And it didn't take long, maybe a full 3 seconds before Reya's crimson hair flowed in the non-existent wind that was produced from the power of her frustration. Sona, however, expected this, and waited for the right moment to deliver the rest of her plan. Well, how does that change my situation at all? I know for a fact you are smarter than this, Sona. Why would you of all people be willing to free me from one marriage, only to place me in another? Reya was livid, and rightfully so. Her longest friend had just offered to free her from one marriage, only to place her into another with some unknown person. A hand was placed on her shoulder to calm her down. It was from her queen and another longtime friend, Akino Hanjima. Reya was quick to calm herself down so that she didn't damage any more of her club room. Akino then addressed the Citri King, voicing her own opinion on the matter, as well as her questions as to how the situation would benefit Akino's king. Kaichu, may I ask a question about your plan? Akino asked with a serious yet inquisitive tone. And Sona nodded, already expecting a few questions about the part of her plan that was revealed. I understand that the support of the Red Dragon Emperor will increase our odds greatly. But what benefit is there from a marriage between the Red Dragon and the Gremory family? Exactly as I thought, they are only seeing the short term. Sona thought to herself. She had expected this, and would be quick to explain so that all questions could be satisfied and they could go about their everyday lives without further delay. A marriage between Reya and Issei, the host of the Red Dragon Emperor, would help to solidify the dragon's ties to the devils. This would benefit not only the BGMI family, but devils as a whole, should another war break out. But that's not all I have planned, Reya. The explanation Sona had delivered thus far had all in the room captivated, waiting to see what the tactician in the room had come up with. Reya knew better than anyone else that Sona never did anything without thinking of any and all possible outcomes. It was why she trusted Sona with her and her peerage's lives if it were to come down to it. Reya couldn't think of anyone else that thought as far ahead as Sona, so the least she could do was hear her out. Okay Sona, what other parts are there to your plan? Sona smirked. This particular part of her plan was the part she was most proud of. It would not only double the ties of the Red Dragon Emperor to the devils, but also the families of the Issei and BGMI house, and therefore bringing each house into further prominence. Reya will be married to the Red Dragon Emperor, and should Issei be able to beat me in a game of chess either now or in the future, as my agreement with my family states, I will marry him as well. This will not only further hold the ties of Mr. Hayatu, but it will also be a great benefit for each of our families. All in the room were silent. Sona Issei, a young woman who had defiantly and successfully avoided any and all marriage contracts thus far, was willingly putting herself into this deal with Reya. Reya and Akino seemed to be the only ones to grasp the situation fully, and shared a glance before Reya asked one final question to the Issei heiress. If you're placing yourself in this deal, this boy must be special indeed. He'll agree, only if I have your word that he is nothing like Riser. And I want a clause on paper stating that should either party deem the other not to the other's liking, said party holds the right to cancel the engagement at any time before the wedding is to take place. Sona was once again prepared for the words of her rival. When she met the host of the Red Dragon, she saw more than just his sacred gear. Her family's mastery over water magic allowed each member of the Issei family to gauge a person's worth, their values, with just a touch. And she had seen the perverse nature that Issei was trying his hardest to suppress in order to lead a better life. But not only that, the genuine worry he showed when she collapsed in his arms had only confirmed what the magical signs were telling her. Of course Reya, I had the chance to meet Issei yesterday, and to gauge what kind of person he was. All of the files I have on his past had prepared me to be faced with an unrepentant pervert who would openly gawk and remark on Tsubaki's physical appearance. At the mention that the one who was possibly going to be married to Reya had a perverted nature, one of Reya's servants perked up. She was a short girl with white hair just past her shoulder, with hazel eyes and cat clips in her hair. She was Kaneko Taju, Reya's rook. How perverted. Apparently him and two of his friends had openly proclaimed that they would each start a harem. With further explanation of how the boy acted in the past, Sona saw the uncomfortable body language from the short girl, and made to place it to rest as she spoke her next words. The boy I met yesterday was nothing like his files had portrayed him as. Once I shook his hand, and I was met with the aura of the Red Dragon. I found my body unable to hold itself upright, and had braced myself to fall to the ground. But Issei had caught me in his arms before I fell, and when I looked up to his face, I didn't see a boy who was trying to take advantage of a helpless girl. No, I saw a young man who would put the safety of those he cared about before his own well-being. He even went so far as to personally carry me to the infirmary when I had eventually passed out. Even with Tsubaki saying that she could take care of me, he was unwilling to let anyone else see to my care. Reya had been taking in all of the information about her potential future husband from Sona, and to be honest, it sounded like the type of man that she would hear about in stories when she was little. A man that would do everything in his power to ensure the safety of his loved ones. Reya would have to verify for herself that Issei was that type of man, but if he was, then she would happily marry him and give him all of herself in return. From your words, he seems to be a special young man indeed. I would like to meet this Issei for myself though. Sona adjusted her glasses and glanced to the clock on the door. It was time for this meeting to conclude. She had a stack of paperwork to attend to before the start of the school day. Of course Reya, that is all I had planned for this meeting, so myself and my peerage must be going now. Sona stated as she turned around and proceeded out of the old school building with the rest of the student council following quickly. Reya had a thoughtful expression on her face, going over all of this new information. The idea of another marriage arranged from the destruction of her current one wasn't a good thought by itself, but as Sona had further explained the potential groom, Reya found herself curious and willing to give it a chance. The idea of the Issei and BGMI houses being joined for mutual benefit alone was enticing. But do you really think this is a good idea? A male voice came from the corner of the room by the window with the morning light shining through. This young man had medium-length straight blonde hair, gray eyes, and a mole under his left eye. He was already being promoted as the only potential member of the male student body at Kyo Academy that wasn't trying to pursue some offlandish fantasy of starting a harem and claiming as many girls as he could get his hands on. Reya looked over to her young knight with a kind and soft smile as she spoke to him. I appreciate the concern, Yuudo. Sona and I have been friends for a long time. I would place my life in her hands. The fact that she added herself to this deal only speaks to this young man's potential as well as values. Reya placed her hands on her hips and addressed all of the group but one once more before they would need to separate for the school day. Let's go meet this Issei Hayado, shall we? Kyo Academy Student Council Room. After the meeting with Reya, Sona and her peerage retreated back to their own headquarters to finish their preparations for the day. Sona was not filing paperwork, as was her custom to do before the school day started. Her thoughts were instead running through multiple scenarios of how to convince Issei Hayado to come to serve her. If everything went well, then he may very well be a devil in her peerage as soon as the end of the day. Sona had thought of feeding into Issei's perverted nature, telling him that harems were fairly common in the underworld due to low birth rates, and multiple partners gave more chances for children to be conceived. This plan was honestly at a 50/50 risk of failure. Due to Issei trying to repress his more carnal desires, he may see that statement only as a means to manipulate him, which it technically would be. How can I assure that he joins me? Sona thought. If it were anyone else in the male student body new to Kyo, that tactic would surely work. But Issei was peculiar. Sona had heard a good portion of the conversation between him and the two Kendo first-year girls yesterday. From what her and Tsubaki had overheard, it revealed that most of the information in Issei's file was still correct. Issei Hayado was a boy that wore his heart on his sleeve, was overly honest with people, and greatly valued that trait in others. And that was what led him to be a much-hated figure in middle school. He never hid his desire of the female body from the girls he came in contact with, until now it seems. And if Issei carrying Sona to the infirmary was any indication, he was a very caring person, who wanted to, and enjoyed helping people who required it. Perhaps she needed a little more insight into what it was that he actually wanted out of life. What did he hope to accomplish? What sort of career path did he envision himself taking? Answers to these questions could possibly hold the solution Sona was seeking. So, how did she get this information? A first-hand account would be best, and she had two people in close proximity that had become rather friendly with Issei. Momo and Reya. Momo, Reya, I have some information I need you two to gather from Issei Hayado. Line break. Issei had made it to the school gates with a few minutes to spare before classes started. His thoughts before falling asleep, as well as during his morning routine, had been dominated with whether or not the vice president of the student council was feeling better. And he hoped he could see her again soon to make of that. Although that was not the only thought he had. The image of Sona and her bright violet eyes had followed Issei into his sleep, except in the dream, they were much more acquainted with each other. Issei would have been happy to stay in that dream for an eternity, but much to his surprise a few more additions came into his dream. Momo, Reya, and surprisingly Tsubaki joined as well. Man, what a dream that was, Issei thought as he walked through the campus grounds, towards the main building. Issei looked up towards the top of the building where the sun was peeking over the roof. The spring season had always been a time of year that Issei enjoyed. It was partially due to the temperature outside and the blooming flora of Japan, but it was more due to the girls shedding the heavy coats and thus having less material for him to mentally strip off of them in his fantasies. A smile crossed Issei's face from the warmth of the sun. For once in his life, he was looking forward to the school year. Sure, it sucked having your two best friends go to a different school, but they would vicariously through his encounters. Issei was looking forward to bragging about the amount of beautiful girls that he was constantly surrounded by during the school day. He could see the jealous rage on their faces already. Issei was brought out of his thoughts when he heard his name being called. He made to turn to whoever it was. There were currently only 4 people who used his nickname. As soon as Issei turned 180 degrees to the sound, he was hit by a snow-white projectile that then latched onto him with a tight grip around his abdomen. Issei looked down to see what or who it was that had him tightly within their grasp, to see his classmate Momo looking up to him with a radiant smile, which paired with her captivating glacial blue eyes was a sight that Issei was hard-pressed to let go of. Brown eyes bore into blue, but when Issei made no moves nor said anything to his classmate, friend, Momo's happy visage turned into an incredibly adorable pout. Her eyes slightly narrowed, and her cheeks puffed like a chipmunk. Eyes, you didn't hug me back, meanie. Momo pouted while tightening her grip on the boy. Issei blinked a few times before her words clicked in his head. He then heard Reya give a fufu from a few feet away from them. Issei smiled to his friend and made to hug her back. He was shocked at how quickly she had become friendly with him, but he wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. What self-respecting teenage male wouldn't enjoy a beauty like her hugging them first thing in the morning? Issei thought, placing his arms around her back to hug her slender figure to his. Reya's words then brought a blush to both of their faces. It seems Momo is quite attached to you eyes. I'm sure the other boys will be very envious, Yufufu. Reya spoke with her seemingly ever-present smile. Issei's face was still hot and red from his other classmate's statement. He was about to make a counter, but was cut off by the sound of 2 familiar and angry voices that yelled out simultaneously. Eyes, you couldn't even last 2 whole days. It was Katase and Murayama, who had assumed Issei was reverting back to his old perverted self and taking advantage of an innocent and kind young girl. Issei turned to the sound of his 2 friends, punishers, to see them clad in their Kendo uniform and shinai in their hands at the ready, and quickly making their way to bring divine judgment onto his body. The angry scowl on their faces left no doubt in Issei's mind that he needed to vanish from sight immediately, otherwise he would be nursing bruises all over his body for a next week. Issei released Momo from their mutual hug and backed away with a nervous shake spreading through his body. He looked at his two classmates Momo and Reya, who didn't understand why the two approaching girls were upset, and waved goodbye to them as he set into a sprint away to lose his pursuers. "I have somewhere to see you later," Issei yelled out, quickly ran, with the Kendo pair on his heels, shinai raised to swing once they were within striking range. Both Momo and Reya's expression changed into an even and unemotional one at the departure of the one that their master wanted information on. Thankfully, they were in the same class as the boy in question, so there would be chances to gather the answers later on in the day, assuming the two girls didn't beat Issei too badly where he needed medical attention. Reya looked over to Momo, her smile returning to her face. "Well, I'll just have to ask him during the break, Momo. I am curious, though, did you hug him to fluster eyes, or if you actually enjoy being around him?" "Yes," Momo replied with her own smile. And Reya had a confused expression that didn't answer either question. But Momo clarified for the braided brunette. "It was both. He's so fun to tease, there's just something about him, it's strange." Line break. Issei ran through most of the back of the campus, and had finally managed to shake off the pair of Kendo girls that were apparently out for. "I hope I can explain it to them later, without being hit," Issei thought as he entered the main school building. He only had about 3 minutes before the school bell rang for classes to begin. Issei was lost in his thoughts, recalling how far Head come in controlling himself. Within the time span of the break before starting at Kyo Academy, Head gained 4 girls that he would consider friends, even though 2 of them were currently out for his head. That was something that he had never thought possible without some sort of wizardry or mind control. BSH, like such a thing even exists. Would be cool though, Issei thought as he turned the final corner to get into the hall his classroom resided in. As he rounded said corner, he was knocked over when he collided with something hard, yet incredibly soft and pillowy. "Oh," a silky voice rang out from in front of him. Issei rubbed his lower back from the impact, and looked up to see who he walked into so that he could apologize and be on his way. But his mind came to a halt at the image in front of him. What did I? Holy sweet, lace purple is officially my new favorite color. Issei's eyes were met by the lacy purple undergarments of what Issei could only describe as a goddess in human form. I'm pretty sure Motohama would lose his shit just looking at this girl, Issei thought, taking in the full visage of the girl on the floor, who had fallen with her legs had spread and bent at the knee when she landed on the floor, giving Issei a full panty shot. She had long, crimson-red hair and bangs that perfectly framed her face, blue-green eyes with a regal look to them, with her face only matching her noble presence. Her ass were probably among the biggest Issei had ever seen, in real life or in any porn. Snap out of it, Issei, you just knocked her down, help her up, idiot, Issei thought as he shook his head to clear his Natsuklian thoughts. Issei stood up quickly, averting his eyes from the purple lacy thong, and offered his hand to help this unknown beauty off the floor. I'm sorry for that, I wasn't paying attention, let me help you. The redhead smiled as she took Issei's hand and was brought back to her feet. She flinched once Issei's hand met hers, as she was assaulted with the same image that Sona had been yesterday, an enormous red western dragon with crimson flames that ravaged any and all things surrounding it. She took her hand back as soon as she was back to her feet, and composed herself as she dusted off her uniform. With that done, she introduced herself to the young boy in front of her. No need to apologize, accidents happen. Thank you for helping me up. You're Issei Hayadu, are you not? My name is Reya's Gremory, 2nd year and president to the Occult Research Club. It's nice to meet you. She held her regal smile as she spoke. Issei hadn't noticed the 2 people that were behind Reya's, but each of them were carefully analyzing Issei as he interacted with the Gremory heiress. And so far, they were both in approval of how he carried himself. It seemed Sona's appraisal was on par with what they were witnessing. Issei had no idea why someone like her had heard of him. Hopefully it wasn't a bad thing. He was trying not to cause trouble here, as that would be counterproductive to his end goal. Yes, Issei still had dreams of obtaining a harem, however he wanted to obtain that harem through different means now compared to his prepared reversion training. He previously just wanted girls with the biggest S he could find. But now that his head wasn't constantly filled with the thought of huge S, he wanted a harem of women who actually meant something to him. Women that he could spend a life protecting and providing for. It's nice to meet you, but how exactly do you know who I am? Issei stated his questioning thoughts. If she knew of him because of his past actions, that wouldn't be good. And should he somehow upset this girl, she could very easily make his reputation take an immediate and irreversible dive into the mud. And he was sure that Murayama and katase would beat the crap out of him for their hard work all being for nothing at that point. You met a good friend of mine yesterday, Sona Shitori. She spoke highly of you, which is a rare thing, Reya said with a hand on her hip and the other on her school bag. At the mention of the girl that passed out in his arms and invaded his dreams last night, Issei widened his eyes and wanted to know the condition she was currently in. He also needed to be sure not to sound overly familiar with Sona, which had been the result of the fantastical dreams involving her, a can of whipped cream, cherries, and a silicone ring that was used to extend certain activities. Is Miss Shitori alright? I was hoping to check up on her today, or at least find out how she's holding up. Reya and her 2 servants were pleasantly surprised at the concern that Issei held for Sona, even if they had only met a few moments before the incident in question. Such an interesting boy, Reya thought as she looked at the worried look Issei held, waiting to hear an update on the Citri girl. She's feeling much better now. She must be a little overworked from the duties the student council. Ring, ring, ring. At the sound of the bell ringing, Issei looked down the hall to his classroom, but wanted to thank Reya for an update as well as say his farewell. I'm glad she's okay. Well, I need to get to class. Nice meeting you, Ms. Gremory. Reya and company watched Issei flee to his class. Once he was out of sight, the redhead turned to see what her servants thought of Issei so far. Yudo, Akino, what do you think of him? Akino was a fellow second-year student, Reya's queen and best friend. She had long black hair that reached mid-calf and was held in a ponytail by an orange ribbon, violet eyes and a bust just a bit bigger than Reya's. She was the first to voice her evaluation of the potential new reincarnated devil. He seems sweet, but is still struggling to control himself around so many young women. Yufufu. It's a shame that he won't be a permanent member of your peerage. It'd be so much fun to play with him. He seems trustworthy. Yudo responded. Line break. Issei's class was in between classes at the moment, waiting for the teacher to arrive, and so most students were conversing with each other. Momo and Reya were talking with Issei about what kind of future he wanted and what values he held in high regard. Momo was sitting on his desk once again, while Reya was still in her seat to his right. Have you thought about what you want to do after high school, Momo asked. She was dangling her feet off his desk, swinging them in a carefree way. Her hands were behind her, holding her upright as her palms were placed onto the desk. Her head was tilted to the side as she questioned Issei. Issei hummed and thought. He wasn't sure if telling a girl that he wanted a harem was a good idea. So what else did he want to do with his life? He hadn't thought about it all that much, as his mind was usually just filled with naked women. But there was one thing he knew he'd be good at. Well, I've always been good with kids, so I think being a teacher of some kind could be fun. I haven't put too much thought into it, hee. Issei chuckled at the end and rubbed the back of his head. He probably should have some clue as to what he would do for the rest of his life, and not just coast by. Momo and Reya both shared an excited look with each other. That's perfect, they both thought. Issei would fit in perfectly with Sona's peerage. It was like some deity had sent him here directly to them. Now they needed to go meet with Sona to relay the information. Momo, we should get going now, Reya said as she stood from her desk and grabbed her school bag. She stepped behind Issei and grabbed Momo's bag and held it out for the girl on Issei's desk to take. Oh, you're right, hopefully this doesn't take too long, Momo exclaimed as she hopped off of Issei's desk. Issei widened his eyes and held back a gasp as her skirt lifted enough for him to get a glimpse underneath. White hair, black panties, no bad. Issei's my friend, need to control myself. Issei tried to control his urges, which hopefully no one else noticed his internal struggle. But Issei being Issei was as easy as a billboard to read. And Reya had seen the black garment as well. Yufufu, I think I's enjoyed the show, Momo, Reya said with a hand over her mouth to hide her amusement. Issei slammed his head on his desk to hide his embarrassment from them, not even trying to deny that he in fact very much enjoyed it. Momo on the other hand took a few seconds to understand what Reya was referring to, and finally understood when she thought back to her position just a moment ago. She felt a tinge of both pride and amusement that she seemed to hold his attention even with the smallest of gestures. She decided to have a little more fun with Issei before they left. Don't forget me while I'm gone, eyes. Oh, and Sona Kaichu said she wanted to see you after school today. Okay, bye. They didn't give Issei any time to respond as they both left the classroom, heading to give Sona the information she requested, and she would no doubt be happy with what they had learned. A few seconds after Momo and Reya left, the teacher came in to begin the next class. Issei couldn't focus due to his friend's antics. It was starting to seem that Issei only befriended girls that liked to tease him endlessly. As class began, Issei shook out of his thoughts and got prepared for the lesson. Line break. Lunch break. Issei was sitting under the tree behind the gym with Murayama and katase. He had to dodge their attacks for the first 15 minutes of the lunch break until he got them to at least hear him out about the situation that morning with Momo. And once they finally understood that he wasn't taking advantage of her, and that she had initiated it, they started with another question that was on their mind. So, why does the vice president want to see you? Katase asked with her head angled to side. It seemed rather sudden and odd for the student council to have taken interest in Issei, especially since he hadn't seemingly caused any trouble. Issei shrugged his shoulders, as he wasn't sure either, but he would definitely meet with Sona after school. His reasoning was twofold. He wanted to see for himself that she was indeed feeling all right today, as well as just be around her. That was a strange thing for Issei. When Sona collapsed and he carried her to the infirmary, he felt an odd connection with her. It was also entirely possible that she might scold him for carrying her all throughout the school, the sort of rumor that could come from the student body seeing that would no doubt harm her reputation if she wanted to run for president next year. I'm not sure either. I guess he'll just have to find out after school today. Murayama had only nodded in response to the conclusion Issei came to. Then she remembered that she wanted to ask Issei more about his school life choices. Her and katase had talked about trying to get eyes into the Kendo club. It could benefit him in more way than one. He would be around some of the more well-known girls in school, thus testing his resolve to not act in a lecherous way. He could spend more time with her and katase, and get a good workout at the same time. Eyes, have you considered joining a club yet? Katase had forgotten that they had talked about that right before they chased Issei around this morning. Right, Eyes, why don't you join the Kendo club, then we can all hang out more. It was something new for both Katase and Murayama. They had only been willing to help Issei for the hope that he could inspire other potential pervy students at Kyo to change into normal people. But the longer they hung around Issei, the more they wanted to be around him. His open-minded and carefree demeanor was just pleasant to be around. His overly honest personality had been a source of more than a few good laughs as well. Issei just blurted out what was on his mind, and they had grown to like that part about the boy. Are you just asking me so you can beat me up more? Issei asked with narrowed eyes. Issei had progressed very well in holding his urges, so he didn't get hit by them nearly as much as he did when they first started. The trio all laughed together as the school bell rang out, marking the near end of the lunch break. Issei said he would think about joining the Kendo club as they all bid farewell to each other, Issei heading back to his class. Katase and Murayama heading back to their Kendo training. Line break, student council room. Issei stood at the door to the student council room, ready to knock to alert those inside that he was here. Issei couldn't help but be a little nervous. Some of the more influential students were right on the other side of this door. If Issei acted in an inappropriate manner in front of this group, that could spell major trouble for him later down the line in his high school career. But he was asked to come and meet with Sona Shitori, and he was here to honor that request. Issei took a deep breath to ready himself for whatever was to come, and finally knocked on the large wooden door. Knock, knock, knock. Issei's hand dropped down to his side and waited. Issei got a weird vibe while waiting to be told to enter inside. It was one of those feelings that made you feel that no matter what it was that happened or was said in this meeting, that some part or possibly all of his high school life would forever be different. Looking back on the event couldn't have been more right. Enter. A stoic female voice rang out from the inside of the room. Issei obeyed and pressed his hand on the handle and turned it, slowly opening the door. With the door fully opened, Issei looked around at the decor of the student council headquarters. It was a large room, with Victorian-style wood trim. 2 love seats sat next to each other on the left side of the room. The walls were a grayish-blue paint, to leave it at a more neutral color. To the right side of the room there were a group of file cabinets that stood to about 6.5 feet tall, with a medium-sized desk next to it, probably to sort out paperwork from the files. And straight to the back from where Issei was standing was a large intricately designed wooden desk that looked very expensive, where there were 5 girls stood in a line just next to the one that had requested Issei's presence here. Sona Shitori. Issei took note of the other girls that were standing by Sona, and he recognized most of them, all but 2. The closest to Sona was a tall raven-colored hair young woman, Tsubaki, that Issei had met yesterday for the first time. Her face as stoic and emotionless as he had previously seen it. Next to Tsubaki were his 2 classmates, Momo and Reya. I didn't realize they were a part of the student council. Issei thought. He really should have, but all the clues never clicked in his brain. They had even been the ones to tell him that he was requested here by Sona. Issei smiled to his 2 friends and classmates, then moved down to see the ones that he hadn't had the opportunity to meet with yet. The first was a girl with shoulder-length blue hair and deep ocean blue eyes. She had a facial structure of what many girls would call a pretty-boy face, but she was just as good-looking as the others in the room, a beauty in her own right. She was taller than all but Tsubaki, who was mere centimeters taller, but the blue-haired girl had a more slender figure. Last in line and closest to Issei was a girl about Issei's height with reddish-brown hair and twintails that reached just under her shoulder blades. Her bangs were a little unruly, and her hair matched her eye color. Issei moved his gaze back to Sona, and smiled as he could see that she looked to be feeling back to normal at the moment. Good to see again, and that you're feeling better today. You had me worried when you collapsed like that. Everyone in Sona's group held a small smile at Issei's words. They were all sure that he would be a great addition to Sona's peerage. The fact that he was the host of the Red Dragon Emperor was a bonus, a big bonus. Even Sona herself held a small smile before greeting the guest. Pleasure to see you again, as well as say hi Audu. Thank you for personally seeing to it that I was taken to get appropriate medical care. Now, please have a seat, Sona said as she gestured to one of the 2 wooden chairs in front of her desk. Issei stepped to the chair, feeling the genuine leather layered across it before sitting down, back straight and hands in his lap with his face looking straight into Sona's gorgeous violet eyes. Seeing that her guest was settled, and pleasantries out of the way, Sona wanted to get down to business. So Sona pushed her glasses up to ensure they are staying in their set place. It wouldn't do to look out of control here, not in front of a potential new member in her peerage. Before we get started, I would like to say that you aren't in any sort of trouble, so there's no need to worry. I merely wish to ask you a few questions. Issei's shoulders relaxed a fair amount at Sona's words. He was of course worried that he had either done something wrong, or she wanted to preemptively warn him to be on his best behavior or suffer the consequences. Okay, is it alright if I call you Sona Kaichu? I've noticed that's how the rest of the student council refer to you. Issei didn't like calling people by their last names, and just felt weird for him to say. He had always preferred to be called by his first name no matter the length of time he had known the one speaking to him. Sona nodded in response. To her, this was only another step in the right direction, that direction being Issei becoming hers. Sona then began what would no doubt be a very world-shattering conversation for Issei. I'd like to start with a few questions about past events. If my questions are too personal, you of course hold the right not to answer. Sona looked towards Issei, gauging his response to the shift in her tone. She now held a tone of voice that was both unemotional and commanding. Issei tensed up a little, but no verbal response, just a nod signaling the okay for Sona to continue. From my understanding, you were labeled as a pervert from both students and teachers during your middle school years, and are now doing your best to control those urges for the hopes of a better life during your time at Kyoto Academy. What was it that made the sudden change? Issei flinched at the mention of him being a pervert in the presence of so many beautiful girls, but Issei didn't notice any change in expression from them. Perhaps they knew and had moved past that just as he was trying to. Issei wasn't sure just what it was that Sona would gain from asking him a question like this, but he saw no reason to doubt her or any of the members of the student council so far, so he gave an open and honest answer. When the co-ed announcement was made, myself and 2 friends applied to Kyoto right away. None of us had really spent any significant time with a girl that wasn't forced to for school, or that we were related to, so this seemed like a golden opportunity to change that. But after the test, neither of them were accepted, only I was. So I spent the majority of my 3rd year in middle school by myself. It was at this point that Momo and Reya adopted a look of sympathy on their faces. They had gotten to know Issei a fair amount over the past 48 hours, and it was the loss of all the other girls that just brushed him aside without a second glance. A teacher recommended physical exercise to help relieve stress, and I found that I enjoyed it. And on the first day of the break before starting here at Kyoto, I jogged here from home to get a look at the campus. When I got here, the Kendo girls started to yell at me, saying the world was better off without people like me, that I was part of a plague on mankind. Issei's eyes had a complicated look to them. That memory wasn't exactly a good one. The words that katase and murayama said that day honestly hurt. But it was also what led to him now having a good relationship with them, and also Momo and Reya, so he couldn't really dwell on words that had helped change his life for the better. I realized after I went home that high school would be nothing but miserable if I stayed the same, so I went back the next day to ask for their help to control myself, and so I started meeting with the 2 Kendo girls katase and murayama frequently. Momo and Reya shared a look of realization that would explain the 2 girls that chased him away that morning and why they were yelling at him. Those were the 2 that had helped Issei overcome his urges and had seemingly befriended him, judging on the way they referred to him. Sona seemed to also be pleased with his explanation, during which she had made no movements, or had any change in facial expression to give away how she felt about what he was saying, not even the plague on mankind part. But she had other things on her mind. Now that she had clarified what had caused Issei to change over such a short time, it was time to move on to another question. As I said to you yesterday, I have made it a point to meet with each of the new male students attending Kyoto, and to learn what it is that they wish to gain from their time here, and what it is that they hope to accomplish once their education is complete. So I'd like to know, what is it that you hope to do after you graduate from this academy? Issei noted that this was the same question that Momo had asked him earlier. Perhaps Sona told them to get more information on who Issei was as a person, instead of only using what was listed in his school record. That seemed reasonable, given that Kyoto was a newly co-ed school. They would want to know the type of male students had been enrolled. Momo asked me that same question earlier, and an idea came to mind after her and Reya left class. I'd like to teach, maybe get licensed as a personal trainer, a teaching degree, and teach physical education. He's a perfect fit, Sona thought as she listened to Issei with a very small smile gracing her lips. He was one of the 2 newly enrolled boys to not openly ogle the girls of Kyoto Academy, and his goals were perfectly in line with hers, to be a part of helping the next generation to better themselves. With the questions about Issei's aspirations out of the way, and Sona cementing her decision about asking him to join her, she'd need to gauge his response to information on the supernatural world. So she thought to be rather vague at first, to see how well the information would hold. I see, we're very much alike in that regard. Myself, along the rest of the student council members here, wish to open a non-discriminatory school that excels in both mental and physical education, more specifically tailored to those without the means to attend a prestigious academy such as this one. At hearing the goals of the student council members, Issei's eyes widened with a large radiant smile across his face as he exclaimed his praise with poorly hidden excitement. Losing control of his neutral set of emotions, Issei leaned forward in his seat, almost falling out. That's amazing, Sona Kaichu. I hope he'll be good enough to join your staff one day. A girl standing off to the side of Sona all smiled, thinking that was all that needed to be discussed before dropping the big D word on Issei. Sona, however, thought differently. His response could still be less than appealing, so it was best to approach this subject rather carefully. Being the strategist she was, Sona came up with an on-the-spot transition that would ease Issei into the real topic of their meeting. I'm sure you would make a fine addition. Speaking of schools, Mr. Hayadu, have you thought of a club you'd be interested in joining yet? Issei placed a hand under his chin and thought. He had considered joining katase and murayama in the Kendo club, although he was pretty sure they just wanted more chances to whack him with their wooden swords. Was there any other clubs that interested in martial arts could be fun and would give him the workout that he had started to crave? But that was also a double-edged sword. The girls in the club would probably assume he wanted to join to be in physical contact with them, which would be nice but not the real reason he was interested. If Issei were to pursue a career in teaching, maybe he should look into something that could give insight to how a school operates, so while not technically the student wasn't a club, it could help him decide if that was the right path. Well, I haven't made any real decisions yet. I'd like to see what kinds of clubs there are. I see. Well, the student council is in need of another member. Having one of the male students would also give an image of equal opportunity. The Occult Research Club is one other with a small amount of members. Most of the student council members were confused as to why their master would bring up the club run by the other high-class devil, except for Tsubaki, who left her position by Sona's side and took an old large book from the shelf behind Sona's desk. Tsubaki had been in Sona's service the longest, and so she understood why the Occult Research Club was brought up, and where her king was going with this conversation. They were moving into supernatural territory. Tsubaki held the large book, once again standing at her position just behind Sona's right shoulder, opening and scanning the pages of the book that must have had at least 2,000 pages. Meanwhile, Issei only glanced at the action Tsubaki had just done, not really considering it to be of any meaning, and instead asked about the last club the vice president had mentioned. Issei had always found things like subjects of ghosts, mermaids, dragons, and other creatures interesting. But how could you research them if they didn't exist? Sona looked straight into Issei's eyes, wanting to see a change in expression that could give her some kind of clue into what he thought of things that were rumored to not even exist. He seemed to like the student council idea, judging by the ever so slight turn of his lips when she mentioned he could have a place with them. The mention of the orc had a similar effect, but it more subtle. Sona decided to press on while he was deep in his thoughts. Mr. Hayato, please just call me Issei, Kaichu. Issei replied, quickly being brought back to the conversation. Very well, Issei. Do you believe in the supernatural? Issei wanted to be honest, but wasn't sure if coming out and saying yes would make him come across as mentally unstable or something like that. So he went with a more reasonable answer that wasn't considered lying. I would say I'm more curious about it. Rather than a believer, I've never seen anything to suggest that things like vampires and dragons are actually real. But I've always liked learning about old legends and myths about things like that. They had to come from somewhere, especially if you look at how many religions mention dragons specifically. I doubt all of those stories written in old texts talked about them for the hell of it. Perfect segue. Sona thought this would be a good opportunity to bring up a story that actually had first-hand knowledge and were still breathing. Sona adjusted her glasses on her face once more, then glanced over to Tsubaki to see if she had found the specific page she wanted to show Issei with her story. Tsubaki nodded at Sona's direction with a marker placed in the book to hold the page in question. Tsubaki knew her all too well. Sona turned back towards Issei and began to speak. There's a story I'd like to share with you. I think y'all find it interesting. Issei nodded and sat in a comfortable position in the leather chair, waiting for her to begin. Issei looked over at the group standing at her sides. Issei was met with a strange sight. He saw each of them no longer holding the stoic gaze they had before, but a different emotion for each. Tsubaki was the only one who still remained stoic. Momo looked a hopeful but a tad nervous, if her fidgeting was any indication. Reya held her usual smile, but noticed she looked excited. Odd, she must like this story. The blue-haired girl held a small smile, like she already knew something he didn't. The girl with the red-brown hair, it was pretty obvious she really needed to use the toilet. Issei set his eyes back on Sona as she cleared her throat, ready to begin her story or lecture. Thousands of years ago, there was a three-way war waged between the forces of the Christian faith. The angels, fallen angels, and the devils. The exact reason as to what started the war isn't known. But this war waged on, claiming the lives of large portions of each side, and humans as well that had either taken sides or been caught in the field of fire. The biblical God saw the devastation brought to humans, and that they had no way to defend themselves against forces beyond their own capabilities. So he created items to bless to humans to help give the humans a chance to fight for themselves should he be unable to in their stead. These items were called sacred gears, the numbered in the thousands, and each with different abilities and appearances. At the mention of sacred gears, Tsubaki stepped forward and placed the book onto Sona's desk, open to a page that seemed to have two large creatures flying, circling each other, looking as if they were about to attack one another. Sona ran her hand over the page. Issei couldn't read the ancient-looking text on it. There were strange symbols, and things that looked like rune marking, all seemingly forming a coherent message. The war had taken such a toll on all involved that it could lead to the extinction to any or all factions. Races of all kinds had come and taken sides. Dragons were the only exception. Most dragons had simply ignored the fighting, continuing to live their lives as they saw fit. As another clash was underway, there were two dragons that had long been rivals that started their own fight. Sona turned the book towards Issei for him to see. The two creatures he saw were large dragons. One red with emerald eyes, the other white with azure blue eyes. The red one caught Issei's attention more than the white. He had always been a fan of the color. It was a symbol of strength, love, determination, and passion. All of which were things Issei either already possessed or strived for. These two dragons were among the strongest in existence. Each had the power to single-handedly end the world as we know it. The dragons were known as the Twin Heavenly Dragons. The red one, T-Drag, was also titled the Red Dragon Emperor. The white one, Albion, was titled the White Dragon Emperor. Their rivalry had brought them to the field of the three-way war, causing collateral damage on all sides. Seeing the wrath of the dragons, the three factions made a temporary truce to subdue the two powerful beings. The red and white dragon emperors didn't appreciate others coming in between their fight and attacked the angels, devils, and fallen angels. The fight ended with the dragons being brought down and their souls sealed, each into a sacred gear. D-Drags is called the boosted gear, Albion's is divine dividing. Issei was thoroughly engrossed in this story. How could he not be? It was a tale of an epic battle and beings of incredible power. But somehow it felt like this wasn't just a tale of old, it felt like a history lesson, something that could have been taken from a long-lost book of events long forgotten by mankind. Sona turned the book back towards her and gently closed it, handing it back to Tsubaki to place back on the shelf. After the dragons were dealt with, the truce was maintained, but true peace never came. Each side continued to prepare their respective factions should the war be reignited. The humans that were gifted sacred gears were considered valuable, and so each faction sought them out to recruit them. If the offer was refused, some went to drastic measures of ensuring they would not go to an opposing faction, even going as far as to kill them. Sona took her glasses off to wipe them off and placed them back on, waiting for Issei to speak. He must have been expecting for her to continue, looking for an end to her story, but that was the end. That was where things had currently been for hundreds of years. Issei seemed to get that this was the end of the story. Did this have something to do with him joining a club at Kyoto Academy? Maybe this was the sort of thing that the Occult Research Club looked into. That would be pretty cool. But that information was probably not the easiest to find, nor would it help him understand more of school ops or be a training opportunity. Kaichu, as much as I enjoyed the story, what does it have to do with what club I join? Instead of answering his question, Sona brought the topic elsewhere, if only briefly. Issei, if I told you that this were not a mere story or legend, but actual events, would you believe me? Well, how could I believe something like that? She said. Humans almost went extinct. Not exactly an easy thing to just accept. Issei thought. He considered himself to be an open-minded person, but without proof he couldn't just accept it off the bat. Kaichu, I'm not one to judge what others believe. But to believe that it were true, I would need see some sort of convincing proof. Very well, Sona said to Issei. They looked over to her peerage and nodded to them as well, which they seemed to understand the meaning behind. Sona kept her face in her usual neutral expression. An echoing sound rang through the room, sound of leather unfolding filling the area. Pa. Issei froze in his seat at what he was seeing. Those here bat wings. Each of the other 5 student council members had black leathery bat-like wings sprouting from the lower back. Issei heard Sona get up from her seat. He watched her come around and sit on the corner of the desk near him. She then lifted her right hand, palm facing up to the ceiling, and from it a blue glow appeared. A circle with symbols and markings similar to those that were in the book that he had seen earlier were placed in the circle. The blue glow faded, and a sphere of water was floating centimeters above Sona's palm. The water started to shapeshift, turning into miniature forms of various animals before reforming into the sphere, and then vanishing like it was never there. Issei's eyes, still wide from the shock of the event, made contact with Sona's. Issei, right now, you are in a room full of devils. Him dead. No teaching, no harem. Dead, were Issei's first thoughts. From the little Issei knew from games and books, he knew each of them held the power to end his life with a snap of a finger. So why bother revealing themselves to him? Wait, would they? Is there something they want from me? Sona mentioned recruiting those sacred gear holders. Does that I have one? If I do, how don't I know about it? Issei's mind was running through reasons why they wouldn't just kill him if that was their goal. No, he either had something that they wanted, or they wanted him for something. But he was too shocked to even move his eyes away from Sona. Sona could see the shock the moment that she revealed the student council to be a group of devils. His eyes were staring straight into hers, and slightly quivering. He was afraid. That was understandable. She just revealed herself and 2 of Issei's friends to be beings who were recorded in text to be evil. The quivering in his eyes stopped, and Sona could see the gears turning in Issei's mind, trying to rationalize the situation. Another good sign, he was able to think under stress and shock. His words finally came, but they weren't what Sona had been expecting. So the thing about opening a school for the less fortunate, was that a lie? Sona had been expecting a yell of terror or begging for his life to be spared, but not to know whether he had been lied to. How many surprises would this young man bring her? Sona was unable to answer quick enough before Issei spoke again, his eyes losing their look of shock and fright, instead held betrayal. Momo and Reya, they didn't want to actually be my friend, did they? A gasp came from Sona's right, from her white-haired bishop. Sure, the initial reason they went out of their way to speak with him was due to Sona's orders to seek out any sacred gear holders they found and inform her. But anything after that was of their own accord. Now it was Sona's turn to answer questions. The decision for Kyoto Academy to go co-ed was not only for the reputation of the school. It was also for myself and one other to find potential members to recruit. People whose goals and ideals coincided with our own. I instructed my peerage, the ones who serve under my command, to search for sacred gears holders. They were to inform me if they found any. Momo and Reya's initial contact with you was for that purpose. Throughout our conversation, everything I have said to you is the truth. I do aim to open a school for those not given similar opportunities as others from wealthier families, but it is a school for devils. Issei's entire body was still tense, from holding a slight fear for his life while in this room. But the reigning emotion was as Sona guessed. Issei had thought that Momo and Reya actually had an interest in being his friend. But some things never change no matter where you go or how you try to change yourself. This was proof of that for Issei. Middle school held situations that were close to this, girls only talking to him because they were dared to or had lost a bet of some kind. Sona said it herself, she spoke nothing but the truth, and it had been brutally so. Her voice was heard again, not to set Issei's mind at ease but to continue as to why she told him all of this. Issei, the part of the story I told you where sacred gear bearers were sought after and possibly killed is absolutely true. And you have one that will undoubtedly bring people to search for you. Brown eyes met violet again. Issei had a small idea that was the part of the reason she told the story. If Issei had to guess, it had something to do with the dragons, otherwise that part of the story was almost irrelevant to their situation. So he just waited for Sona to say what his sacred gear was. Your soul holds the boosted gear, the Red Dragon Emperor's sacred gear. Knew it, Issei thought with a small chuckle in his mind. But Sona had still neglected to say what it was she wanted. You haven't said what it is that you want from me. Do you want to take my sacred gear? Sona knew what doing such a thing would do to a person, so the flinch from Momo and Reya was an indication that they did as well. It would kill him. That would tear his soul, his life force apart, and he wouldn't be able to live like that. No, Issei, I want you to join me. I want you to help me, help us. We may be devils, but devils are just as varied as humans are. There are good ones amongst us. Issei relaxed his shoulders a little. Her words didn't sound like she had any malicious intent. And Issei couldn't really rebut against her claim that not all devils are bad, had never met one to his knowledge. But more questions kept coming the more they spoke about the devil business. I'm a human, how am I able to help you with something? Sona gave a small, a little bigger than her last, and held her palm up once again. The same blue circle appeared, but no water came out. This time it looked like a chess piece, a white pawn to be exact. I want you to help me save a friend from a life of forced slavery. I want you to help me teach young devils that there are better ways to get things done, that old traditions aren't always in the best interest of the majority. I want you, Issei Hayato, to be reincarnated as a devil under me. Help me change the underworld. Issei looked between Sona and the chess piece in her hand. As far as Issei could tell, she had said nothing other than what she believed to be the honest truth. But that didn't mean that he wanted to become a devil, a servant. But there was one thing that she could do that make him at least give her offer serious thought. If she could give her word to that, then maybe. Will you help me be strong enough to protect my friends and family when they need it? You said people will eventually come for me. And if they can't get to me, they'll go for those I care about. Sona lifted herself off of the desk she was still seated on, and took the few steps until she was directly in front of Issei. She slowly and gently grabbed Issei's right hand, and placed the pawn piece in his. Issei noticed how soft her hand were, they carried no ill intent. Sona closed his hand around the evil piece, and her hand lingered on top of his for a moment. Yes, I will. Take this, think about my offer. I am not trying to force you into making a rash decision. Each member of my peerage was in a similar spot you are right now, and they all took time to think it over. Go home and rest, and if you have other questions, I'll answer them. Issei tightened his grip on the pawn slightly. It felt like running water, but warm in a way. Strange. Issei nodded his head. Yes, Kaichu. Issei turned around to head out of the office, to head home and think over her offer. Issei reached for the handle of the door, but was stopped by the voice of Momo. Eyes, she said quietly. Issei turned his head with a fake smile. It's all right, Ms. Hanakai. You don't need to pretend anymore. Maybe we can be real friends someday. Issei turned his head back around, opened the door, and made his way back home. After Issei left the school grounds, he had started walking towards his home, thinking about everything that had happened during his conversation with Sona. What do I do? This wasn't exactly the sort of problems I had imagined having the first week of school. Issei thought to himself, hands held behind his head while walking around the corner that led to his house. Issei would have imagined him having trouble keeping his old self hidden, possibly being whacked by katase and murayama for slipping up. He wasn't sure that anything could have prepared him for an introduction into supernatural activities. Issei reached into the left pocket of his pants and brought out the white chess piece that Sona had given him and looked at it curiously. And what's with this chess piece? It feels like there's water moving inside of it, but it's completely solid. Issei stared at the white pawn piece in his hand, feeling the sensation of gently moving water course through it. The piece looked like it was from a very expensive set, bright white with onyx black accents. It somehow reminded Issei of Sona, not because she was the one who gave it to him. Issei figured it was the feeling of moving water and Sona's display of water magic back at school. Issei opened the door to his house and stepped inside, taking his shoes off in the entryway. Mom, I'm home. He called out to his mother, who was probably in the kitchen, as she usually was by the time he got home from school. There was silence all throughout the Hayato residence, leading Issei to come to the conclusion that he was alone. He quickly took his shoes off and made his way into the kitchen, where his mother would typically be, only to find a note attached to the fridge. Your father and I went out with some friends, we'll be out most of the night. There's food for you in the oven, just heat it up. Love, Mom. Well, probably better like this anyway, no need to worry my parents. Issei thought after reading the note. Issei put the note down on the table and walked up to his room, the chess piece rolling between the fingers of his hand. Once he made it into his room, he tossed his school bag on desk and laid himself on his bed. Issei held the chess piece that Sona had given him up, staring at it like it would tell him what the best option here would be. But Issei doubted this inanimate object held such answers. So, according to Sona Kaichu, I have a sacred gear with the Red Dragon Emperor. I don't understand how something like that could be attached to me without me knowing. I suppose doubting what she said would be counterproductive. Issei thought. He wouldn't have believed that any part of her story was true if it weren't for the wings and the magic show she gave him. So that left Issei with figuring out what to do next, because according to the violet-eyed girl, he would eventually be targeted because of the power this red dragon had. If that's true, then I need to get stronger to keep myself and others safe. But as joining her and becoming a devil the best way, the story she told me said that there was an uneasy ceasefire between those three factions, so by joining the devils, that makes the angels and fallen angels enemies. I think remaining a neutral party in this stalemate would be better, but who knows if that's even possible. This is exhausting. Issei laid his hand with the chess piece down onto his chest. When the pawn came in contact with his shirt, it started pulsing, changing between the white color of before and the same blue that Sona had emitted. Issei's hand pulled away from the chess piece, his eyes widened to the size of dinner plates, as it seemed to come to life. The pawn continued changing color and seemed to attach itself to Issei's chest as it sat in the center of his chest. Issei would have removed the chess piece off of him if it weren't for the sense of peace that it gave off. If he were to describe the feeling this seemingly simple pawn piece gave him, it would be that this pawn wanted Issei to accept it into himself. It wanted to help him achieve his goals, his ambitions, his desire, Harem included. It held no intentions of leading Issei to harm. It gave Issei a calming feeling, like that of floating down a nearly still river, being carried by the gentle current. Issei relaxed on his bed, letting the pawn still rest on his chest, and felt the weight of the situation fade away with his consciousness. Line break. 10 minutes after Issei left the student council, Sona was in her office, sorting through the last bit of paperwork she needed to finish for the day before returning home. Her queen Tsubaki was still at her side, helping file the papers. The Citriaris was absent-mindedly signing the last of the papers as she thought of the result of her conversation with Issei Hayao. The majority of our talk went exactly as planned. But where did it go wrong? Everything I know about Issei Hayao had led me to believe that he would accept almost immediately. Sona thought. Tsubaki took the last papers from her king and filed them away. Just as the file cabinet was closed, a knock on the door was heard. Both occupants looked towards it as it opened. Momo and Reya were revealed entering the student council office. Reya had her usual smile, but the usually bubbly Momo was more reserved, her face set into a neutral expression as if deep in thought. Kaichu, we've finished distributing the new club member forms, Reya said to her master. Her face turned to her fellow bishop and friend, her smile faltering a small amount for a brief moment before returning and speaking to Sona once again. Is there anything else you need from us? Sona's eyes went from Momo to Reya, then back to Momo. Being that they had spent the most time with Issei, perhaps they could give some insight about the meeting earlier. Momo, I would like to speak to you for a moment. Sona placed her elbows on the table, lacing her fingers as she rested her chin against them, before turning to Momo. Momo, how do you feel the conversation with Issei Hayao went? Momo set her glacial blue eyes on Sona's violet, her expression not changing. She had been thinking of this very topic as they finished their duties. She stepped forward a bit and addressed the vice president. Overall, I think it went well. Ais took the reveal well, and was able to keep himself composed for the most part. However, near the end I believe that my interaction with him only hurt the possibility of him accepting. Sona had expected the two bishops to have some idea of where the meeting went astray, but that was not where Sona thought the problem was. Underneath Momo's bubbly and carefree appearance was a girl with an intuition as sharp as any Sona had ever seen, so her and Reya's input was valuable to bring the situation back into Sona's favor. How so? Sona asked her bishop. Momo started to fidget with her hands, biting her bottom lip before steeling herself, giving her response. When we were going through the file on him, once we were told he would be in our class, it gave us a look at some of his personality, but not enough of it. Sona had only had a brief conversation with Issei before their meeting today, but she would have to agree Issei was more than what the files given to her stated. But she still didn't quite understand what her bishop meant, so Sona waited for her to continue. I said during the meeting that his two best friends weren't accepted into Kyo. What he told Reya and I in class was that they were his only friends aside from the two he made in the Kendo club. Sona rose an eyebrow at this and began to put the pieces together. If Issei didn't have many friends, then he might hold that friendship in the same regard as family. It wouldn't be too much of a stretch to conclude that Issei may even value friends more than family, as his friends would accept his perverted nature, whereas his family may not. I've met people like him before. He'd do anything for his friends, all he would want in return is honesty. We haven't known him very long, but that much is abundantly clear to me. Momo took a deep breath. The end of the meeting had stung when Ais called her Hanakai, and not Momo as he had since they met. She couldn't explain why she felt such an attachment to the boy. They had only known each other for 2 days. But she felt it nonetheless, so after Ais left the student council, she was stuck in her thoughts of how to fix it. She wanted Ais to know that she actually did want to be his friend. When he was told that we didn't approach him from interest in getting to know him, rather that we were instructed to, he must have felt like we were just using him. And with his open personality, I think that must be like losing a family member to him. Now that Sona had gotten the explanation from Momo, she knew where she went wrong. If Sona had clarified that anything past the initial interaction was of Momo and Reya's own desire to be around him, perhaps the conversation would have ended better, possibly even accepting her proposal to join her peerage right away. But hindsight is always 20/20, now they just needed to adjust on how to approach Issei. Sona thought that if they explained that fact, it may benefit their cause, but before Sona could say anything about the subject, Reya spoke up. Taichu, I believe Momo and I should talk with Eyes, explain that we are his friends, whether he joins your peerage or not. At the very least, we would be an acquaintance of the Red Dragon Emperor, at best it could lead him to accept the reincarnation. Sona fixed her glasses, pushing them back into place on her nose, and ran through the possible outcomes in her mind. Just as Reya had stated, there weren't many downsides to having that talk with Issei, but Sona's plan required him to win her peerage. She thought the best option at this point was to gauge the reaction after they speak with him. I agree, speak with him before Sona was cut off by a pulling feeling and a magic circle on her hand appearing. Sona knew what was causing this. It was the same feeling when something was happening to one of the evil pieces. There were only 3 that were not in the student council room, one of which was with the very person that they were discussing. Sona lifted her right hand where the light was coming from, a magic circle appearing from her palm. Sona summoned some water shaped into a mirror and used a spell that allowed her to view what was causing the reaction from one of her pieces. The water shimmered and a bedroom came into view, which only Sona could see. The image started to come more into focus, revealing a boy's bedroom, if the posters of scantily clad women on the wall were any indication. Sona saw a bed with a blurry figure coming into view. There were 2 odd lights coming from this room. One was the same color as her magic circle, an azure blue, the other was a vibrant emerald just beside it. The 2 colored lights were pulsing in an alternate timing. When the image was fully focused, Sona could see Issei lying on his bed asleep. The blue light was coming from the pawn piece, pulsing from the white color as was normal for unused evil pieces, to the color of her magic circle. The emerald green light was what confused and concerned Sona. It was coming off of Issei's left hand. The center of the backside of his palm had a circle on it with runes that even Sona couldn't recognize. Sona looked from the 2 lights and settled on Issei's face. He was sleeping in absolute peace. He didn't seem to mind the bright lights that were coming off of him. His face was set into a small smile as he slept. Sona would never admit it to anyone, but Issei had piqued her interest. How could a boy who seemed so caring and honest hold such an intimidating power? Any who held such power in the underworld were usually arrogant beyond measure, claiming that they could just take whatever it was that they wanted. Issei's demeanor was a refreshing change of pace. Even if a sacred gear holder wasn't aware of it, the sacred gear usually had an effect on the personality of its bearer since it was attached to the very soul of the person. Issei's held one of the most powerful dragons to ever exist, and stories circulated the underworld of the arrogant nature of the previous boosted gear wielders. Carnal desires aside, Issei had to be amongst the most pure-hearted Red Dragon Emperors to have ever lived. There was only one other that was known to not have been driven mad by the Red Dragon's power. The strongest female wielder, Elsha Levitain, who was nicknamed the Norse Fire Dragon. Sona was brought out of her thoughts by her queen, who stepped behind her to see what was on the water mirror. Taichu, is something wrong? Sona shook her in response to Tsubaki's question. As far as she could see, there wasn't any negative reactions happening, but why the piece was reacting this way was unknown. No, I don't think so. It almost seems that the evil piece I gave Issei Hayatu is reacting to the boosted gear. Sona began, and was abruptly cut off by the pair of bishops. His eyes all right, Kaichu. Momo was a bit more enthusiastic in her question to Reya, but that was to be expected, as she was the more outspoken of the 2. Sona sighed. She didn't appreciate being interrupted. If they had just let her speak, she would have said that he seemed only to be asleep at the moment. But getting the feeling that they would feel best if they saw it for themselves, Sona took both hands onto the mirror as it started to glow, then expand to the size of a window so all in the room could see it. The Citri devils all stood in front of Sona's desk, where the water showing Issei's room floated. Seeing that he was just asleep, and the slight smile on his face, Momo and Reya both calmed down. Watching the alternating lights continue for a few more seconds, Reya asked Sona the question that had first came into her own mind when she saw the lights. Kaichu, why are the evil piece and boosted gear reacting to each other? Sona could only come up with a theory. She had nothing to prove it. But it was the only conceivable way she could think of to explain what was happening. Adjusting her glasses once more, Sona addressed her brunette bishop. I only have a theory, but I believe that the soul of the boosted gear was partially awoken by the power imbued into the evil piece. This would explain the green glow from Issei Hayata's arm. As Sona finished, the green light changed from pulsing into a constant shine from the host's left arm. Sona and her peerage members present stared at it, waiting curiously to see what was happening. The green light shined brighter, blocking Issei from view for a few seconds before settling down. Sona's eyes widened as she gazed back to where the light had come from, while the rest looked slightly confused by the change. There was now a green gem embedded into the back of Issei's palm, where the glow was coming from. And Issei's eyes were open, but in place of the usual light brown, they were the same emerald as the gem. Eyes as ice green, Momo whispered, commenting on the change of her friend. Through the viewing portal, Issei started to stir before a voice came from his lips that wasn't his own. I don't think eyes would appreciate being spied on. It was a mature feminine voice. It was laced with power that would have sent shivers down their spines if they were in the same room. The voice wasn't cold, more a matter-of-fact tone. This feminine voice confused Sona greatly. All books and stories had said that the red heavenly dragon was male, so why was this feminine voice coming from Issei? Issei's body lifted so he was sitting up in his bed, the evil piece still attached to his chest. His face turned to look directly at Sona. The devils of the student council all froze as Ai's face turned into a sly smile. The Citri devil, I haven't met one of you in many years. The feminine voice came through the portal. It sounded more surprised than anything else. But how did whoever this was know of Sona's family? Sona cleared her throat to speak to whoever was controlling Issei's body. She didn't want to show any weakness to whoever this was, as they were clearly above her in strength, and angering a superior opponent was never advised. Yes, I am Sona Citri. I am curious. Who are you? Why do you know my family? And why are you controlling Issei Hayao? Sona asked all of the pressing questions immediately. The woman controlling Issei held his hand over his mouth as a feminine chuckle came out of his mouth, which was a strange sight. This gesture looked weird coming from Issei's body. Once the woman had calmed herself down, she smiled through the portal towards Sona, not paying any attention to the others in the room. The only thing you need to know is that I mean Issei no harm. We were merely talking before you rudely interrupted. Issei may tell you the rest if he wants to. For now though, I believe he and I should finish our discussion. Bye-bye. The voice ended in a sing-song voice while waving. As she waved, the portal began to become unstable and quickly lost its form before the water splashed on the floor. Sona and her peerage all stepped back from the water splashing onto the floor. Sona stared at where the water was laying on the floor. She had never come across anyone with the ability to negate a communication spell before, and that had her on edge. The only saving grace was that whoever this was didn't seem to hold any harmful intentions towards herself, her peerage, or Issei. Kaichu, who do you think that was Sona's queen? Tsubaki asked. I don't know, but I think my sister might know how to find out. Line break. Right after Issei fell asleep. After Issei fell asleep on his bed, his eyes shot open, only to find himself in a large open field. The field was filled with rows of trees, flowers, fruits, and vegetables. He was standing under what was probably the largest tree Issei had ever seen in his life. It was probably over 200 feet tall and 12 feet in diameter, branches sprouting out giving shade with its lush greenery. Issei took in the sight of this beautiful place, breathing in the air, which didn't carry any of the pollution that the modern world had. Issei sat himself against the tree and stared at the rows of flowers, some of which didn't look like they grew anywhere near Japan. The wind blew past Issei, rustling his hair along with the plants of this expansive Eden-like garden. Issei remembered falling asleep, so he figured that this was a dream, and why not just enjoy this peaceful place? Issei was starting to wonder just why his mind had come up with this place. Some of these plants didn't look like anything he had ever seen before. As Issei was pondering his surroundings, the sound of a stick breaking on the ground took him his thoughts. He looked to his right and saw nothing but the hills in the distance. To the left was where the rows of fauna started, the sound of rustling grass coming from just around the tree to his left and getting closer. Issei wasn't sure if this was about to turn into some nightmare where the beautiful landscape would turn dark, gloomy and with some sort of monster chasing him endlessly. But whatever it was, he let it continue to come closer, seeing as this was his dream. A gust of wind blew from behind, and the sight of golden blonde hair swaying in the wind came into view from the side of the tree, just out of Issei's field of vision. Issei's eyes widened as he saw the long blonde hair flowing, hoping that this dream wouldn't choose the moment he saw whoever it was attached to turn this pleasant dream into a nightmare. The blonde-haired figure came around the tree and spoke to Issei as he took in her appearance. It was a woman, around Issei's height at 57. Her long blonde hair reached down to the top of her thighs. Her bangs were braided to the right side to keep the hair out of her face. Her eyes were a mismatched set, her left being a sky blue and her right a vibrant emerald green. Her skin was lighter than his own and not a blemish on it. The sight of her made Issei think she was of European descent. This woman had a figure that was clearly built from training, but hadn't lost its beauty. She was wearing a long white dress that was tight around her curves and reached to her ankles, leaving her bare feet to be seen on the green grass. The dress had small straps on her shoulders and was fairly low cut, giving Issei a look at the top of her D-cup S. Her arms were slender, no extra fat. Her legs were long and toned. A dream where a beautiful girl is wearing normal clothes, that's a change, Issei thought as he gazed at the blonde beauty. As the woman looked onto Issei, she smiled, before speaking the first words between the two of them. I have to say I'm surprised I'm the first one to speak with you. I'm glad that we can finally meet each other. Issei tilted his head to the side, slightly confused at what she said. The first, what did she mean by that, he wondered. But he could ask about it after he greeted the beauty in front of him. Issei stood from his spot and took a step towards her to shake her hand. As he stuck his hand out, he introduced himself. Hello, I'm Issei Hayao, but you already seem to know that. Heh. Issei chuckled as he realized that she had already called him by his nickname, even though he had no idea who she was. The blonde woman's smile widened as she stepped forward, past Issei's outstretched hand, and pulled him into a tight hug. Her grip around his neck was close to bone-shattering. Issei thought that she was either really excited to see him or hiding a desire to snap his neck, hopefully the former. Miss. The blonde kept her grip tight, her left hand on the back on Isa's. After a good 10 seconds she finally let go. She stepped back, the wide smile not leaving her face. Sorry Eyes, after all these years, I'm just happy we're finally face to face. She said sweetly, her voice was like that of a woman in her early 20s. It was soft and held an excited tone. She placed her right hand over her chest as she introduced herself. My name is Elsha Levitain, your predecessor, and welcome to my home. Issei was confused, had never heard that name before. Normally his dreams were of girls he'd met before and fantasized about. This was out of the ordinary, but not unwelcome. But then another part of what she said brought a question into his mind. What did she mean, my predecessor? Issei thought. Elsha giggled with her hand over her mouth and eyes closed. Her right hand extended and gently took hold of Isa's left. Eyes noticed how soft yet sturdy her hands were, before a green flash emitted from the hand she held. What the Issei yelled out, startled by the sudden flash of light. He covered his eyes with his right hand. Once the light died down, the surprise didn't fade away, as now there was a red metal gauntlet covering his left hand up to his elbow. It was a crimson red, the metal plates looked like dragon scales, with yellow horn-like protrusions coming from the sides near his wrist. It was fingerless on the top, allowing him to use his fingers, and had an emerald green gem on the center. Eyes stared at it in awe, as Elsha just looked at Issei's reaction. Once Issei finished staring at the gauntlet in curious awe, he realized that Elsha was still holding onto his hand. And he still didn't understand what was going on. This wasn't like any dream he'd had before, and this gauntlet seemed awfully close to what Sona had talked about. This gauntlet is the boosted gear, the Red Dragon Emperor's gauntlet. I was one of the previous wielders of D-Drag. When one of the wielders die, a part of you is kept inside of it, which is where we are now, inside the part of your soul where the boosted gear resides. Elsha explained. She tightened her grip on Isa's left hand, making the gauntlet disappear, now holding onto Isa's bare hand once again. Issei held her hand tighter, enjoying the sense of calming it gave him. Physical contact wasn't something that Issei was particularly used to from a girl, not even his mother after his downfall into perversity in middle school. Momo had been the only girl to actually seek physical contact with him since his first year. This was a welcome change. Elsha saw Issei staring at their connected hands. She didn't really mind, but their meeting had a purpose. She released her grip from his, bringing Issei's attention back up to her. Then the gear started turning in his mind of what she had said about their current location. So, I really do have that sacred gear, not that Sona Kaichu gave me a reason to doubt her. But Elsha, how are we inside my soul? Issei asked, not quite understanding how that was possible. Magic and things of that nature were brand new to him, so it wasn't hard to see why he was confused by this. When that chess piece you were given made contact with your chest, enough of its power radiated off of it for me to grab hold and bring you here. It's sort of like a dream, only much more vivid. Elsha's smile became smaller as she moved on to why she brought Eyes here to talk with her. Her blue and green eyes bore into Eyes' light brown. Eyes, I've been watching you for most of your life, waiting for when we could finally talk. The meeting you had with the student council earlier, what the violet-eyed one said, is true. People will come looking for you eventually. You were correct in worrying about being strong. People will come for your family, friends, anyone they think that will allow them to use you as they see fit. Issei's eyes widened as he listened to Elsha. A normal person might just play this encounter off as a strange dream, but Issei wasn't really willing to take that chance. Especially if any part of it could be true, and if the existence of devils is anything to go by, there's too much he didn't know about the world to leave the safety of his loved ones to fate. As Issei was about to ask Elsha what she thought he should do, her gaze lifted into the sky and narrowed slightly, before turning into a sly smirk. Issei opened his mouth to speak, but Elsha stopped him with a finger on his lips. Wait one moment, Eyes. Someone is spying into your room. He'll handle this really quick, she said, her gaze still turned towards the sky. Elsha closed her eyes, and a gust blew past them that sent Elsha's hair flowing behind her. Then a red glow covered her body as she turned transparent before disappearing. Where did she go? Eyes said. The bright blue sky turned into an evening shade of orange and the wind kept a constant blow now. Issei looked around the field of trees and flowers, thinking back to what she said. Who would spy into my room? There's nothing in there that would be important to anyone. Elsha's disappearance gave Issei a moment to reflect more on the events of the day, as odd as they had been. Issei took his spot back under the giant tree, enjoying the constant breeze. I wonder if I joined Sona Kaichu, if Momo, Reya and I could really be friends. I can't really blame them, they were only following orders. I should talk to them tomorrow, let them know I don't hold it against them, maybe try and start fresh. Matsuda and Motohama would be fuming with jealousy if they saw all the good-looking girls I've come across at Kyo, and it's only been 2 days. Issei shifted down so that his head was at the base of the tree, staring up into the evening sky shining through the leaves of the tree. This weekend he should see what his two buddies were up to. They hadn't hung out in almost a month, and they only had about an hour together before the other two had to go study. I wonder what it would be like if they had gotten into Kyo. Maybe katase and murayama would warm up to them too. On second thought, probably not. Motohama would get beaten down if he tried to size them up. Issei chuckled at the thought of his two new friends beating on his two old friends. That meeting probably wouldn't be pleasant for the two perverts. Then Issei had another thought about his new friends. Katase and Murayama have been really helpful these last few months. I wonder if they'd have any advice on what I should do. I'm not sure if I should mention the whole devil thing, though probably not. But I trust their opinions as much as my mom's. I'm sure they'd have some good input. As that last thought passed through Issei's mind, the wind picked up again. Falling leaves from the tree started to spin around each other, forming a close-knit cyclone. The wind didn't seem to affect anything past that point. Once the wind died down, Elsha was revealed where the leaves were spinning around each other, the sly smirk still on her face. "You're back," Issei said, getting up from his position. Elsha peered over to Eyes, her smirk turning back into that wide smile as she nodded. "Yes, Eyes, sorry about that, but I believe I can help you with your devil conundrum," Elsha said. Issei was a bit taken back by that. What did she do when she left, and who was it that was spying in his room? "You can. How did you find out who was spying into my room?" Issei said. If she had some input, he would be sure to take it to heart. Elsha put a finger on her chin as she thought of how to word her response. She wanted to hit all points that had worried him since that meeting. If they had been able to talk to each other earlier, she could have helped him through it. "Well, let's talk about what happened today, your meeting with the devils." Issei nodded in response, waiting for what she would say next. Issei wanted help. He wanted to find the best way to keep his family safe, no matter what would happen to him. He felt confident that she had at least some idea of how to help. "Sona is from a family I met while I was alive. They have always been an honest type, never using tricks to gain reputation or members," Elsha said. Her experience with them may not have been very extensive, but the rumors that had been circulating the Citri family rang true when they honored her decision not to join them as a reincarnated devil. Hearing this gave Issei a breath of relief. He hadn't doubted anything that she said, but was wary about just how far he could trust her. Issei wanted to get her opinion on Issei becoming a devil under Sona. "Do you think I should take her offer?" Issei inquired. Elsha shook her head at Issei. This wasn't her life, she had her time. "That's for you to decide. This is your life." Issei slumped his shoulders a bit. Seeing this, Elsha's smile lessened as her eyes softened. As she recalled the meeting Issei had with the student council, specifically with the two girls Eyes had befriended, she wanted to clear the air a little about this subject. "Eyes, about those two student council girls in your class." At the mention of the two girls, that was unsure if they were his friends or not, his eyes softened but nodded nonetheless. Elsha saw his reaction and understood, so she continued. "They may have only first talked to you because of Diedrag, but I'm almost certain that they really wanted to be your friend. You should talk to them tomorrow." Issei perked up when she said this. He wanted to believe that they were really his friends, but the way Sona told him that they talked to him because of what he held was disheartening. Elsha's smile returned, seeing Eyes had perked up a bit. This boy is too pure, she thought. He was the one to speak up this time, with a subject that Elsha was slightly embarrassed she hadn't mentioned yet. "Elsha, if you live in my sacred gear, where is Diedrag? He's supposed to be in here too, right?" Elsha had a wry smile. Her embarrassment was clear on her face. She nodded. "He's here. As you are right now, you aren't strong enough to wake him up. I've been awake ever since your friend moved away when you were 6. And like I said earlier, I've only been able to talk to you because of the chess piece Sona Citri gave you." Issei nodded throughout her explanation. He tilted his head at the mention of Sona Citri but decided not to bring it up. Had just asked Sona herself. He instead decided to ask about how to wake Diedrag up. "How can I get stronger so that we can talk and wake up Diedrag?" As much as Elsha wanted Eyes to make his own decisions, she also knew what it would take to wake up the Red Dragon. The normal way would be to gain enormous physical strength, which could take over a decade, which he probably didn't even have a year before more supernatural beings found him. Or to become a devil. Waking Diedrag isn't easy. You'd need physical strength on par with world-ranked bodybuilders. The more common way is a traumatic event, which is how I did it. If you accept Sona Citra's offer, the increase in strength and stamina would allow Diedrag and myself to speak to you anytime. But, Eyes, don't become a devil just for that. Issei nodded. The reasons to not become a devil had pretty much narrowed itself down to 2. The fact that he would make the angels and fallen angels automatic enemies, and what his family and friends would say or do should they find out. If Elsha thought that Sona and her family were trustworthy, then he could too. "Don't worry, I haven't made a final decision yet, but I am leaning more towards accepting. I just want to ask her a few more questions." "Very well. I think that is all the time I can keep you here, Eyes. I hope we see each other soon," Elsha said with a smile and wave as Issei's vision became blurry. Line break. Issei sat up on his bed, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. As he lowered his hand, it ran across the chess piece that was still attached to his chest. Issei grabbed it, feeling the same sensation of running water, and running it through his fingers as he did earlier. Issei stood up, looking to his clock on the wall. It was 10:30 p.m. Issei hadn't eaten anything since lunch at school, so he went downstairs to heat up the food his mother had left in the oven. Issei thought about the next school day as he waited for his dinner to heat up. There was a knock at the door. Eyes put down the cup he had filled with water and walked to the door. Pulling the door open, Issei was greeted by 4 people, 2 of which he was greatly surprised to see. The first 2 were Katase and Murayama. Them stopping by wasn't unheard of, but it was rather late for it. The other 2 were Sona and Momo. "Issei, so what are all of you doing here this late?" Issei stuttered out. Issei stood at his doorway completely dumbstruck as to who he was seeing. Katase and Murayama standing in front of his door in the middle of the night, with Sona and Momo just behind them. Katase and Murayama had a concerned look on their faces. Sona's face held its usual stoic appearance, but her eyes held a curiosity yet to be seen by Issei. Momo, on the other hand, did little to hide what she was feeling at the moment. She was fidgeting with her hands, biting her lower lip, as her eyes kept glancing to Issei before quickly moving away. Issei could guess what the two girls of the student council were doing here, Sona because of whatever Elsha had done, and Momo because of the end of the meeting. But just why were Murayama and Katase here, this late at night? As confused as Issei was at his unexpected guests, he was also kind of glad that Sona as well as Momo had paid him a visit, as he wanted to talk to the both of them. But it was concerning to see Katase and Murayama here this late. So, what are all of you doing here this late? Issei stuttered out. Murayama and Katase stepped forward, without saying anything, dragging Issei inside with an arm locked each of his by the shoulder, their worried looks fading into anger as they stomped into Issei's living room and tossing him onto the couch. Issei could only sigh in response. The only time they'd done this before was when they were really pissed at him for something. The last time they dragged him away was when they caught him staring at a busty brunette in town, when they were supposed to be getting supplies for the dinner Issei's mom was going to cook for them. The berating he got that day was legendary. He'd never wished to go through that again, but it appeared something worthy of it once again. Issei looked up to the Kendo duo, their angry faces glancing over Issei's body, as if looking for wounds of some kind. Issei tilted his head aside slightly as he watched them looking over his body closely. He then noticed the two other visitors follow inside, closing the door as they entered. Sona and Momo took their shoes off in the entryway, something the other two hadn't done, and stood on the other side of the coffee table. Issei thought this was as good a time as any to hear what it was that he did this time to anger his two friends. What did I do this time? He asked nervously. Katase was the one to answer, her hands placed on her hips, her reddish-pink eyes beaming with worry and anger. Her anger boiled over in her voice. What did you do? Are you that dense that you forgot what day it is? We said to let us know if you needed to cancel, Katase screamed out, Murayama nodding in agreement with her pink-haired friend. Issei flinched at the volume of Katase's voice, but then he began to think of what she was talking about, his eyes widening as he realized what she meant. Tuesday, we're supposed to meet up after school for my training. Issei thought. He had forgotten about that. His mind was too full of the devil proposition. It was an agreement between the three that if any of them had something else they had to do, they'd call or text the others to let them know, and he hadn't done that. Murayama stepped forward to be in line with Katase as she spoke up this time. You've never not let us know when something came up before, so we got worried that you got yourself into trouble, like you almost did with the chairwoman. We called you, and when you didn't answer, we decided to come see if you were home. Then some weird lights came from your room, and a girl's voice came from your window. We've been knocking on the door forever. Eyes. Now explain yourself. Murayama's voice held more concern than anger. Her volume was closer to a normal level. Both Momo and Sona's eyes widened at the words of the brown-haired girl, but for different reasons. Momo because she realized that the lights they saw were from the evil piece and Eyes' boosted gear, and when the female voice controlled his body. Sona due to the mention of the only female member of the school board. Then Arana Gremory. Just what did Issei do that could have gotten himself in trouble with her? Eyes was stuck, thinking of how to answer the two girls in front of him. He'd really like to tell them the truth, as he always had, including the devils and his sacred gear, but with Sona and Momo just a few feet away they might react poorly to that. So just how could he hide certain details for the time being, without it being a lie? He had an answer. It wouldn't really give too many details, but would hopefully give enough to satisfy them for now. I'm sorry. After I met with the student council, I was lost in thought on my walk home. It slipped my mind to call you too, and I fell asleep once I got home, so I'm not really sure what you saw or heard. I only just woke up a bit ago and went to heat up my food shit. As Issei was giving his explanation, he realized that his dinner was probably a chunk of coal by now. It was only supposed to be in the oven for a minute and that had long passed. So he ran from his spot on the couch and into the kitchen. When he stepped up to the oven, his worries were confirmed before he even had the chance to open it. The smell of burning food resonated from the appliance in front of him. Issei's head slumped in disappointment. Even reheated, his mother's cooking was amazing. Issei turned the oven off, turning the cold water on in the sink to cool off the tray and food so he could throw it away. Just great. Now I need to make something myself. I hate cooking, Issei thought as he pulled the tray with a black lump of what was supposed to be a delicious meal out of the oven. Placing it in the sink to cool off, Issei heard the quartet of his female classmates enter the kitchen behind him. He heard the fridge open, probably Murayama grabbing a bottle of water. Both her and Katase had been told to think of his house as their own by Issei's parents after the first time they came over. Issei was surprised when he felt two hands, one on each shoulder, pulling him away from the oven as he turned it off. Issei turned around to Murayama, who had apparently donned his mother's apron for some reason. Issei's eyebrow rose, not understanding her intention, but she was quick to elaborate. Since we're partially responsible for ruining your dinner, I'll make something for us. Yui and I haven't eaten either since we were standing in front of your house and all. Murayama stood there expectantly, thinking Issei would just listen to her, but he just stood there with a confused look. After a few more seconds of their gazes being locked onto each other, Murayama settled for a tactic she knew would work. Eyes ... Get out of here before I tell the other two what you said to the chairwoman. Issei wasted no time in practically sprinting out of the kitchen, nearly knocking over the chair that was closest to him on his way. Murayama giggled at the frantic fleeing eyes. Her and katase had learned quickly how to get eyes to do just about anything they wanted. Issei made his way into the living room where the other three girls were. Sona and Momo were on the sofa, katase was sitting on the chair to the side. They were talking rather quietly so eyes didn't make out what was said. Once they noticed his presence in the room, their conversation went silent. Katase looked at Issei questioningly, her eyes looking around him, searching for her friend. Eyes, where's Kaori? She asked. Issei pointed with his thumb towards the kitchen he had just fled from. She's in there. She wanted to make food for us since you two haven't eaten yet. I was going to argue that I should since this is my house, but she convinced me to leave her to it. Issei tried his best to keep a positive expression on his face, but katase saw right through it. She knew Eyes wouldn't just let someone else do that without some form of blackmail. She started to giggle under her breath at how Eyes tried to play it off. And by convinced ... You mean threatened to tell these two about the chairwoman? Issei crossed his arms as he had a slight pout. These two seemed to share the same brain. How else would they come to the same idea? His response was quiet enough so that katase could hardly hear it, but Sona and Momo, who had yet to say anything to Issei, heard it loud and clear. Yay, you two promised to never bring it up again. Dirty liars. Issei uncrossed his arms once he noticed the other two girls sitting on his couch, looking at him. Sonakechu, Ms. Hanakai, do you two want to eat with us? I can go help to prepare some extra helpings, the more the merrier, right? Sona adjusted her glasses. Momo looked over to Sona, waiting for her reply. Issei couldn't see it, but Momo had a frown on her face from how he referred to her once again. Sona shook her head to Issei. They merely needed to talk to him, specifically to confirm who the female voice was from earlier. They had no intention of staying any longer than necessary, especially with it being a school night. No thank you, we just needed to talk to you about earlier. Is there somewhere we can talk in private? Katase was glancing between Eyes and the student council members, not really understanding the situation. What could be so important that the two of them needed to come see him this late and talk in private sounds suspicious. Issei had his right hand on his chin, thinking of the best spot to talk privately. He wasn't really concerned about being alone with them. Elsha had said that Sona's family had a reputation of being good people, so what was there to worry about? And he didn't think Momo would ever do anything harmful to him, unless he deserved it, but this wasn't one of those situations. A light bulb turned on in Issei's head. We can talk in the guest room upstairs. Will that work? Sona nodded her head. She and Momo both stood up from their place on the furniture. Walking towards Issei, Sona addressed Issei once again. That'll work just fine. Lead the way. It won't take too long. Issei nodded towards Sona. He started leading them towards the staircase upstairs. Once he reached the base of the stairs, Issei turned his head towards where katase was sitting. If I'm not back down by the time dinner is ready, you two go ahead and start without me. Shouldn't be too long though, Issei said to her. He thought it a bit rude to hold them up because he was preoccupied. Katase shook her head. Whenever she ate with people, she refused to start unless everyone was present, and Murayama held the same habit. Probably a result of being so close for the majority of their lives. Nope, you know how Kaori and I feel about eating when someone's missing, just don't take too long. Okay Eyes, I'll go see if I can help her out. Issei just smiled and nodded, before turning back and leading the way to the guest room upstairs. Line break. Issei was standing in the guest room across from his own bedroom, while Momo sat at the edge of the bed, and Sona stood next to her. Issei closed the door, just to help keep their conversation private. Once that was done, he looked back to the girls. So, Sona Kaichu, what did you want to talk about? Sona took a cloth out of her pocket, then held her glasses in the other hand as she wiped them clean, placing them back onto the bridge of her nose, her violet eyes taking a slightly more serious look to them, while the curiosity still was the most prevalent. Before that, I feel it necessary to explain what led us to visit you tonight. Issei nodded. He had a small idea, but didn't actually know what Elsha had done to end them peeking into his room. Seeing his nod, Sona cleared her throat and began to tell Issei what made her visit his home this late. After our meeting, I felt a reaction from the evil piece I gave you earlier. Evil piece is just the name of what devils use to reincarnate other beings into devils. I gave this piece to you, just in case you came into danger before you made your decision, and step in to save you if need be. This new information was a bit of a shock to Issei. What if he had accidentally turned himself into a devil before actually making his final decision? He felt lucky that hadn't happened. He also felt a little flattered by Sona, someone who, no matter how many times he stared at those violet eyes, was captivated and drawn in by them, and at the fact that if she were willing to step in to save him, she valued his life, even if it was for her own gain. Normally in a situation like this, a summoning paper would be given to you. But with your sacred gear, you'll need multiple pieces to be reincarnated, so you were in no danger of accidental reincarnation. I also gave the piece to you for another reason. Sona's eyes lost some of the seriousness they held, which was replaced by a sincere look instead. As Issei stared into those violet eyes, they almost seemed to glow as the light from above passed over them. An evil piece is connected to the one who is the king, or commander, of the peerage. In other words, me. Sona placed her left hand over her chest as she said this, gesturing to herself, her neutral expression diminishing from the small smile gracing her lips and her eyes mirroring it. Our talk earlier was fairly brief. I didn't get to tell you that the evil piece I gave you is tied to my magical signature. In simple terms, a part of me is inside that chess piece. Holding it close will give you a sense of what I want, what I desire, as well as a look into my personality, deeper than what is shown at school. There is more to myself than what I can show at school because of my position in the student council. And the same goes for the rest of my peerage, Momo and Reya especially. Sona gestured to Momo, who was still sitting on the bed. At the mention of her name she smiled up to Issei, a gesture which he returned, before moving his eyes back to Sona. When I felt the evil piece react, I used my magic to view where the reaction was coming from. It showed your bedroom, with you sleeping. At first anyway. The evil piece was on your chest glowing, as well as your left arm, which was glowing the same green as the red dragon emperor's eyes. Then your eyes opened, and they were that same green. And a female voice spoke from your lips. She said she didn't like us spying into your room, and if you felt comfortable, you would tell us just who that voice was. Issei widened his eyes a bit. Elsha hadn't said any of that to him. He didn't know what kind of reaction Sona and Momo would have from learning it was a past wielder of the boosted gear, and he didn't know what kind of reputation Elsha made for herself. Before Issei could continue thinking of what to tell Sona, she continued. After she negated my viewing magic, I contacted someone who I thought would be able to better inform me of what I had seen. And I was told that the only possibility would be a past wielder. So my question to you eyes is, which of the two known female wielders was it, Elsha Levitain or Monica Kelpie? Sona had continued to surprise Issei. She used his nickname. She had only accepted calling him by his first name because he said he felt more comfortable that way. Issei thought this development was good, but her tone at the last name mentioned was somewhat cold. Had that person done something wrong? Sona Kaichu, you make it sound like one of these people is dangerous. Sona crossed her arms at his non-answer, but understood that he may want to know just why she was asking about these two women in particular. Both of them were dangerous in their time. Elsha Levitain was known as the Norse Fire Dragon. She was the strongest female wielder of the boosted gear. She generally used her power to help people. However, Monica Kelpie was the opposite. She became known as the Crimson Rain Empress. She slaughtered thousands just for fun. I merely ask, because the guidance of either will help you to get stronger, but if it's the Crimson Rain Empress that I spoke to earlier, she will try to use you to continue her campaign of. Issei was still at a loss of what to tell Sona. If he said that it was Elsha, it could either soothe her worries. But then again, she could think that he's only saying that to get her to drop the subject. He started to fidget a little with his hands. Issei didn't have the means to prove who it was anyways. He wasn't strong enough. Kaichu, I'm not sure you'd believe me no matter my answer. And seeing as I'm not strong enough to contact her on my own, I can't really blame you. She said she was only able to talk to me because of the power from the pawn you gave me. Sona smiled at Issei, that had given her all of the information she needed. Elsha was talented in many forms of magic, whereas Monica only had talents for destruction and deception, so Monica wouldn't have been able to draw on the power of the evil piece. I see, so it was Elsha Levitain then. That's good to hear eyes. That's all I wanted. I believe Momo wanted to speak with you as well. I'll see myself out. Momo, don't stay too long, it is a school night. Sona said her piece, not waiting for Issei to respond. Then she made her way downstairs, grabbing her shoes and making her way back to her own home. Line break. Katase and Murayama were standing shoulder to shoulder in the kitchen getting dinner ready for the two of them along with Eyes. Murayama had started making omelets, seeing as it was a light food, and she didn't want to spoil their appetite for the morning. Katase had taken to toasting some bread to go along with the omelets, as Murayama didn't want any help with anything else. Katase turned to her friend as she waited for the toaster to finish. Kaori, do you think he'll tell us about them? Murayama paused in her motion, thinking about it for a moment. She thought about the time they had been around Issei. She felt that there wasn't much they didn't know about him at this point, and he knew a lot about them as well. But this wasn't just any sort of information. What Issei was dealing with right now was more life-altering than him coming into Kyo with his pervy side running rampant. Yes, they knew about devils. It was the devils that brought them to their current living situation. Indirectly anyways. They weren't angry about it. They both understood that it was a good opportunity for their parents. Maybe we should be the ones to bring it up. I doubt he will, and I wouldn't blame him. Katase nodded as they both returned to their respective cooking duties, the two of them thinking of how to bring up the subject. Katase and Murayama both turned around as they heard footsteps coming down the stairs. They saw Sona putting her shoes on before walking out the front door alone. Momo hadn't followed her. The white-haired one must still be up there. Suspicious. Katase whispered just loud enough for Murayama to hear. Murayama nodded, then saying we should make sure he doesn't do anything to her just to be safe. The food's done anyways. Line break. After Sona closed the door to the guest room, Issei still stood in his spot in the center of the room, Momo still on the edge of the bed. Issei started to rub the back of his head, his nervous habit still remaining with him. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk to her, more so that he just didn't know where to begin. Issei couldn't see the expression on Momo's face, her head was tilted down, and her hair covered his view. Momo slowly tilted her head up, and stood up from her spot at the same time. Issei had only seen a neutral expression on her face tonight, which was odd, he'd never seen her like that before. But that wasn't what Issei saw on her face now. When Momo lifted her face, she appeared to be fighting back tears, but they were threatening to burst out. Issei was just about to ask what he had said or done to upset her, but couldn't, as Momo launched herself at him with an unnatural speed. Oof! Momo collided with Issei, sending them both to the ground, with Momo's hands wrapped tightly around his abdomen. She pulled her face into his chest as she squeezed him, a few of the tears slipping through. Issei looked down after landing on the ground with Momo attached to him, and saw the tears streaking down her face. Issei placed one hand on her back, and another on the back of her head, returning the hug she started. He felt her tense up for a brief second from the contact, but almost immediately she relaxed. Issei really wanted to know if it was something he had done that caused her to act like this, and fix whatever it was. He didn't catch his slip of the tongue in calling to her until after the words left his mouth. Momo, did I say or do something to upset you? If I did, I'm sorry, I swear it wasn't on purpose. Issei chastised himself internally for that slip-up. He was pretty sure that she really was his friend, but hadn't confirmed it with her yet. After his words, Momo tensed up again. Issei seemed to only make the problem worse, and he could feel a wet spot on his chest from her escaping tears. So Issei did the only thing he could think of to try to soothe the girl lying on top of him. He tightened his grip around her, trying to hug away the problem. A minute had passed of Momo crying into Issei's chest before she regained some control of herself. She now just laid there, still having her arms tightly wrapped around him. She rubbed her face against his shirt to wipe away the tears, not wanting to let go and use her hands. She finally spoke, quietly, but spoke nonetheless. I'm sorry. Issei had just barely caught the words, and wasn't sure what she was talking about. What did she have to feel sorry for? He couldn't think of any reason for her apology. Sorry for what he said, his hands still embracing Momo. The white-haired bishop shifted slightly, loosening her grip enough to lift her face to make eye contact with eyes. When she did, it almost sent her into another set of tears, as Issei's face held nothing except concern for her, and whatever was bothering her. But she needed to say this to clear the air between them, and for Reya since she couldn't be here. Reya and we hurt you. I should have said we were friends no matter what happens in the meeting. But I didn't. I was so excited at the possibility of you joining us, that I didn't think everything through. We were selfish. And I'm sorry. Momo's voice was still trembling slightly, but she got through it without any tears, thankfully. She hated crying. Momo watched Issei's face for any sort of reaction. She saw his eyes widen, and his face turn from worry to a radiant smile. That set her at ease. Momo was genuinely concerned that he wouldn't forgive her. That had been the last experience she had of this sort, but for some reason, she felt a lot more emotions of it regarding Issei this time. Even if this is only because of the dragon's aura. I don't care, Momo thought to herself. So we're still friends, Issei said, his face smiling. That confirmation was a big deal for him. He hadn't lost half of his friends at school after all. Momo smiled for the first time that night, and decided to answer not with words, but with an action that would put events into motion that she would be hard-pressed to stop. The Citri bishop removed her hands from around Issei, this time grabbing hold of each side of his face. Momo leaned her face closer to his, closing her eyes, before her lips made contact with his. Issei's face started to turn bright red from the sudden occurrence. He hadn't been prepared for his first with a girl. He thought that he'd have to be the one initiating it, but he'd been proven wrong tonight. That Momo planted on Issei wasn't complicated, no tongue or additional movement, just enough to get him to understand that she enjoyed being around him. As Momo released her lock on Issei's lips, the door was thrown open, with Katase and Murayama standing there wide-eyed. Neither Issei or Momo paid any attention to them, still lost in their own events. Momo smiled as she raised her head. Yes, we're still friends. For now. The Kendo duo recovered from their shock, and yelled out to the boy they had anticipated to be up to no good. What are you doing? Issei stood at the end of the hallway, after being dragged on the floor by Katase and Murayama, holding his left cheek. His cheek was red and throbbing from a hard slap from Murayama. After the two girls got him on his feet and started trying to interrogate him about what happened in the guest room, he was still lost in his own little world. After the thud the two girls heard while they were trying to eavesdrop, they both feared what Issei was getting himself into even more, which escalated into panic when they saw a devil locking lips with their friend. When Issei wasn't responding to anything they said to them, they shared a knowing look with each other, after a mutual nod. Murayama gave Issei the hardest slap she could muster in the small space. What was that for? Issei asked, rubbing the sore spot on his face. If he hadn't been lost in thought about what Momo's, and if that meant she was romantically interested in him, or if it was just a friendly, he would have seen the concerned looks of the two in front of him. But now that he was paying attention, he could see it. Katase was making an intense eye contact with Issei that he hadn't experienced before. It was different than when she would berate him for doing something stupid. It wasn't a look that he enjoyed seeing. Murayama was shaking her right hand, trying to get rid of the sting radiating through it. Once she shared the same look. It was more concerning seeing that look on the slightly more reserved of the two girls, and Issei knew something was wrong. "What's wrong? You two okay?" he asked them. Murayama was the quicker one to bring herself to voice her concerns. Katase was at a loss for words at the moment. Her experience with devils hadn't been bad per se, but it resulted in rekindling her small fear of abandonment. Not that she was dependent on eyes for anything, but the three of them had spent almost every day together since their first meeting, and didn't like the idea of him not being around anymore. Murayama steeled herself. They needed to hear what happened, and wouldn't show any leniency if he were hesitant to say it. She didn't have the abandonment issue that Katase had, but didn't want something to happen to Issei. He was important to her. She hadn't put a label on what that meant yet, but her feelings were secondary to their current situation. "Eyes, what happened in there? Why are you involved with their kind? What do they want with you?" Murayama's voice was level, and deliberately didn't say devil just in case their suspicions were wrong. But how could they be? Why would devils have so much interaction with him, unless they wanted something from him? If he didn't know they were devils, she would come off as jealous, or just didn't like them, which was better than revealing that they were more than human. Issei stopped rubbing his cheek when he heard what Murayama said, and her tone as she said it. The way she said their kind was surprising. She wasn't normally the stern one of the two. The thought of Katase and Murayama knowing about devils hadn't crossed his mind, thinking that Momo had just wronged them in some way before. He was a little unsure of what to tell them. He could tell them about Sona wanting Issei to join the student council, but that didn't explain why she needed to come here so late. He didn't want to lie, but he hadn't decided if he was going to tell them about him being asked to become a devil, so he didn't see much of a choice here. So he settled with something that seemed believable and not overly complicated. "Sona Kaichu asked me if I wanted to join the student council when we talked after school. I guess I left my phone in her office, and they found it after my mom sent me a few messages, so they brought it to me in case the messages were something important." Katase's face grew red from anger. She knew he was lying. They heard his phone go off while they were standing outside. She didn't want to dance around the real subject anymore, her emotions getting the better of her. She grabbed Issei's shirt collar and pulled his face closer to hers. She practically shouted at him before lowering her volume since Momo was still fairly close by. "Don't lie to us, Eyes. We know what they are. They're devils. Now what do they want with you?" Issei went wide-eyed at Katase. They knew about devils, how he thought as he stared back into Katase's eyes. When the grip on his shirt was released, Issei took a step back and looked between his two friends. Their unyielding stares not wavering in the slightest. Issei then realized his lie had been seen through, and that was the one thing he always said he'd never do to them. His head hung down for a second, feeling guilty for doing just that. "I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if I should tell you about them. I didn't know if you'd believe me or if it'd scare you. I wanted to tell you. I swear," Issei said as he lifted his head up to make eye contact with both of them. Katase still hadn't recovered from her anger completely, especially when Eyes hadn't really answered anything that they had asked him. "You didn't answer the questions. Why are you involved with them, and what do they want with you?" Issei wanted to just come out and say it, but remembering that Momo was still here, he thought it should wait until they could talk alone. And then once he told them everything, he'd ask for their advice on what they thought, and if they'd still be around if he did turn into a devil. "Can we talk about it in a little bit?" Unbeknownst to the other three in the house, Momo had been able to hear everything that was being said. And once she heard that Katase and Murayama knew about the existence of devils, she paid extra close attention, also contemplating coming out to talk to the three that they meant no harm to Issei or anyone at Kyo. "How do they know about us? This could be bad. They might sway Issei against joining Kaichu. I need to clear the air here." Coming to her decision, Momo opened the guest room door, making her way into the hall. As she turned the corner of the hall where they stood, Momo was followed by the gaze of the Kendo girls that had taken Eyes from her, but Eyes himself hadn't noticed her approach. "Eyes, I should really get going now," she said. The sound of her voice behind him made Issei jump. "Momo-ga, don't scare me like that. Phew, it is pretty late, so I'll talk to you tomorrow," Issei said hopefully. The memory of the coming back in full force, but Issei was able to keep his face from flushing thankfully. He smiled over to his white-haired friend as he turned to face her. Once his back was turned, Katase and Murayama sent Momo suspicious glares. They weren't just what the girl was pulling by Issei. Momo smiled back and nodded her head, happy to see that their friendship was back on track. Her eyes then went to Katase and Murayama, who were still staring at her. "Yup, before I go, I'd like to say something. I could hear you talking from the guest room. Devils have really sensitive ears. I just wanted to say that Eyes is my friend. Devil or human doesn't matter to me, and we'd never intentionally bring any harm to him." Momo didn't wait for a response, instead taking to bringing a magic circle underneath her to teleport herself back home. As the azure blue rune-filled circle appeared underneath her, Issei, Katase, and Murayama all looked on in amazement at the display. And after another moment, the circle shined brightly, and as the light died down, Momo was gone from the house. Line break. Issei, Katase, and Murayama had just finished the meal that had been prepared by the girls. It was a quiet and quick meal. All three of them were hungry from not having anything since lunch, and the time was quickly approaching midnight. Issei stood from his chair and gathered all of the dishes, quickly washing them as the girls went into the living room to wait for their talk with Eyes about what was happening with him. Eyes wiped his hands of the soapy water from cleaning off the dishes that were used. then made his way towards the living room, taking in a deep breath to prepare for whatever questions they might ask him, as well as the possible criticism. He walked into the living room, sitting on the chair off to the side of the couch, where Katase and Murayama were sitting. "Okay, what do you want to know first?" Issei asked, not sure where to start. He figured they would bring up whatever it is they wanted to know. He shifted forward in his chair, finding the most comfortable position, since they could still be awake for a while. Katase looked over from Issei to Murayama, having a silent conversation between themselves about the order of their questions. They had spent so much time together over the years that they could pretty much speak to the other without actually needing to say anything. She looked back to Issei before laying out her first question. "How long have you known they were devils?" Issei looked up to the clock, seeing the time, and did the math of exactly how long it had been since he found out. "About 7 hours, at the meeting after school today." Issei shifted his eyes back between Murayama and Katase. Their expressions were varied. Katase was still slightly angry at Eyes for lying. Murayama was neutral at the moment. She was upset that Eyes lied, worried about his involvement with devils, and relieved that Momo said they wouldn't harm him. Murayama spoke up with the next, and most important question. "What do they want with you?" Issei sighed. He knew this question would resurface, but the full answer was rather long. He wanted to make up for lying to them, so giving them the full rundown on what Sona told him seemed the best option. "When I went to the student council, it started with just regular questions, mostly about what I wanted to do and what club I might join. Sona Keichu asked me if I believed in anything supernatural. I said I was more curious about it than a believer. She told me a story about the history between the devils, angels, fallen angels, and 2 dragons. Dragons exist too, Murayama asked. She figured that if devils existed, so did angels and fallen angels. There were probably more things too, but she hadn't considered dragons to be a real thing. Issei nodded. Yay. When she asked me if I would believe her if that story were all true, I told her I'd need proof. That's when she told me that her and the student council were all devils. Katase jumped in at this point, thinking Issei was just stalling to avoid answering the question. That doesn't tell us what they were coming to you for. Her voice was impatient. Issei flinched a bit at Katase's tone. She was right though, so far his story hadn't answered them. His turned apologetic. I know. I feel bad for lying to you earlier. I just don't want you two getting into something that might get you hurt. You already know about the devils, and you know just about everything there is to know about me, so I want to tell you everything. I don't like hiding things from you. Murayama and Katase both felt better at that, so they nodded and waited for Issei to continue, trusting that he really would tell them everything. I didn't know why she would tell me that they were devils, so I asked what it was they wanted. She said there's something inside me that might make people look for me, and if they can't find me, they could go after my family and friends. I thought maybe she just wanted to take whatever this thing was and that'd be the end of it. But she said that she wanted me to join her to become a devil, and that she wanted my help saving a friend from something, and to help change the underworld by teaching young devils in a school she wants to open. She said she would help me get stronger so I could protect you too, my parents, anyone I care about. The two girls got a little nervous when Issei said that they, along with anyone Eyes knows, could be in danger just for the fact that they were associated with him. And even more so when he mentioned Sona asking him to become a devil. Katase was the more affected, if only by a little bit. She lost eye contact with Issei, her head hanging down when she spoke up. When she asked if you become a devil, what did you say? I didn't give her an answer. She gave me this chess piece and then I left. Issei said as he reached into his pocket, pulling out the pawn piece Sona handed to him. When Issei touched it, the blue color pulsed again, this time barely emitting any light that was nowhere near the intensity it had earlier. Issei felt the same sensation of moving water when he held the pawn in his hand. The girls breathed a relieved sigh that he hadn't become a devil yet. Issei brought them back out of their heads when he said that wasn't everything he had to say. After I got home, I was holding this pawn and fell asleep, or I guess was forced unconscious. Katase and Murayama both had confused expressions when he said that. Now they didn't blame him for not calling them after school. They noticed that the chess piece Eyes was holding had the same blue light they saw from his bedroom window earlier, and it was the same color that appeared around Momo as she disappeared. The thing Sona Keichu said I had inside me, it was one of the dragons from the story she told me, and a soul of one of the previous wielders forced me asleep to talk to me. She could only do it because of the power from the chess piece. I'm not strong enough to talk to them yet. Katase and Murayama both thought, noticing a pattern, that Issei seemed to have a lot of girls starting to come around him. They didn't speak up though, rather just listening as he continued what happened to him. And no matter how strange all of it may sound. Her name was Elsha. She said that the dragon is still asleep, and will be unless I get stronger. So I can't even use whatever abilities this dragon gives me. Elsha told me that she knows the family that Sona Keichu is from, and that they're trustworthy. They don't lie to people to get them to join them. After that, I woke up and you guys were knocking on the door. Line break. The two girls just sat there, taking in all the information that Issei had given them. He was asked to become a devil. They could be hurt just for knowing him, and he apparently had a dragon's soul inside of his. They both noticed how Issei hadn't said whether he wanted to accept the offer or not. Do you want to become a devil? Katase asked, looking at the boy sitting to the side of her and her friend. Issei shook his head. Issei was looking exhausted from today. In a matter of under 12 hours, his entire view of the world had been changed. Honestly, I don't know what to do. All I really want is to live with people I care about in peace. But, even Elsha said that was pretty much a pipe dream, that eventually people will come for me. So I guess all I can really hope for is to keep those people safe. If I can do that, I don't care what I am. Issei was going through scenarios in his head. What could happen if he didn't accept becoming a devil, and possibly never waking his gear when he needed it? And then if he became a devil, he'd at least have a chance to protect the two in front of him. That brought another thought made its way to Issei. What would happen to their friendship if he did become a devil? The thought made him nervous. He didn't want to believe they'd throw that away, but it was a possibility. Katase, murayama. If I were a devil, would ... we still be friends? His question was quiet. The girls knew he only got like that when he was afraid of whatever the answer would be. Murayama answered for the both of them, not waiting for Katase to think about it. There was no way they'd just push Issei away because he became a devil to keep them and his family safe. Even though he was considering becoming something that was written to be nothing but evil, his intentions were anything but that. Of course we would. Is that why you haven't answered yet? Both Katase and Murayama smiled when they saw Issei nod slightly with a small frown on his face. Underneath all the perversion, Issei was a pure and simple guy. All he really wanted was people to love, whether they be friends or something more, and to help those who needed it. That, and how my parents would take it if they ever found out. They're finally proud of me again. I really don't to disappoint them any more than I already have. Issei said, his tone coming back to normal, knowing now that he'd still have two good friends no matter what. We'll help you with whatever you need, Eyes, as long as you don't change back into a pervert. Katase said, her soft tone turning into a teasing one at the end. She agreed with Murayama. What Eyes was biologically didn't matter. Thanks guys, Issei said with a laugh. If he reverted back into the pervert he used to be, he knew there'd be hell to pay from these two. With knowing that they would be by his side, his decision was just about made. But there was still one more thing Issei wanted to know before he made it final. It was just who Sona's friend was that needed his help, and what that help entailed. Sona made it sound like she had a plan. If he was going to change his entire being to help this person, he needed to know what that plan was. I think I might do it. Become a devil, I mean. I just have to ask Sona Kaichu one more question. Who is her friend that needs help, and how she intends to do it? The girls looked curiously at Issei, seeing his expression change when he talked about helping this random person. The silence continued with the trio lost in thought. Then Murayama brought them back to reality with a question that couldn't further from anything they had been talking about. Hey Eyes, why don't you call Yui and I by our first names? You called the girl earlier by her first name. Issei and Katase both stared at Kaori. They were taken back by her question. It was just so random. But Katase agreed. Why didn't he knew them longer and better than the thieving Snow White? Issei turned his head up, a hand under on his chin. I guess because I didn't think you wanted me to, and I didn't want to make you mad and get hit any more than necessary. Well, you should. I think we've passed that point, don't you? Line break. Issei woke up to his alarm clock, groggy from staying up later than he usually did, and then had too much on his mind to fall asleep quickly. He was laying on his bed face down, blanket barely covering the lower half of his body from all of his tossing and turning in the few hours of sleep he actually had. He slowly lifted his left arm, bringing it down full force onto the noisy clock that dared disturb the rest he really needed. Issei groaned as the light of the morning sun came through the clit in his window curtains, raising his head to wipe away the sleep that wanted to pull him back in. Ugh, mornings. I hate them. What can't school start in the afternoon? He groaned in a raspy morning voice. Issei lifted himself up with his arms, trying his best to not fall back asleep, and pulled his knees in to sit on. Issei stretched his arms up, yawning, finally coming out of his daze. A feminine voice came from behind him near his desk. Yufufu, good morning, sleepyhead. I take it you're not a morning person. At the sound of the voice in his room, Issei turned 180 degrees and jumped back towards the headboard of his bed, smacking the back of his head on it as he overshot his movement. Issei closed his eyes from the sting the sudden contact with the wood gave him. Issei rubbed the spot of his head where he hit, slowly opening his eyes to see who had trespassed in his room. He was absolutely sure that he locked his door when he fell asleep. He wouldn't forget to do that after the one time Murayama and Katase slept over and decided to pour ice-cold water on him to wake him up to go for a 430m run around town. As his eyes opened, his vision was fairly blurry, still recovering from both just waking up as well as the impact against his bed. He could see the outline of his window, his desk next to it, and a shadowy figure sitting in the chair at the desk, with one leg crossed over the other. The shadowy figure was clearly a girl, based on the curves he could make out. The hair was long, so it wasn't Katase. But the hair of this figure cascaded over the front of her shoulders, so it wasn't Murayama either. So who was it? Issei's vision continued to clear. He could now make out the color of the hair of the girl in his room. It was same brown as his, and the hair that laid over each shoulder was tied into braids. Issei had only met one girl with those features, but why would she be in his room so early in the morning? Issei's suspicion was confirmed as his vision returned fully, and he could see the girl facing him. The light brown eyes, with that gentle smile, and overall calm demeanor. There was no doubt about it. Issei was seeing Reya in his bedroom ... and as far as he knew, he was awake. So Issei asked the only thing he could at the moment, with his brain still not at 100%. Reya, is that you? Why are you here so early? The figure who Issei thought to be Reya stood up from the chair and made her way towards him, her hips swaying with each movement. Issei couldn't help but to get a little excited at the sight in front of him, an alluring female figure swaying her hips as she walks towards you in your own bedroom. It was the start of many fantasies he'd had in the past. For this to be happening first thing in the morning was like a dream come true. As the figure stood in front of him, he could take in the full form clearly, and it was most definitely Reya. Bending down to be eye level with Issei, the braids of her hair swaying from the movement, but still laying in the valley between her ample bust. As Issei was struggling to keep eye contact with her, his eyes wanting to just stare at the magnificent pair of a mere 2 feet in front of him, she placed her right index finger on his forehead and pushed lightly, her smile widening as her push almost made Issei fall back into his bed. Nufufu, yes, that's me. I wanted to talk to you. I thought you might enjoy me waking you up. Issei recovered from Reya's contact before falling into his bed, sitting back up, his eyes landing on the strained white button-down shirt of the girl's QO uniform, noticing how the button between her S was straining to keep them hidden from the world, secretly wishing that it was burst open to give him a peek inside. Issei's drowsy state left him in limbo between his old perverted self and his new and more controlled mindset, so he at least wasn't making grabbing gestures with his hands. Reya's gaze caught where Issei was looking, but didn't really mind, knowing how hard he was working to control himself. An occasional slip-up wasn't that worrisome. Instead of scolding Issei, she aimed to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. First, and more importantly, was to have the same progress as Momo, not wanting to fall behind. And secondly was to make sure Issei was fully awake. Reya placed her right hand under Issei's chin, her thumb resting just under his bottom lip, and pulled his gaze up to hers. She leaned in closer, just as Issei had met where her eyes were, and closed them before her lips made contact with Issei's. Her to Issei was quick, lasting barely 2 seconds, but it did the trick. Issei was wide awake now. Instead of removing herself completely from Issei, after her lips pulled away from Issei's, Reya tilted her forehead into his, leaving it there as she said what was on her mind. Issei's eyes were wide in shock. 2 girls that he'd only known for less than a week had had him on their own, and for reasons he didn't understand. Eyes, I want you to know that I'm sorry for how I handled things between us. Issei tried to focus his sight onto Reya, but with her being so close, her head laying against his, he couldn't ... so he settled for closing his eyes, to take in everything she was saying. Reya's voice was only held more emotional than usual, which was new, seeing as he had only been around Reya when she was calm and smiling. I wish I had told you how much I want to know more about you, to spend more time with you. Even after only 2 days, I know you're an important person to me. The surprise from Reya had brought what little function Issei's brain had gained to a grinding halt. He wasn't ready for anything of this sort, and was just scrounging for something to say to the girl as he was taking in the scent of whatever shampoo Reya had used recently. The only thing on his mind was the pleasant smell of strawberry radiating from the brunette attached to him. He tried to speak to her, but she cut him off as she lifted herself back to a standing position and held her finger against his lips. I need to go, we can talk later, okay? Instead of words, Issei only nodded, his mouth held open, still recoiling from the shock of the unexpected events. Reya smiled again towards him, tracing her hand along Issei's jaw as a blue magic circle appeared underneath her, and disappeared just as Momo had the night before. Line break. Issei made his way downstairs to have something to eat before heading off to school. As he made it to the base of the stairs, he caught the sight of the entryway to his house, seeing 2 extra pairs of shoes. Oh yeah, they stayed over since it was so late, Issei thought, realizing that the shoes belonged to Katase and Murayama. This wasn't the first time they had spent the night at his house. A few weeks after they met, Issei learned that Katase had been living with Murayama for a while now. Murayama had said that their house was being fogged for termites, so she asked if they could stay over for a night. Little did Issei know, that was only a ploy to try and test his resolve in the training they had been giving him. The 2 girls had gotten into his room in the middle of the night, gotten into the skimpiest clothes they each owned, and crawled into his bed after setting a camera in the corner to see how he would react to waking with them in his bed when he woke up. They had been genuinely surprised when he hadn't even tried to grope them, seeing the quick results of being separated from his 2 perverted buddies from his other school. Thus they were determined to limit the time he spent with Matsuda and Motohama. The more controlled Issei was actually pleasant to be around. Issei stepped into the kitchen to find the 2 girls already sitting down at the table with his father. His mother just finishing cooking their breakfast. She turned to see her son enter and sent him a teasing smile. Eyes, you should have told us Kaori and Yui were staying over. We would have just gotten a hotel room to give you 3 some privacy. His mother said, much to the dismay of the 3 teenagers, both Katase and Murayama choking on their drinks. Issei had turned bright red from the implication that he invited the girls over for an intimate night alone without nosy parents around. Catching on to the tone of his wife, Issei's father continued to embarrass the 3 teens as he lowered his newspaper to look his son in the eyes. So eyes, who can we expect to have our first grandchild? Mom, Dad, what the hell was the only thing Issei could say in response to his parents. He told them over and over again that they were only friends and nothing more. But they still insisted that there was more going, and his father couldn't have been more proud. As a young man he wished to build a harem of his own. Apparently the apple didn't fall far from the tree. His mother spoke again, further driving in the sentiment that her husband had started. I wouldn't mind having both of them as my daughter-in-law. His parents were too weird to handle sometimes. Line break. Issei was on his way to school, walking in between Katase and Murayama, who had been glaring at him ever since his parents made comments about them having children together. They thought that Issei had given them the idea that there was something going on when there wasn't. They were only friends. That was all. Eyes made sure that his eyes were set straight ahead of him, so as not to set off either of the girls. He could feel their gazes burning a hole into his head. They had been walking like this for the past 15 minutes, and were getting near the school gates. Before they made it into the campus, Issei wanted to explain that he hadn't said anything to warrant his parents' comments. They just had already thought of the two girls as family given the amount of time they spent around Issei. Issei stopped in his tracks on the sidewalk about 300 feet from the entrance to Kyo Academy, the two girls stopping with him, and their gaze never leaving his temple. Issei sighed as he glanced at each of them and spoke. I swear on my life that I have never given my parents the idea that we are anything but friends. They just really like you too, he said, holding his right hand over his heart in an attempt to give extra meaning to his words, but it didn't work. That was made clear by the words Katase said. You lied to us yesterday, so how can we believe anything you say, she said as she crossed her arms under her chest, still glaring at Issei in a combination of irritation and embarrassment. Issei turned towards the pink-haired girl, the volume of his voice reaching levels that were dangerous, almost being able to reach the students on the campus grounds. Seriously, I said I was sorry about that. How was I supposed to know you knew what they were? Issei caught on to how loud his voice was and rightfully corrected it, his hands together in a prayer-like manner, begging for them to forgive him for something he hadn't actually done. I didn't say anything like that. I swear, please, don't be mad at me. I hate it when you two are like this. Even with his begging, the two girls kept their arms crossed and the glare on Issei. But then their glare faltered, and both were sent into a fit of laughter. Katase was holding her hands around her stomach, and Murayama tried to hide her laughter with a hand over her mouth. PFFT, ha ha ha. Did you really think we were mad at you? Eyes, we know your parents were just messing with you, Katase said, trying to keep herself from laughing long enough to speak. Her and Murayama often played off of the teasing his parents would give him whenever they came over. Last time it was just about which one was his girlfriend. Now having kids with both of them, Issei was stuck. He had gotten used to the teasing, but he really thought they were still mad about the lie from last night. But he was relieved that didn't seem to be the case, so he resumed in walking to school. Issei was thinking about how and when to approach Sona about his last question, before possibly becoming a devil. Should he do it before or after school? Probably after. Who knows how long that process takes, and would it hurt as they walked through the gates? A tug was felt on Issei's shirt from the right side. Looking towards it, he saw Murayama looking at him like she wanted something. What's up, Murayama? Murayama's face turned into a pout. Eyes, you agreed to use our first names, she said through puffed cheeks and narrowed eyes. Issei rubbed the back of his head. He forgot about that part of their conversation. He had a small smile on his face as he spoke. Sorry, Kaori, I forgot. So, did you need something? Murayama let go of Issei's shirt. Glancing between him and Katase, she nodded. When you go talk to the vice president, can we come with you? Issei was surprised that they wanted to bring themselves around the devils of their school. He didn't think they would after how they interrogated him last night. Issei didn't know how they knew about devils, but that was something that could wait until later. Issei couldn't think of a reason for them not to come with, if that was what they wanted. I don't mind, but are you sure that you want it? He asked, looking from Katase to Murayama. Katase stepped a little closer to her two friends, keeping her voice low enough so that no one else would be listening in. We're sure, Eyes. We told you that we'll help you with anything. And this is a big deal. We want to be there for you. Katase grabbed onto Issei's hand and held onto it. Her eyes held both a comforting and serious look. Issei smiled at her, grateful for their support. She was right though, this was a big deal, and having friends by your side to support you was always a good thing. Alright, we'll go talk to Sona Kaichu after school then. Let's head to class. Line break. The final bell of the day rang throughout Kyo Academy, signaling the time for Issei to go and talk with Sona, with Katase and Murayama by his side. He slowly gathered his books and put them in his bag. He didn't need to rush, since the two girls were coming to his classroom before heading off to the student council office. Issei hadn't seen Momo or Reya all day. They weren't in any of his classes today. He figured that whatever Reya had to leave for this morning involved Momo as well. But during lunch, Issei had seen the tall girl with long straight black hair, Tsubaki Shinra. Issei asked if he could speak to Sona after school, which she said that it wouldn't a problem. She was a little apprehensive about him bringing the two girls that were seated next to him, but Issei told her that they had known about her kind longer than he had, so she reluctantly agreed and left to inform her king. Issei hadn't really been paying attention in his classes today, thinking of the things he wanted to ask Sona before giving his final reply on if he'd become a devil under her. He had gone over all of the things that happened yesterday, which was a lot more than he was used to. One thing that Elsha said to him stood out to him. She referred to Sona as a Citri and not Shitori. That'd be his first question. Eyes, you ready? Murayama's voice came from the doorway. Issei looked up as he placed the last book in his bag, and saw the two girls ready and waiting. Issei held a nervous smile. It was time to possibly change his life forever. Honestly, I'm nervous, but let's go. Line break. Issei, along with katase and Murayama, stood at the door to the student council. Issei held his hand out to knock on the door. He looked to his left where the girls stood beside him, and took a deep breath as he saw them give a nod telling him that it was now or never. Knock knock knock. Issei lowered his hand, waiting for someone inside to allow him to enter. He didn't wait very long. The door was pulled open, and one of the two members whose name he hadn't yet learned was the one standing there. It was the girl with blue hair and eyes who was only just a bit shorter than Tsubaki. Her ocean blue eyes met Issei's, then glanced over to katase and Murayama. She must have been informed that there would be 3 arrivals, because she didn't look surprised to see the 2 girls. The blue-eyed girl smiled as she pulled the door fully open, stepping in line with the door and one hand gesturing inside. Come in. Kaichu was at her desk. The 3 nodded, and entered inside in single file, Issei leading the way. Katase and Murayama took in the look of the expensive and rather fancy-looking furniture pieces that the student council had. Issei was only facing straight ahead. Walking deeper into the room of the student council, Issei saw the rest of the members, and one who he couldn't recall seeing before. She was a girl just about Issei's height, maybe a tad shorter, with raven black hair just like Tsubaki and Sona. Her hair was held into a ponytail with an orange ribbon and flowed down to her calf. Her eyes were the same violet as Sona's, but they didn't pull Issei in like Sona's did. While Sona's eyes were calming and analytical, this new girl's eyes were mischievous. She wore the standard girl's uniform, with black socks that ended just below her knees. Her figure was just as alluring as the red-haired girl Issei had met yesterday. Her arms and legs were toned and slender. The most eye-catching aspect to her for Issei was the size of her S. Their huge were his thoughts as he had a hard time looking away. But a quick pinch to his side from Murayama brought him back to reality. The new girl was finishing up a discussion with Sona, so when the door opened, her full attention was drawn to the 3 new bodies in the room. Her violet eyes landed on katase and Murayama and seemed to be appraising their value. For what exactly Issei wasn't sure. When her eyes came to Issei, the look of appraisal left, and a flicker of familiarity came with a matching smile. This girl looked to be the very definition of the perfect traditional Japanese woman with all of her features. The new girl faced directly towards Issei, then Sona spoke just quiet enough for the humans in the room to be unable to hear it. Akino nodded with a smile, before walking towards Issei to leave the student council office. As she walked past Issei, her eyes stayed on him, and her smile turned from a kind one into a smile that sent both excitement and shivers throughout his body. Once she was past him, and had closed the door behind her, Issei saw both Momo and Reya standing side by side. Reya had that calm and sweet smile she usually did. Momo was waving exuberantly, bouncing slightly as she did. Tsubaki informed me that you wanted to speak to me. What is it that I can do for you? IsseixSona said, bringing his attention from the 2 bishops to her. Sona was now in front of her desk, leaning backwards onto it. Issei noticed that she seemed more relaxed now than she had when they last spoke in this room yesterday. Issei cleared his throat and repeated the questions he wanted to ask in his head. Yes, Kaichu, I'm pretty sure I have my answer to joining you. I just wanted to ask a few questions before making it final. The girls of Sona's peerage had fallen in line to the side of the room, listening closely. When Issei said he had just about made his choice, Momo was trying not to bounce uncontrollably from excitement. Reya's face was still smiling, but was playing with her hands in front of her waist, trying to hold down the excess emotions running through her. The blue-haired girl had her gaze locked onto Issei, as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Tsubaki held her stoic gaze, switching between Issei, Sona, and the girls that had followed Issei. The girl with the reddish-brown hair was looking at the Kendo girls nervously, like she was worried about what could be said in front of them. Sona stood up from her position against her desk, walking back to her chair and sitting down into it, her hand gesturing to the chair on the opposite of the desk. Of course, why don't you sit, and I'll answer anything I'm able to. Issei nodded, stepping around the fancy wooden chair before taking his spot in it. There was only one chair next to him, so Issei looked back to katase and Murayama to see where they wanted to position themselves. But they had apparently already decided to stand behind him, one on each side, and a hand on each shoulder. Sona took her usual stance, elbows leaned onto the table with her fingers laced together, and chin resting against them. Her crystal-clear violet eyes pulling Issei in, not moving an inch from his light brown irises. Issei took a silent breath, trying not to show that being here was making him nervous. The squeeze on each of his shoulders told him that katase and Murayama could already tell. That sentiment helped. His questions were clear in his mind. So he began what could possibly be the last conversation he'd ever have as a human. Yesterday, Elsha mentioned you by the name Citri instead of Shitori. Is Shitori an alias of some kind? Sona removed her chin from her hands, laying them onto the table, fingers still laced. Yes, Shitori is an alias I took when I came to the human world. My real name is Sona Citri. I am the heiress of my family. The Citri family is an old and noble family name of the underworld, which is a part of the 34 remaining lines out of 72 that existed previous to the Great War. Issei took in this information, a bit saddened at hearing that potentially half or more of her kind had been wiped out in that war she told him about yesterday. Death was something Issei had never handled well. But what's done is done. That was an event from multiple generations ago, nothing he could do about it. So he nodded and asked his second and most important question. You told me that you want me to help a friend of yours from being enslaved to someone. I'd like to know more about this situation, who this friend is, and the plan that I can help with. Katase and Murayama hardened their grip on Issei at his tone when he said enslaved. One particular talk made it abundantly clear how Issei felt about forcing someone to do something against their will. It was a mutual feeling between the three of them. Forcing someone into something they didn't want was absolutely unforgivable. Sona rose an eyebrow at the change in Issei's voice, having never expected him to hold animosity towards anyone. But in the situation he was asking about, that could help her, to help Reya as her longtime friend and future rating game rival. You've already met the person in question. A longtime friend of mine, Reya's Gremory, a second-year student here at Kyo Academy, and also a devil of noble. At the last name of the girl Issei was supposed to help, both Katase and Murayama withheld the urge to facepalm. Of course, it was just his luck to be needed by the daughter of a woman that Issei had been hitting on a few months back. The fact that she had been fairly receptive to his advances was more worrisome now that he'd be in direct contact with that woman's daughter. Issei, on the other hand, was trying to remember where he had heard that name before. Being only the third day of school, Issei could count the second-year students he'd met on one hand. There was Sona, Tsubaki ... and then that redhead he bumped into ... wait ... Reya's Gremory, that was the redhead's name with the huge knockers and purple lace panties, Issei thought as his eyes went wide. What kind of situation had the girl gotten into, he wondered. What I meant when I said that she was being forced to be someone's slave is that she is being forced into an arranged marriage, which is a very old custom of pure devils. But this man she is engaged to, Razor Phoenix, he only sees her as a trophy, as his property. He openly speaks about the things he'll force her to do, and that he'll do to the rest of her peerage once they get married. He's been known to abuse the members of his own peerage, until they willingly submit to him, effectively turning them into his slaves. Issei's hands clenched tightly around the chair, hearing the actions of the man that was trying to lay claim to Sona's friend. His hair shadowed his face, leaving Sona the only one to be able to see what his expression was. It was one full of disgust and rage. Issei mumbled quietly to himself. Katase and Murayama unable to hear what he said, but they didn't need to. They knew Issei well, and had a very good idea of the things that were going through his mind. The female devils in the room, however, were all a bit shocked and happy at what they heard Issei mutter. Women are not toys. They're people, and should be admired, respected, loved, not beaten, and broken to do anything you want. This monster deserves nothing but death, beaten into the ground until there's nothing left. Feeling the tension coming off of Issei, Katase and Murayama both leaned forward, their cheeks nearly touching his, and alternated whispering to try and calm Issei down. Eyes, you need to calm down, Murayama spoke first. No one here is in danger, he'll get what's coming to him. Katase finished. They both lifted themselves up when they saw Issei release his grip on the chair and lift his head up. Issei, if you decide that you want to join me, I have a plan that will ensure no one will be able to harm Reya's or her peerage. Reya's only option, other than Razor agreeing to end the engagement, is another custom devils have. It's called a rating game. Issei's eyes still held some anger from thinking about how Sona's friend would be treated if this marriage were allowed to happen. But it was minimal compared to just a moment ago, thanks to Katase and Murayama. Issei took a deep breath in through his nose and let it out through his mouth, letting the rage dissipate. Then returning his gaze to Sona, she continued explaining her plan, seeing Issei's attempt to calm himself. The rating game is where a devil with a peerage is set against another peerage in combat. The rules vary based on the type of game, but the goal is to incapacitate the king of the opposing peerage, along with any of the other king's servants. Should you be the winner, Reya's engagement will be dissolved. However, should you lose, the marriage will be set in stone, with no further options to escape it outside of either Reya's or Razor dying. Issei was listening carefully of how to free Reya's of this man who seemed to be as evil as books had described devils. What he took away from her explanation was that all he really needed to do was to take out Razor, and the marriage wouldn't happen, and she'd be safe. So he would need to train himself with that in mind if he were to join Sona. At this point, it sounded like Reya's needed Issei just as much as Issei wanted to protect his loved ones. The doubt Issei felt about becoming a devil had further withered away, his ambition to protect everyone he could taking over. Now there was only one more thing Issei needed to know, how the process worked and how it would affect him. Kaichu, can you tell me what goes into the reincarnation process? Will I feel anything from it? The entirety of Sona's peerage had been standing there silent, just listening to what the two of them said. They had the misfortune of meeting Razor on one occasion, and the impression he left on them resulted in a similar response to the one Issei had given. Razor didn't deserve any of the girls that he commanded, he was devil trash. When Katase and Murayama leaned close to Issei's face, Momo tried her best to restrain the jealousy that was clawing its way out of her. Reya merely looked on in great interest, not minding the very obvious feelings the Kendo girls shared with Momo and herself. But Reya seemed to be the only one to accept how she felt about Issei. Dragons attracted both power and lust. They were also known for guarding anything they valued with great ferocity. Sona lifted her hands, palms facing up to the ceiling, the newly familiar blue magic circle appearing just above her hands. A chessboard appeared in Sona's hands, with one set of pieces on the board, with some of the piece missing. Sona placed the board onto her desk and picked up the king piece. The pieces left on the board were 7 pawns, 1 rook and 1 knight. The remaining pieces were the same pure white as the one she had given Issei. The board that the pieces stood on was glowing in an azure blue, pulsing just as the pawn had in Issei's grasp last night. As I said last night, these chess pieces are used to reincarnate beings into devils. Once used, they turn to the color of their respective king, in my case, blue. These pieces reside inside of each member and give the person they are used on certain enhancements. The feeling of when this piece enters you differs from each king. My members will tell you it feels like floating down a river. The pieces can be forced to bond with anyone, but each are best suited with specific type of person, and each have their merits and faults. The bishops are best suited to an empathetic and supportive personality, which are Momo and Reya. They get enhanced magical prowess. My knight Tomo Meguri gets a boost to speed. This piece is best used with someone who's loyal beyond any other. My rook, Tsubasa, gets incredible strength and defense, is best used with those that have unbreakable morals. That leaves what are 2 most versatile pieces. My queen, Tsubaki Shinra, gets the perks of all the other pieces, and is best for the one closest to the king in personality. The pawn has no immediate bonuses, but when they enter enemy territory, they can choose any piece to promote to, except the king. Pawns are best when paired with someone who can blend into almost any situation. As Sona listed off the pieces, she pointed to the girl with reddish-brown hair, Tomo Meguri, as her knight. The tall girl with blue hair and eyes, Tsubasa, as her rook. Tsubaki was her queen, and by process of elimination, Issei would be a pawn. Being called a pawn was a little bit of a blow to the ego, until Sona explained how the pawn was useful. Along with the queen, they could be the most influential of the pieces. Floating down a river ... just like last night. Issei thought as he recalled how Sona said it would feel to have her reincarnate him. He had that very same feeling just before Elsha pulled him into the boosted gear. Issei stood from his chair, taking a glance at each of the people he knew and trusted in the room. Momo and Reya, katase and murayama were all looking at him. He stood less than a foot in front of Sona's desk. He'd made his decision. Kaichu, I want to join you. Sona smiled brighter than she had in a very long time. She had just gained the Red Dragon Emperor as a member of her peerage. Her plans changed the underworld for the better were now looking far better than before. The members of the student council stood across from Issei, katase and murayama. Sona had the 7 other pawn pieces sitting on the desk next to her. She knew Issei would need more than 1 piece, but the exact number was unknown. But before Sona would reincarnate him, some other parts of being a devil should be explained to Issei. Her hand traced over the pawn pieces as she looked back to the boy who would potentially become her only pawn. Issei, before I reincarnate you, I want to tell you what else goes into being a devil. Sona lifted her right hand, and a piece of paper appeared in it through the brief glimmer of a magic circle. The paper had the Citri family crest in the center. Sona held it out to Issei, who took it and glanced over the symbols. Devils are ranked by a class system. When someone is first reincarnated as a devil, they are considered low class, a servant devil to their king. The majority of devils are in this rank. The paper I handed you is a summoning seal. We use that to be summoned by humans to grant their desires for a fair price. This is one way that devils make their way into middle class. There is no difference between low and middle class, other than the acknowledgement of your strength and knowledge by devil society. Performance in raiding games is among the ways to advance, as well as performance in a conflict like a war or battle of some kind outside of a raiding game. The pacts with humans and raiding games are the most efficient ways to go up in rank, since the ceasefire is still in effect. Sona said to Issei, watching him look over the summoning seal. From middle class you rank up to high class. The same methods are used to determine if someone is worthy of the title. When someone becomes a high-class devil, they are given a set of evil pieces to make a peerage of their own. Sona finished. Sona hadn't made Issei an official member of her peerage yet, but that didn't mean she wasn't thinking of ways to motivate him further, wanting to draw out his ambitions to become stronger. Sona, and by extension, Reya's, would need him to reach a level of strength that had never been attained in the amount of time they had left. And what better way to motivate someone who had been previously talked about making a harem than to subtly give him step-by-step instructions of achieving just that? Issei lifted his eyes from the paper, looking back to Sona. Kaichu, is this a point-based system of value placed on each commendation to know when I'd be able to go up a rank? Katase and Murayama, who were still standing directly behind Eyes, listening closely to their talk. Sona hadn't paid them any attention, choosing to focus on Eyes since he was the one she would be recruiting. They'd learned quite a bit more about devils today. The biggest piece of information being that, if Issei made his way up in the ranks, he could reincarnate people himself. As interesting as that was, the thought of Issei being in control over a group of people, probably all women, was frightening. Issei could hardly manage himself. Unfortunately not. The ones that are determined to be eligible to take the test to progress to the higher rank is overseen by a committee of elder devils. Sona replied to Issei, "Well, there goes ever getting a peerage of my own. Never been good with first impressions, he." Issei thought. The only positive first impressions he'd made had been with Sona that he could recall at least. "I see. Is there anything else, Kaichu?" he asked the violet-eyed girl. Sona nodded her head and held up her right index finger. "Yes, one more thing. In the next month or two, we'll need to get a familiar for you." Issei's eyebrow rose in confusion. Issei had heard the term from video games before, creatures mostly animal-like, that were in some sort of master-servant pact. Much like Issei would soon be to Sona. "Familiar?" he asked. Sona pushed her glasses up on the bridge of her nose and nodded. "Yes, a creature that is contracted to you only and will help you in any way you see fit. They come in a wide variety of forms. Most can only communicate with their master, but some are capable of speech." Issei thought about what kind of creatures he would have the chance to be contracted to. His thoughts slipped into wondering if there were any female humanoid familiars for reasons. But now that Sona had said all she felt necessary at this time, she brought him back to reality. "Now that's finished. Issei, are you ready to be reincarnated?" Sona said, trying to hide the excitement of having such a potential powerhouse being hers. Issei looked around the room. Yuro was still looking at Issei like he was a mystery. Tamo had stopped being nervous about the Kendo girls being in the room and gave Issei a bright smile with a thumbs up. Momo and Reya were both clearly excited that Issei would be joining their peerage. Tsubaki mirrored Sona's expression, which was that of a small smile. "I'm ready," Issei said, coming back into eye contact with Sona. Line break. Sona stood in front of Issei, with 6 of her pawns in her left hand. The other 2 were in her right hand held up to Issei's chest. The 2 pawns started to glow lightly, meaning Issei needed more than only 2 pieces. This didn't really surprise Sona all that much. The power of a heavenly dragon was bound to be costly, but it was a price she was willing to pay. Sona had done this process a few more times. Now seeing what reaction 6 pawns would receive, the glow was only a little brighter than before. Sona held her usual stoic expression, but some of her servants were getting nervous that he would require too many pieces. Momo bit her bottom lip, hoping to hear that he wouldn't require more than the 8 pieces given to each high-class devil. Reya was hiding the same emotion as Momo. She took to shifting her weight from side to side, trying to remain still. Sona placed all 8 pieces onto Issei's chest, and felt them resonate in the familiar form they had for her with each previous time she used them. The pieces then started to glow much brighter than they had before, and began to move around by themselves, forming a circle on the center of his chest. The Citri magic circle appeared inside the circle of pawn pieces, telling Sona that she only had to use the chant to complete the process. Sona took a step back, holding both arms out to the side, and started the chant to bring Issei into the world as a devil. She held her eyes closed as she focused on the magical process of binding the piece of herself in the pawns to Issei's soul, marking him as her servant. The rest in the room all waited with anticipation, seeing the final step starting to take place. "In the name of Sona Citri, I call to you Issei Hayaru to reborn as my servant. You, my pawn, flow with the tide of the underworld, and live under my command." As Sona's command started, the evil pieces attached to Issei started to rotate around the magic circle counterclockwise. And as she finished the chant, the pawns sank into Issei's chest, making his skin glow the same azure blue from underneath his clothes. Sona opened her eyes and looked at Issei, seeing how the reincarnation went. When a human was reincarnated into a devil, there would be a surge of their demonic presence after the process took hold. She watched him as he looked at the way his skin was glowing. When the pieces started rotating on his chest, the feeling of being immersed in water came over Issei. But that quickly changed as the pieces started to be absorbed into his body. The calm sensation of floating in water changed into being swept away by the undertow of the ocean. Issei's eyes shot all the open as he stumbled, nearly losing his balance, and falling face first onto the floor. As the glow started fading, so did the feeling of being thrashed around by the strongest water current he'd ever experienced. Issei let out a sigh of relief as he started to feel normal again. He looked at his hands in front of his face, clenched and unclenched his fists, seeing if anything felt different. He could feel the difference in the strength of his hands. Issei closed his eyes as his arms dropped back down. He remembered Momo saying that devils had really sensitive hearing, and judging by the sound of birds chirping and footsteps walking in the hall, that was true. Issei took in a deep breath through his nose, and could smell and identify each of the perfumes the girls were using. The pleasant smell sent his mind back to his old ways, imagining them in bikinis, nurse outfits, naked aprons, and then finally just naked. Issei scrunched his face and bit the inside of his cheek to bring his hormones under control. This wasn't the time for fantasies. Issei opened his eyes and looked at the group he'd just become a part of, and was met with a scene he hadn't been expecting. All of the girls were staring at Issei like he had grown horns or something. Their eyes were locked onto him. Momo, Reya, and surprisingly Sona were blushing. Sona seemed to be the only one trying to fight it, biting her lip hard enough for it to start bleeding. Reya, normally clear light brown eyes, now looked hazy as she stared at Issei like he were ripe for the taking. Momo was squirming a little, her eyes shut, her legs tightly clamped against themselves, and the slightest sound of moans coming from the bubbly bishop. Issei sent the girls a worried look, not understanding that it was the surge of energy that flooded the room that caused this reaction. Issei looked back towards Katase and Murayama. They weren't looking at him the same way the student council was. They had confused expressions. Even they had been able to feel the change coming from Issei, but didn't know exactly what this sensation was. So this is the presence of a dragon. Amazing. Issei heard the voice of Tomo for the first time. Issei turned towards Sona's servants. Just as he made eye contact with Sona's knight, a different feeling than the one when the pawns entered him. A searing, burning pain that radiated throughout his entire body. Ugh, Issei grunted out as he fell to his knees. Eyes Murayama and Katase yelled out, trying to catch him before he fell down, but quickly retracted their hands as they touched his arms. When their skin touched Aise's, it felt like his skin was on fire. Not just feverish, no, it was like they had touched the side of a pot of boiling water. Sona snapped back into her analytical persona, looking at her new pawn on his hands and knees. Sona stepped towards Issei and knelt down beside him. Momo ran up to the group on the ground, kneeling down in front of Ise, and placing her hand on the side of his face. Her eyes widened in fear of the heat coming from him. She turned towards Sona, the volume of her voice almost screaming. Kaichu, he's burning up, he'll die if we don't cool him down. Sona knew how hot the inside of his body was right now. She could feel it too, only on a lower scale. The evil pieces didn't just give the servant a piece of their king, it also established a link between master and servant. This connection was normally small, just enough to tell the emotions of the reincarnated devil. The king could almost read the minds of their servants if they practiced enough. Sona was good at reading her peerage, and was able to tune out the connection normally. But she miscalculated what would happen if one person held 8 pieces in their body. The link had been there ever since the pieces formed the magic circle on Issei's chest. She felt the floating feeling. She felt it turn into a torrent of water trying to pull her under. And now, she felt like her vessels were filled with fire instead of. It was borderline excruciating. She couldn't imagine how it felt for Issei. I need him laying on his back, Sona said calmly, fighting off the burning sensation to try to help Issei. Both her and Momo covered their hands in a layer of water magic, so they could withstand the heat, and grabbed Issei by the shoulders. The water started to steam and evaporate just as soon as it came in contact with Issei, but they were able to flip him onto his back before the heat was unbearable. Once Issei was on his back, his eyes were fluttering in pain, but still remained closed. He took a ragged breath before making a strained attempt to ease the worry he could feel coming from his newfound connection to Sona. I'll be all right. Issei couldn't finish his statement, as he passed out from the pain he'd been feeling. What's wrong with Ise? Why is he so hot? Katase asked Sona after she saw Issei lose consciousness. Her and Murayama kneeling at Issei's feet. Sona sat on her knees at her pawn's head, looking at him, wondering just how to cool him down so that he would be out of harm's way. The only way she could come up with at a moment's notice was to cover him in magically enhanced water, but she'd need someone else who was adept with elemental magic. Sona raised her hand to her right ear as she thought of who to call for help, and made a calm circle, and called the one who had a lot to lose if they couldn't save Issei. The circle spun as the connection was being made. When it stopped, she heard idle chatter in the background. Hello, came the voice of Reya's Gremory from the other side. Sona wasted no time in asking for the assistance of her rival. The urgency of her request was clear as day by the tone of her voice. Reya, I need you in a kino in my office immediately. We need to cool Issei off before his body fails, Sona commanded, yet the concern was clear. Sona heard all the talking on the other end stop. Her voice was loud enough to be heard by everyone in her clubroom. Some shuffling was heard through the circle before Reya's replied and then ended the call. We're on our way. Hold out until we get there, was she said as she ended the calm circle. Sona summoned the purest and coldest water she could muster, which wasn't even a quarter of the amount she needed. She covered Issei's neck and the inside of his thighs with the water, having it act like a ice pack, cooling the larger arteries in the body. Sona watched as the water started to lose the magical stability it had, and started steaming off once more. She couldn't afford to summon more until Reya arrived with a kino. Pacing herself was important here. If she exhausted herself, then that could end badly for Issei, either comatose for life from an overheated brain, or dead. Sabaki had run next door to the infirmary, grabbing ice packs to hold on Issei until Reya and Akino made it to them. Thankfully, that didn't take very long, even with the distance from the old school building to their location. Reya and Akino burst into the door, panting slightly, and made their way to Sona kneeling on the ground still. Sona made eye contact with Reya, seeing the sweat start to form on her brow, a combination of the heat and physical exertion. What do you need us to do? Sona, Reya asked, not wasting any time on learning what caused this to happen. She could hear about that after Issei was stable. Sona straightened up from her more relaxed stance she had while she was waiting for help to arrive. She summoned the enhanced water once more, placing on the same spot she had before. Before addressing Reya, summon water at the highest purity and coldest temperature you're able. Reya, place yours at the underarm and forehead. Akino, make yours blanket his torso. Sona gave out her instructions, hoping the ice packs had done enough to give them the time they needed. Reya and Akino didn't bother responding, instead doing as Sona had requested. They placed the water onto the designated spots on Issei's body, and it seemed to be holding, at least for now. Sona, Reya and Akino were now standing, and were talking about what put the boy in this position. The pieces took hold, and he seemed alright at first. Reya, you're familiar with the surge of energy from a newly reincarnated servant, correct? Sona asked Reya, who nodded in response, so Sona continued. His surge ... only a minimal amount of it was of devil origin. The rest was the energy signature of a dragon. Reya sat herself on top of Sona's desk, crossing her legs and arms as she went over the information, but she'd never seen a reaction like this before. But after recalling Sona's words, she asked her question. Sona, you said pieces ... as in multiple were used to reincarnate Issei. How many did you have to use? Reya asked Sona. Sona sighed. She knew what reaction was about to come her way, but she'd find out eventually anyway. Yes, Issei required all 8 pawn pieces to be reincarnated. Both Reya and Akino faltered and shot Sona a look of disbelief. They had only heard of people of Satan-class strength needing that many pieces to be made into a devil. And this was only a teenage boy who hadn't even awoken his sacred gear. All 8 pawns, Reya exclaimed. The sound of her yelling caused Issei to stir slightly, before returning to his motionless posture. Momo, Reya, katase, and murayama were all seated around Issei, waiting to see when he'd wake up. Momo brushed the hair out of his face, the worry still plastered on her face. The unconscious Issei leaned his head into the touch, causing all 4 girls to sigh with a smile. He seemed to at least be doing a little better. Momo had been racking her brain for the cause of Issei's pain, and had found something interesting that might explain it. So she looked up to her master, calling out to her, Kaichu, I think I might know why Eyes is like this. The entire room paused in their actions, looking towards Momo, Sona included. Please tell Momo, Sona said to her bishop. One of Momo's skills was sensing a being's energy. It wasn't quite on the level of a capable senjutsu user, but it was better than most others. It was also what made her intuition a force to be reckoned with. But Momo along with the other 3 girls were distracted by the green light that started pulsing Issei's left hand. Kaichu, Eyes' hand, it's glowing again, Reya said, not paying attention if she had interrupted any current conversations. The object of her attention was laying there, unconscious, and there was little that would tear eyes and ears away. Sona and Reya walked up to where Issei was laying, looking at his left hand, and that same green glow was there. Reya looked on in great interest, having not experienced what the student council had the previous day, when Elsha had taken control of Issei. She looked at the symbol on Issei's hand, and was baffled when she didn't recognize it, especially since she fancied herself reasonably acquainted with most written languages that were still around. Sona looked at the glow, and a glimmer of hope spread itself through her, hoping if this were Elsha, that she could explain what was going on in Issei's body. Murayama and katase looked at the glow in awe, not drawing the connection to the green and blue glow they had seen coming from Issei's bedroom window yesterday. Sona's hopes were answered as the glow brightened, but the voice that came from the hand of Issei confused and slightly angered Reya. Hello again, Sona Citri and her peerage. Oh, Murayama and katase, you're here too. Elsha spoke from Issei's hand. When Elsha spoke, Sona's attention was solely on the spirit. The only voice she would concern herself with at this moment was hers. Murayama and katase, on the other hand, had turned from expressions of awe to confusion. What was this voice, and why did it know who they were? Sona answered the voice for the group. Hello. Issei wanted them to be here with him. Do you mind if I ask what's happening to him? Elsha hummed, the words of how to properly explain Eyes' predicament and how it was being handled. Well, in short, the 8 pawns used on Eyes, while required to reincarnate him, were too much for his current body to control. It made his body start to tear itself apart. However, I'm handling it. Eyes will be just fine by tomorrow morning. He will need some time to adjust though. Sona crossed her arms gently, listening to the Norse fire dragon. The condition of her pawn was Sona's top priority at the moment, and she wanted to know just what was being done to him to rectify the problem. Forgive me if I come across rude, but can you tell us what you're doing to fix the problem, and is there something we can do to hasten the process? Elsha giggled lightly at Sona. Had Elsha not been able to access the connection between her and Issei, she may have been insulted by the tone she used, but Elsha could feel that she was only worried for her new servant. And that was a trait she respected about the Citri family, even if their connection to their servants wasn't as famous as the Gremories. Yufufu, no need to apologize, Lady Citri, I can feel the connection with you just as Eyes can. The excess power had already started to damage some vital organs, so I'm altering them, his lungs, heart and vessels to be specific. The only thing for any of you to do now is wait for him to wake up, which should be tomorrow morning. Sona heard the Kendo girls gasp when they heard Eyes' heart and lungs had been damaged so quickly. Had this mysterious voice not taken action, he'd likely be dead very soon. Sona had an idea of how Elsha was altering Issei's physiology, but asked just to be certain, as it may just change how she trained Issei over the next year. And by alter the damaged organs, you mean replace them with the dragon's equivalent, correct? That is correct, Lady Citri. The problem was that when the power increase took hold during the reincarnation, Eyes took a deep breath and activated a fire-breathing ability of his sacred gear. His human lungs weren't capable of withstanding the heat so soon. The heat then spread through his veins and arteries, damaging them along with his heart. The dragon organs will be better equipped to handle the strain of his abilities, Elsha said, trying her best to explain the exact cause of Issei's need for new body parts. Reya didn't know who this Elsha person was, nor did she care at the moment. What she did care about was the fact that Sona lied to her, which was more unacceptable when she recalled the fact that she promised to marry this boy if he helped defeat Razor. Reya had accepted being married to the Red Dragon Emperor, but not this unknown apparently female dragon. Her outburst over her assumptions taking hold of the conversation. But you should know, there are some side effects, Elsha said, simultaneously as Reya spoke louder. Sona, what the are you trying to pull here? She asked with a dangerously low and gravely tone. Sona caught on that Reya was mad about something, but didn't realize that she was the only one who knew about Elsha Levitain, due to her family's interaction with the legendary boosted gear user. Reya stepped closer, her eyes changing from the usual serene bluish-green to crimson orbs of fury. What are you talking about? Reya, Sona asked. Reya started to shake, rage threatening to boil over. I'm talking about our deal. You promised me the Red Dragon Emperor. That was who I agreed to marry if he beat Razor. Reya yelled out, her crimson aura flaring around her. Murayama and katase both heard the conversation happening between the two high-class devils, but their reactions were vastly different. Murayama was alarmed at the mention of Reya's being married off to Issei, and katase at the mention of a potential problem when Issei wakes up. What Murayama yelled out, referring to the marriage comment, that wasn't something Eyes told them about. katase was getting just as angry as Reya's, but for people speaking over the voice coming from Eyes. She needed to hear what would happen when he wakes up, hoping it wasn't too bad. Everyone shut the hell up and listened to her, katase yelled at nearly the top of her lungs, getting everyone in the room to quiet down instantly. Reya's eyes were still crimson with fury, but agreed that listening to the absent female voice was a more pressing matter. Sona quickly shut out the thought of why Reya was angry with her, giving her attention once again to Elsha. Seeing the room quiet down, Elsha repeated herself. Right, as I was saying, Eyes will experience some side effects for about the first few days after waking up. What kind of side effects should we expect? Sona was quick to ask. Elsha gave a response that only really upset katase and Murayama, while Reya and Momo were a little excited to see this. Since Eyes is having a good amount of his more vital parts changed into that of a dragon's, he will act more like a dragon does. His actions will driven by more primal urges. Katase sighed. That was not what she was expecting. But a pervy Eyes was better than a dead Eyes. She never thought she'd say that ever. Just great. Eyes the pervert is coming back, katase said, defeated. All that hard work seemingly for nothing, not that it was really his fault. Reya chuckled, before looking towards her bishop counterpart. That sounds like it could be fun, doesn't it, Momo? Issei had been taken home to rest until his body's functions were back to normal. Or what would be his normal state from now on. Sona requested that Momo and Reya use a magic circle to bring Issei home and place him in bed. Meanwhile, she would walk to his house with Reya and the Kendo girls. Sona, katase, and Murayama wanted to be there to ensure that Issei was properly taken care of. Reya hadn't gotten any answers as to why Sona had lied about Issei being the host of the Welsh Dragon, and once Issei's care was handled, she would continue that conversation. A group of 4 girls walked along in silence, Murayama and katase walking side by side in front of Sona and Reya. The human girls were wondering just how Eyes' mom would handle 4 new girls suddenly appearing to be with her son. She warmed up to the 2 of them over the months they hung out with Eyes, and had been dropping not-so-subtle hints that she approved of either of them pursuing a relationship with her son. Up until only recently, they both would have adamantly refused that they saw him in that way. Sona was thinking of what Elsha had said about the change in Issei's body. An ability of the boosted gear that enabled the user to breathe fire had started to burn Issei from the inside, but would have a better chance at controlling it after his recovery. Elsha must have already completed a portion of changing the organs, because Sona still felt heat coming to link to Issei. But this wasn't a heat that harmed either of them, it was more of a comforting feeling, like sitting in front of a campfire. That brought thoughts of the coming months, how to proceed with Issei's training. Sona and her family were expert users of water and ice magic, so while she could spar with him to increase the strength of the legendary dragon's fire, she couldn't help him control it. She'd need to look for someone who was familiar with those types of flames. 2 beings came to mind, one who held the hottest fire attack known amongst current dragons, and the other was rumored to be able to freeze even the famed Phoenix flames. The silent walk came to an abrupt end as they approached the Hayadu residence. Murayama and katase stopped just outside of the fence leading to the front door, and turned to the 2 older girls behind them. Vice President, how are you going to explain Eyes getting home without his parents hearing and all of the extra girls? Murayama asked. Reya rose an eyebrow when the brunette said extra and looked to Sona. Sona met Reya's gaze and gave a sigh. She didn't like having someone else handle what should be her task, but Reya was better suited for this. I believe it would be best for Reya to handle that. Her family has always been the more charismatic type, she said, bringing a smile to Reya's face at the compliment, while the Kendo girls held a narrowed gaze. Yay, we know, katase murmured, thinking back to how they came to learn about the existence of devils. Reya ignored the comment and stepped past them, up to the door. The smile didn't leave the crimson heiress face as she rang the doorbell. A distant voice was heard saying 1 minute as footsteps could be heard by the devils with their superior hearing. Only a few more seconds passed before the door unlocked and opened, revealing Mrs. Hayadu. She smiled as Yui and Kaori were the first ones she saw, then she grew curious as to who the other 2 girls were. Yui and Kaori, so good to see you again so soon. And you two must be the ones Momo and Reya said would be coming over to check on eyes, she said, greatly surprising Murayama and katase. Reya and Sona recognized the signs of mental manipulation from the eyes of Mrs. Hayao. Yes, my name is Reya's Gremory, second year at Kuo Academy. This is Sona Shitori, also a second-year student. We're both friends of your son, Reya said in a sweet voice, not seeing any reason to use any magic to further alter the thoughts of her potential mother-in-law. Issei's mother smiled, then moved in line to the open door, gesturing for the group of girls to come inside. It's so nice to see Eyes gaining friends that really care for him. Please, come in. Eyes is upstairs asleep with the other two. Try not to wake him, all right? Yes, of course, Reya said, still holding her smile. She stepped inside. Sona quickly followed, both taking their shoes off in the entryway. Murayama and katase rushed in the door, flicking their shoes off and sped up the stairs to Issei's room. Mrs. Hayao raised a red flag in the minds of the Kendo girls with the way she worded things. They both thought that Momo and Reya were doing something more than just seeing to Issei's well-being. Reya just blinked in confusion at the speedy getaway of Issei's friends. Line break. Inside the boosted gear. Eyes, wake up, Eyes. A somewhat familiar and feminine voice rang out from above Issei as he slept. Issei only turned onto his right side, trying to ignore the voice wanting to disturb his peaceful rest. He rarely slept this well. His body was at just the right warmth. The only thing that seemed off was how high his pillow was lifting his head. His eyes still closed, Issei tried to reach under his pillow to adjust it, his hand coming in contact with two sensations that started to pull him awake. The back of Issei's hand felt like it was touching grass, while his palm was touching something soft, yet firm, like flesh covered by thin clothing. Yufufu, I didn't know you warmed up to me that quickly. HMMM. What is it that clock of yours says each morning? Oh yes. Eyes, wake up, or I'll you. The woman's voice said, as Issei felt a hand brush his hair away from his face. Issei's eyes shot halfway open, and saw only white, with a shadow being cast down from above. He blinked a few times, trying to clear the sleep away to make sure his eyes were working right. The white material hadn't changed, but the shadow had moved slightly. Issei turned his head left to see what was making the shadow, and was met with the emerald and sky-blue eyes of Elsha, who was smiling down at him. Instead of removing himself from his position, Issei turned his back to his resting spot, closing his eyes again. The hand that had tried to move what he thought was his pillow pulled him closer into the abdomen of Elsha with a small smile on his face as the sense of his surroundings came to him. The scent of a plethora of different flowers came into Issei's nostrils. He mumbled to the past wielder with a tired voice. You smell nice, Elsha, like flowers. Elsha ran her hand through Eyes' hair again, still smiling down at the boy. She wouldn't mind staying like this if the circumstances were different, but she needed Issei to be awake. Elsha removed her hand from Eyes' hair and pinched his cheek lightly. Not enough to hurt, but enough for the sensation to register and wake him up a bit more. Thank you for the compliment, Eyes, but I need you to wake up. We need to talk about the changes happening with your body. Issei's eyes opened again, this time all the way. The memory of what happened starting to come back. Sona reincarnating him into a devil, and then the burning pain that he felt just a moment after, then passing out. Issei pulled his head back, his right hand propping him up. Issei looked over to where his other hand was. The grass he thought he felt was there, but when he pulled himself closer to Elsha, he'd been grabbing rather firmly onto her rear. Issei quickly removed his left hand as he blushed and tried to apologize. Aw, sorry about grabbing you like that. Elsha chuckled. She wasn't mad, since she knew he didn't realize where he'd been touching her. Yufufu, that's all right, Eyes, no harm done. Issei sat up, now feeling ready to hold a conversation. He looked around briefly, seeing that he was back in Elsha's garden, so that meant he was back in his sacred gear. How this was possible would no doubt confuse Issei for a long time, but if magic was real, then there probably was an explanation for this too. Done looking at his surroundings, Issei made eye contact with Elsha. You wanted to talk about something, is it about me turning into a devil? He asked the foreign blonde. Elsha shook her head at Issei, her right hand moving towards Issei's chest with her index finger extended, poking it directly where his heart is. That's part of it. Your heart, lungs as well, that's what I need to talk to you about, she said, removing her hand, bringing both of her hands to her lap. Issei tilted his head a little to the side. Is there something wrong with them? Do you know what that pain I felt was from? Issei asked her, coming to realization that she knew why that burning feeling had come over him. Issei's full attention now on Elsha. There was something wrong, but it's fixed now. I'm sorry I didn't have the time to ask for your permission before I started the process, Elsha said, her eyes lowering down to the ground, hoping that Eyes would take the news well. Elsha took the silence as a sign that Eyes wanted her to explain what happened, so she did. When Sona Sit replaced the pieces inside you, there was a burst of power that flooded your system. That unlocked your sacred gear, along with a few of its abilities, one of which you unintentionally activated. When you took a deep breath in, you started a fire-breathing attack. Your body didn't have time to adjust, and the heat from it damaged your heart and lungs. So I had to replace them with dragon parts. Issei had been listening intently, and his mouth dropped open when she said that he now had the heart and lungs of a dragon ... and would be able to breathe fire. That sounded awesome, but Elsha didn't sound excited about it. So was there some sort of drawback to it? He wasn't really familiar with the weaknesses of dragons, so only the pros of dragon organs came to mind, and if he was honest, unless there was a big con to being turned into more of a dragon, he wouldn't mind having a few more. Would I have lived if you didn't change the parts that were damaged? Elsha took a moment to think. There was the possibility that Sona could have come up with sort of plan to heal him, but she wasn't willing to wait to see if it would come quick enough. The damage would have killed you within an hour. Your heart couldn't move the well enough, and your lungs couldn't take in enough oxygen from the air. Issei gave Elsha a bright smile, trying to show that he wasn't mad, and understood that she was only looking for his well-being. Thank you for saving me. I really appreciated Elsha. The downcast look left Elsha's eyes, coming back to happy glint that was there before. You're welcome, eyes. Now, let's go over the pros and cons of your new dragon parts. Line break. Back in Issei's room, Murayama had been the first one to burst through the door, not using the common courtesy of knocking, thinking that she would catch eyes red-handed in bed with them. She hadn't been completely wrong, but what she saw wasn't inappropriate in any way. Eyes was there on his bed, still asleep, with both Momo and Reya sitting cross-legged to each of his sides on the bed. Momo just sat there, hands in her lap, clenching her interlaced fingers every so often. Murayama was surprised that Reya would be the more forward of the two girls. Reya was holding Aiza's left hand with both of hers, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his, her eyes not leaving Aiza's face to even register that there was a new entry in his bedroom. Katase quickly followed into the room, seeing the same thing as her friend, and was relieved that nothing had happened while she wasn't there. Instead of following the lead of the two devil girls, Katase took her seat on the chair at Aiza's desk, spinning herself around slowly. Murayama took a seat at the edge of the bed, by Aiza's feet, which were underneath the blanket. Katase stopped spinning in the chair, hearing Reya and Sona making small talk with Aiza's mom, then looking towards Aiza and asking what was on her mind. Do you know what, or who that voice was that came from the glow on Aiza's hand back at school? Can we trust that they're actually taking care of Aiza? She asked, looking more towards Momo, since she had been around the white-haired girl more than Reya. Reya looked up from Aiza, hearing the question, and looked towards Momo to see if she would be the one to answer. Momo wasn't paying attention to anything but Aiza. She was unreachable at the moment. Reya sighed and turned her gaze towards the girl in the spinning chair, making sure that her voice carried its typical gentle air, not wanting her worries to bleed through too much. The voice was a past wielder of Aiza's sacred gear. Her name is Elsha Levitain. She was known as the Norse Fire Dragon. Elsha had a reputation of being nothing but an honest and reliable person while she was alive, so I believe that we can put our faith in her and know that she is doing what she needs to help Aiza through this. Katase nodded towards Reya as thanks for placating her worries. She resumed spinning in the chair until footsteps rang throughout the hallway, then Sona entered the room with Reya directly behind her. The human girls watched in curiosity as Reya closed the bedroom door and Sona approached Aiza's sleeping form. Sona stood just to the right of Momo and placed a hand on Aiza's chest, where the evil pieces had centered themselves. Her blue magic circle appeared in between her hand and his shirt, spinning around clockwise, before quickly changing direction. It did this for 30 seconds before the light died, and Sona adjusted her glasses before speaking, her eyes lingering on Murayama and Katase more than anyone else. Aiza is doing just fine, all damage has been healed, so he's just resting now, Sona said in her analytical voice. Murayama let out a sigh. Then her gaze settled on Reya, thinking back to her outburst in the student council office. That's good. Since Aiza is okay, mind telling us just what you meant when you mentioned marrying Aiza, she said as her eyes narrowed, Katase following her expression and nodding in agreement. Reya met the look of the humans in the room in kind, crossing her arms. That's between Sona, Aiza, and myself. Her short response only angered Murayama and Katase, but surprisingly, Murayama was the one to voice their issue. There's nothing that he doesn't tell us, so if he didn't mention something like him being set to marry someone, then I doubt that Aiza knows about it himself. So we'll ask again, what was that about? Instead of answering the question, Reya only tried to prove them wrong, thinking there was no way that they knew everything about the boy in question. So she used a subject that most men would hold to themselves, even in their dying breaths. Really, now you know everything about him, even what place and material he uses to masturbate. While Sona turned her head away from the group in slight embarrassment, Momo and Reya listened in interest, while Katase and Murayama held smug grins. Katase crossed her arms, one leg crossed over the other and bouncing. Of course we know everything. He likes this chair, Katase said, pointing to the chair she was currently sitting in. And Aiza has a fetish. Size isn't particularly important, but larger ones catch his attention easier. So he likes to recall the girl with the best S he'd seen recently. Katase looked at Reya as the crimson-haired girl's expression turned from an uppity snob into one of disbelief. And that damn fetish could have gotten the three of us in trouble with your mother, she thought to herself afterwards, a subtle shiver coming to her as she recalled the sultry look that Venerana Gremory had given Aiza if he'd been allowed to talk to her any longer. Who knows what would have happened? So you can either tell us what this whole marriage talk is about now, otherwise when Aiza finds out, so will we. Murayama picked up the conversation, tag-teaming their senior schoolmate. Sona decided for her and Reya's and told them just what the plan was in regard to having Eyes marry Reya's. She was also thinking whether or not to tell them about the potential for Eyes to marry her as well. Reya's and I have both been an object of interest in the devil world ever since we were born, and when I say object, I mean just that. The elder devils believe that it's better to keep the pureed devils pure instead of letting love or free will reign. So arranged marriages are put in place. In both of our cases it was as soon as they knew we were female. I managed to strike an agreement with my family that my betrothed needed to beat me in a game of chess to be deemed worthy. Reya's wasn't as lucky. The ones that have held an interest in either of us only saw us as a way to further their own political power ... as objects. So when we were young, we agreed that if either of us found a way to keep the other from falling into this hell, we would. The Kendo girls had eased their glares a little, listening to Sona describe the view devils had on marriage. Katase and Murayama knew that they'd do anything to save the other from the same situation if they were placed in it. But that didn't explain why they chose to use Eyes. And just what does it have to do with Eyes? Katase asked. Sona sighed. I was getting to that. I haven't had the chance to talk to Issei about this arrangement yet. But you see, this marriage would be on paper only, a way to prevent other devils from claiming either of us for themselves. Issei is the best candidate we've come across so far, for two main reasons. The first is the fact that Issei is the host of the Red Dragon Emperor, whose power is both respected and feared by all races. The other reason is who Issei is as a person. His rumored perversion aside, Issei is a kind and caring person, something most male pureed devils are severely lacking in. While the higher devil society will not like a devil being married to a non-pure, they would never think of angering someone carrying a dragon that has the power to level most of the underworld. She said, revealing her plan to have Issei marry her as well, which wasn't missed by the Kendo girls. Instead of yelling out at hearing Eyes being married to both girls, they took the information in and questioned how this was possible. In human society, marrying multiple women was usually frowned upon, and how was Sona sure that Eyes would even agree? And how do you know Eyes will even agree to this? Murayama quickly asked. Knowing full well that Eyes still had dreams of a harem, one that consisted of women that he loved and loved him in return. Reya's meanwhile was looking at Sona accusingly. Why was she still claiming that the boy on the bed was the host of the Welsh dragon? That voice was that of a woman, and D-Drag was a male dragon. Her patience was starting to wear thin. When she first met Issei, she too thought she saw the red heavenly dragon when Issei helped her off the ground, but Sona should have known otherwise once she reincarnated him. She wanted answers, but knew that getting angry with Sona would lead her nowhere, and Sona was not the type of person to lie. So just who did that voice belong to? While Reya was thinking, Sona was still giving Katase and Murayama her reasoning. I do not intend to force Issei to do anything. I merely planned on telling Issei the benefits of the situation, that with being married into either of our families he would never want for anything material again. He would still be free to pursue whoever he wanted, and marry them as well if he wishes. So is polygamy a common thing for devils? Katase asked, mainly thinking of the social reaction that humans would have, since she didn't know how devils viewed it. Sona nodded to the pink-haired girl. Yes, more commonly for men than women. Usually the head of a family, or a prominent devil, will take multiple wives to ensure that a child is born, as supernatural beings have an extremely hard time conceiving due in part to our long lifespans. In cases of a devil with a special line or power, it's almost expected and encouraged. And with what Elsha Levitain said earlier about Issei becoming part dragon, I'm certain more families will try to marry off their children to him. Reya's eyes widened at hearing the name of the legendary Norse fire dragon, and one of the people she looked up to because of her strength and conviction. Reya would often ask to hear the stories of her accomplishments on repeat as a little girl. Now she felt stupid for having ever doubted Sona, who was a long-term friend that never had a reason to lie to her in the first place. Katase and Murayama on the other hand were confused, sharing a look that said they were both feeling that way. Are dragons rare or something? Murayama asked innocently with her head tilted. Yes, incredibly so. There's only one that has been involved with devils willingly, and it was to gain land to grow food for other dragons. They typically hide themselves away, as their numbers were dwindled down to almost nothing over the years. They were hunted by those who feared their strength. Line break. Inside the boosted gear, Elsha had been explaining what would happen to Aiza's body. She told him that since his heart had become a dragon's, he would slowly becoming more dragon than devil. The cells in his body would take in the dragon's signature as it was pumped throughout his body. So eventually he would gain the magical resistance that dragon hide provided, and in about 89 months, be able to produce dragon wings. Most of the things she told him sounded positive to Aiza, except that he would draw powerful enemies towards him, be weak to dragon slayer items, and for a short time would have a hard time controlling his emotions and act on instinct. The biggest bonus, however, was drawing the attention of the opposite the more contact he had with them. And now they were standing in a clearing, waiting for the being responsible for all of these changes. Issei could see the red dot in the sky coming closer with each flap of its wings. He was a little nervous. He was about to be face to face with a dragon. He looked over to Elsha and saw her face was set in an expression like she was recalling fond memories. A few more flaps of its wings brought the full size of the red dragon into view and quickly descending to the ground. The Welsh dragon flapped his wings downwards to slow his descent. As his forelegs made contact with the ground shook from the weight suddenly added. Issei stumbled for a brief moment before regaining his balance, then looked up to the dragon's head in awe. He couldn't believe how big the figure just in front of him was. D-Drag had to be 100 long from head to the tip of his tail, his armor like scales were a crimson red, and had glowing emerald eyes. D-Drag's eyes looked over to Elsha, then to Issei. He lowered his head to speak to his new host for the first time. Issei Hayaru, you are aware of who I am, correct? His voice was deep, and loud enough that it echoed off the hills and back to Issei. Issei nodded, still nervous of the powerful creature right in front of him, the one Sona told him had been part of the reason the three factions have the current ceasefire. Eyes, you're D-Drag, the Red Dragon Emperor. Elsha chuckled from beside Eyes, amused at how nervous he was. No need to be nervous, Eyes, D-Drag won't hurt you. Issei looked over to her, smiling as she looked between him and D-Drag. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly, calming himself down. D-Drag bore his eyes into Issei, his new host. This is the first time I've had a host become a devil. It will be interesting to see how that affects your development. Thinking the words of the dragon were meant in a negative context, Issei asked his opinion on the matter. How do you feel about being attached to a devil? D-Drag raised his head a bit, staring at Issei still, then looking over to Elsha as if trying to confirm something on his mind. Elsha merely nodded to the dragon. D-Drag moved his gaze back to Issei, the fierce emerald glow dying or D-Drag's eyes down a bit. What you are matters not, be it devil, human, or in your case a dragon, devil hybrid. What I care about is what you will use my power for. What is it you desire, my host? To protect my friends and family. Whatever I need to do to make sure they're safe, I'll do it. D-Drag raised himself back up to full height, his head held high, satisfied with the drive in Issei's eyes. D-Drag extended his wings. Very well, partner. My power is yours. Now, let's get you used to your new abilities. Tonight will be your initiation into how a dragon trains. D-Drag said, his tone changing into one that promised progress ... and a lot of pain. Line break. Hayaru residence. A few hours after Issei was brought home, Sona had suggested that most of the group go their separate ways, but also have someone stay the night to watch over Issei. Murayama wanted to stay, but this was the one night per month that her parents would be home. Ever since Katase had moved in with Murayama, she would always find somewhere else to be when the parents were back for their one-day-a-month get-together, so she didn't feel she was intruding on their time together. Katase volunteered herself, saying that she would be staying no matter who else would be. Reya had also volunteered, but a phone call from her queen about a client shot that idea down. Momo and Reya were having a quiet conversation between themselves on which of them should stay, thinking that both would be a bit cramped. In the end, Sona gave her opinion, which was for Momo to stay with her slightly better healing prowess over Reya. And as much as Reya wanted to stay with Eyes, she agreed with Sona's point. After the rest of the group left, Katase had brought Momo down to talk to Eyes' parents and make sure that it was all right with them to stay the night. Eyes' father was surprised by the quick of course given by his wife. He knew the pink-haired Katase, so no problem there, but this white-haired girl was a new face to him. But his wife seemed to know this girl, so he didn't argue. Happy wife, happy life, right? Katase had brought out 2 sleeping bags from Eyes' closet. They were kept there in the event her and Murayama stayed over and placed them in the guest room. Momo went back to Eyes' room for a brief moment, to place a new type of magic she'd learned on Eyes, one that would alert Momo if his vitals dropped or raised beyond a certain level. And once that was done, she went to the guest room where Katase and herself would be sleeping. Just before the girls fell asleep, Katase asked Momo a question regarding Sona, referring to her in the same way as Eyes did. Momo, I thought since Sona Kaichu is now Eyes' king, that she'd want to be the one here with him until he wakes up. Why didn't she stay? Momo turned towards Katase, her blue eyes closing as she felt her connection to Sona. Momo could slightly feel Sona. From what she understood, it wasn't all that difficult for the king to feel the pieces of their servants. But doing the reverse took a lot of concentration. She felt the exhaustion of her master, the hope that things would only get better from here, and the worry in case they got worse. If things were different, she would have, but she wouldn't have been of much use to Eyes in her state. She's physically and mentally exhausted, Momo said to Katase. Exhausted? What do you mean? Katase retorted. When someone is reincarnated, it takes a certain amount of energy to do it, and that amount changes based on how many pieces that person needs. Each piece also makes a connection to the king, so they can feel a portion of what we feel, and it can't be shut off for the first 24 hours after the person is reincarnated. Kaichu used 8 pieces all at once on Eyes. That alone is an exhausting event, and she could feel his pain. Not on the same level as Eyes, but the strength of the connection between them because of those 8 pieces is incredibly strong compared to the others. Katase's eyes widened, hearing that Sona was feeling some of Eyes' pain. She couldn't blame her for deciding not to stay. I see, all the more reason for her to want the next best person for the job. Good night. Good night. Line break. Midnight. Issei's room. Katase had woken up, unable to stay asleep for very long, and decided to grab a glass of water. She downed the glass quickly, feeling the dryness in her throat leave. She didn't immediately go back upstairs and try to get to sleep again. She stared out of the window in the living room. Seeing the starlit sky, she took a deep breath, relieving herself of all the tension of the day. Katase felt better than she had before moving Eyes back home. That concern for his life was brought up tenfold because of her damn abandonment issues. Yes. She knew she had them. and they hadn't even been brought on by anything all that traumatic, just her father needing to go off to other countries constantly for work. And her mother ... Well, she had memories of her mother. Katase started making her way up the stairs, but went into Issei's room instead of hers, just to check on him. She quietly twisted the handle, and inch by inch opened the door, glancing between inside Issei's room and the hallway for people that might catch her. With the door opened enough for her to fit through, she made her way inside, then closed the door just as quietly as she'd opened it. After she felt the door click shut, she looked at the one she wanted to see and tiptoed towards the bed. Issei was turned on his left side, slight sporadic twitches coming from him. She carefully sat herself on his bed, with just enough room to curl her legs to the side and entirely fit herself beside him. Katase brushed the hair on his head, taking in the peaceful yet concentrated look on his face. It looked the same as when he would train with her in Murayama, taking in information and enjoying the presence of those around him. Don't you dare go changing too much on us, Issei. As long as you keep that same honest and kind person, Murayama and I will help you with anything. Just please ... stay the eyes that we've come to know. Katase thought as she brushed the bangs in his face to the side. She could hear Issei mumbling quietly in his sleep, so she leaned a bit closer to hear what it was. Dragon ... too hot. Stupid wings, was what she could make out. She felt the strain of the day taking hold of her, a sudden need to sleep flooding her body. She went to lean back up and leave, but Issei suddenly turned towards her, arms stretched out and pinning her onto his bed with him. Katase made a surprised gasp as she found herself held tightly in his grasp. She tried to lift herself up, but didn't have the strength. Instead of fighting it, she relented to her situation. It didn't bother her too much since this wasn't the first time she's laid in his bed with him. Finding a comfortable position, she moved her arm to Issei's, which was wrapped just under her chest. She gently rubbed her hand against his arm, feeling the heat radiating throughout his body to hers. Then she poked his forearm as she felt something different about him. His skin. It's tight. No, harder. Is that from the devil part, or dragon, she thought, bringing her hand over his, closing her eyes and giving in to sleep. Issei pulled her closer to his body before mumbling the last thing Katase heard before falling asleep. Azaleas, Katase's favorite.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.